Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is part 2 of what Naruto training with Jiraiya is interrupted by an Akatsuki attack. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. Alright, Fox, Naruto said as he knelt down into a half-kneeling crouch, so tense he looked ready to spring in any direction. He was still too wired from the pools to relax completely. What's going on? What isn't going on? You mean, the Kyuubi grumbled. Where to start? I suppose you want to know what those memory reservoirs were, right? Naruto gave an annoyed snort and said, yeah, that's a good place to start. It's called Rutsubo, by the few humans who know of its existence. It's a powerful, if outdated jutsu, the demon calmly informed. Crucible? The boy asked, confusion on his face. The fox nodded its massive head. That's it, nothing else. The Kyuubi gave a sharp bark that Naruto instinctively recognized as laughter. While today's ninja may enjoy making spectacles of themselves by yelling, ninpu, or supreme shining blue butterfly attack, the older people of this land preferred not to announce their attacks to everyone in earshot. They felt no need to show off to their enemies before they killed them. The crucible is a painful test of the mind, so they gave it a simple and fitting name, the demon fox said, with a teasing grin that exposed a mouthful of 8-foot-long fangs. Naruto blinked. He himself enjoyed flashy attacks, if only for the attention he got from it. He should be feeling embarrassed at the Kyuubi's taunt, but he didn't feel the slightest bit of shame. The fox had simply stated a fact and he took it at face value, with no wounded ego. Ah, you're feeling the side effects of it. Or perhaps I should say, main effects depending on your goal, the demon said as it noticed the boy's confused look. What's wrong with me? Naruto asked suspiciously. Nothing. You simply have no pride or ego. Facing your inner truths has stripped that part away, the Kyuubi answered, looking distinctly amused. A part of me is missing. The blonde yelped as he jumped to his feet. A huff of wind from the demon's nose sent him back on his butt. Naruto got back to his feet, but he felt no urge to start yelling and jumping around in an outraged fury like he normally would have. What the hell? Blinking, he looked up curiously at the fox. You see, an hour ago you would have been running around like a damn headless chicken. The Kyuubi's eyes glazed for a second at the thought of chicken, before it shook it off and continued, I assure you, you're better off without your pride. What's that old human proverb? Ah yes, a true martial artist knows how to slay the ego. Your pride was a glaring weak point that stuck out to everyone you've ever fought. Minus it, you can analyze your faults and strengths without gumming the whole process up by attempting to satisfy your ego and getting killed in the attempt. Knowing your limits is far better for your continued survival than making a damn fool of yourself by rushing into situations. And as your survival is my survival, I have to say I much prefer you like this. Naruto appeared to be puzzling over this new information. After a few moments, he looked up and nodded. Alright, makes sense I guess. Though ask next time before you try and screw with my head, he said, with a look of warning on his face. The Kyuubi shrugged its massive shoulders and said, I had little choice in the matter, boy. I merely set up the crucible. It was your mind that decided it didn't need an ego. Alright, tell me what this crucible is and why you used it on me, Naruto said as he dropped down into his half-kneel again. His eyes held less tension as he watched the demon. The Rutsubo is an old skill that forces the subject to achieve a greater understanding about the self, the Kyuubi started, relaxing its forearms a bit as it went into lecture mode. But really, that's only the primary side effect of the jutsu. Its main function is to systematically open the 8 celestial body gates. One opens with each challenge you face. It's terribly inefficient by today's standards, but it is much more focused and far less damaging to the body, making it useful for rituals. The gates, Naruto said, his eyes widening. You mean like thick brows? The boy with the parasitic caterpillars feasting on his forehead. Yes, like him, the fox answered. Its voice held a genuinely disturbed tone when it mentioned Rock Lee's eyebrows. I can use the gates now? Naruto asked, excitement brightening his face. Lee's power when he used the gates was incredible. If he could use the gates too, he'd a very formidable fighter. And with a healing factor that would erase any self-inflicted damage in a day or two, he wouldn't have to worry about conserving its use. No, the Kyuubi answered, popping Naruto's idea like a balloon. Not yet anyways. The pathways have been opened, but you still have to learn how to control them. It would, however, probably only take you a couple weeks to master their use, since you've passed the crucible. Then why did you want to open my gates? How could you even use a jutsu on me? The boy asked, worry and confusion on his face. He really hoped the seal wasn't breaking or he'd be in trouble. Hell, the continent would be in trouble if the Kyuubi got loose. The fox closed its eyes for a moment, before fixating them on Naruto. Alright, I'll start from the beginning and explain everything. Don't interrupt. I'll answer any questions at the end, got it? Yeah, the genin reluctantly said. He slowly allowed himself to sit cross-legged on the floor, rightly guessing that this would take a while. When we fought the cultists, you were struck by a seal that altered the one that keeps me imprisoned, the Kyuubi began, as it saw the boy paying attention. The normal seal is designed to freely allow our chakra to mingle in your inner coils, which is harmless to you. The cultist seal changed that setup so that rather than cleanly mixing inside of you, our two chakras reacted violently to each other. The end result was explosive. Naruto grimaced as he remembered the brief, horrible moment when he felt the chakra rip out of his body, before mercifully falling unconscious. The seal's presence also altered your inner coil pathways, so much so that I was unable to heal your body as usual. It would have been lethal to you, but an opportunity presented itself. For a brief period of time, the containment seal was weakened and deformed to the point where I could slip part of myself out and into you. It only lasted a moment or two in the real world, but in here where time is slower I was able to build a few safeguards before I was forced back into this cage. One of those was a thin link of untainted chakra leading from me to your bone marrow where your blood is produced. I was able to accelerate your blood production dozens of times faster than normal. Because of that, the fool pervert was able to get you to the big-breasted healer and you survived. The downside to the overproduction is that it stripped your body of all its chemical energy reserves. What was left of your muscles was eaten away to make more blood. The hermit also used tourniquets on your limbs and what little tissue in them that survived the seal's attack unharmed was then damaged severely by lack of circulation. So I don't have any muscles and I'm paralyzed too. Naruto exclaimed, panic flooding into him. What the hell will we do if those cloak freaks attack again? I said don't interrupt, brat. The Kyuubi yelled, its voice reverberating the walls. Naruto quieted down as he watched the fox. Really boy, you don't think I of all creatures would overlook something like that? I'm the greatest of the Uchiha and I know more about human anatomy than even your healer friend ever will. I knew exactly what it would do to you. That's why I placed other safeguards. The crucible, the boy said, his eyes widening in realization. Exactly, the fox said, a hint of pleasure in its voice at the genin catching on so fast. I prepared the crucible so that when you woke up, you'd open each gate progressively as you approached me. 3 gates were sufficient for my purposes, which is why you only faced 3 challenges. The reason why I've done this is because unlike that other boy, you have a mirror set of gates directly linked to your normal ones. Can you guess what they control? Your chakra, Naruto replied without hesitating. He blinked. He was catching on pretty fast for an idiot. Did his pride usually cloud his mind so heavily? Correct, boy. You see what clearing your thoughts has done for you. You're still no genius by any means, but you're definitely not an idiot either as long as you don't let yourself get carried away, the Kyuubi said, amusement in its voice. Then it returned to lecture fox mode and continued its explanation. As I was saying, you're correct. The secondary set of gates is to control and regulate my chakra. They're basically celestial gates, but to avoid confusion I'll call them demonic gates instead. Fitting, considering what they restrain. One of their major differences from your gates is that they are much more robust and difficult to open. In fact, to force even the first demonic gate open you have to open 3 of mine, Naruto finished. Ah, it made sense now. Damn, that was a powerful gate if it needed 3 others to force it open. But why open yours at all? The fox's eyes held a definite glint of pride. The changes in the boy were becoming more apparent, even after only a short period of time since his trials. Yes, the crucible was definitely a good decision. It hadn't explained to Naruto all the properties of the secondary effects. The jutsu forces the mind to face the weak or undesired parts of the psyche and to change them for the better, hopefully. Subconsciously, Naruto had already known the 3 lessons he'd been taught by the memory pools. But his conscious mind never accepted them, so his mind was constantly in conflict with itself. The crucible took the portions of the mind that needed to be altered and forced them to the surface, where they had to be faced. Unfortunately, there was a high rate of insanity or even death for those of weak wills when they faced their inner fears and faults. The fox had taken a risk with the crucible, but its faith in the boy's determination, strength, and bull-headed stubbornness had paid off quite nicely. The brat had gone through the trials and come out better for it on the other side. His mind was more focused and his determination had grown even greater, if that was even possible. Yes, the Kyuubi was very pleased with the results. The boy was far from perfect, but he was mentally strong enough now to face the greater trials and threats that lay ahead of them both. At the very least, the fox could talk to the brat without him jumping up and yelling at the top of his lungs in protest at every other sentence. The demon certainly wouldn't miss the boy's blustery pride, that was for sure. I was getting to that, but there is something else I want to explain first, the Kyuubi said out loud, though it wasn't really a reprimand. Naruto guessed the fox didn't mind interruptions as long as they were brief and intelligent. As you can probably guess, my entombment in your body your entire life has greatly altered it. The presence of secondary celestial gates, for instance, is an example of that. There are dozens of other minor differences between you and any normal human, but most of them you can barely even detect. One of them, however, is rather obvious. My fast healing, the genin said. He didn't really like the thought of being so different from other people, but there was little he could do about it. He simply listened to the fox. Yes, though it's only partly yours, the Kyuubi said. You see, while your body has a healing factor written into its genetic code, its basic structure, the fox said to answer Naruto's confused look. It needs demon chakra to work. Not only that, but it works best when there's a mixture of your chakra and mine. In other words, when my chakra flows through your inner coils. The seal that hit you screwed them all up, and because of that, I couldn't do the necessary healing to repair your body. However, the demonic gates are not a direct part of your inner coils like your celestial gates are. The gates themselves were mostly undamaged, unlike the rest of your inner coils, and I was able to use them to force open and focus the first demonic gate. With that gate active, it's now possible for me to repair your body. Naruto stared at the demon for a long moment, before jumping up and ecstatically yelling, yes. Back in business. Nope, not yet, the Kyuubi said as its large eyes traced the genin's movements as he danced around. The boy stopped in his tracks and said, huh. The fox gave an annoyed snort, which knocked Naruto on his butt from the gust of wind. Right now I'm realigning and correcting your inner coils to their normal state, the Kyuubi said as Naruto dragged himself into a sitting position. When that's done, I'll have proper access to your coils again and I can use the demonic gate to rebuild your muscle structure. Normally, it'd take a while as you'd need to eat a great deal to provide the raw material for me to replace all the destroyed fibers, but with the gate focusing my chakra like a laser, the power is so intense that I can simply create the needed matter from my own energy. I can resurrect dead cells in your body and create new ones to replace the cells that are completely gone. It will only be a matter of time before all the lost tissue is back. Riza, Naruto asked in confusion, his mouth stumbling over the foreign word. Ancient human technology. Don't worry about it, the fox replied, not expecting the boy to know what the device was. It was merely an example on how I've been focusing your chakra and mine with the gates. Wait, focusing? I thought it was just like turning a faucet on all the way, Naruto asked in confusion. That's what it had looked like when he watched Lee fight Gaara. For your weird friend and his teacher, yes, the Kyuubi replied. But I know how to constrict the gates partially after they've been opened so that the chakra is channeled and intensified rather than simply being an unchecked flow. Think of it like this, opening the gates in a normal manner is like turning on a water hose full blast. It's strong, yes, but if you put your thumb over the opening most of the way it becomes even more intense. Another analogy would be to use a magnifying lens to take the sun's naturally warm rays and focus them to the point where they could burn something. And if you perfectly aligned more of them above each other, well, you get the picture. The point being to take something already powerful and concentrate to increase it many times its original strength. Damn, that's pretty cool, Naruto said, a grin growing on his face. So, could you teach me how to do it? Yes, but it would likely take months of training even for you. Despite your impressive blood, it's still a difficult technique to catch onto and would eat up a great amount of time. Time we likely don't have to spare, the fox replied. Wait, what blood? Why are we out of time? Naruto asked. Now what? Pick one to ask first, brat, the demon said with a note of exasperation in its voice. Only Naruto could try the patience of a yokai. The blood thing, he said after a moment. Alright, you have an advanced bloodline that is very potent. With it you could learn anything I have to teach you, if had we the time, the Kyuubi casually responded. You mean, I have a bloodline limit? Awesome. Is it better than the Sharingan? Does it look really cool? Naruto asked eagerly. He had a bloodline, and here he thought this day would totally suck. Grr, brat, don't ask so many questions at once, the fox grumbled in annoyance. Then it noticed the boy had barely heard a word it had said and was instead only listening for info on his bloodline. PFF'd, humans and their new toys. Fine, yes, no, yes, and no. The gears visibly turned in Naruto's head as he tried to line up his questions with the demon's answers. I don't have a bloodline. He slowly asked. The Kyuubi grumbled something rather foul, before answering, yes, you have a bloodline. No, it is not a limit. Yes, it's better than the Sharingan. No, it doesn't look cool in the slightest. Does that answer it all, brat? How can I have a bloodline without having a limit? Naruto asked, staring blankly at the fox. It made a rather grisly face that the boy somehow knew was a frown. Well, I suppose the hermit never told you. Or perhaps he doesn't know, the Kyuubi muttered, mostly to itself. Doesn't matter either way. I'll just tell you now. Alright, listen up, boy. Naruto leaned forward a little bit, very curious about the fox's new topic. To put it simply, you don't have a bloodline limit, the demon began. The ancestor of yours that created your bloodline called it an unlimiter. Unlimiter. The genin questioned, emphasizing the un. Yes, it differs greatly from all the other limits. Tell me, what's one thing every limit has in common, no matter how bizarre, weird, or powerful they are? The Kyuubi prompted, playing the professor role surprisingly well. Naruto screwed his face up in thought, his eyes totally scrunched up in fox slits. He sensed the demon genuinely wanted him to think about it, so he racked his brain for an appropriate response. Thank Kami the Arrow Sennin had included mental games in his training or he'd be completely hopeless at this stuff. Hesitantly, the genin answered, they're all specialized. Yes. The Kyuubi bellowed, causing Naruto to nearly jump out of his skin from the blasting volume. The fox seemed delighted. Excellent. I would never have expected a child your age, let alone a rather foolish one, to be able to answer that. Yes boy, all the limits are specialized and dedicated to a certain concept or area of expertise. That's their common factor, be it the Sharingan to the Byakugan to those bug people. That fact doesn't occur to most humans, even those decades your senior. Okay. Naruto said blankly. So what's this unlimited thing do and how's it better than the Sharingan? Unlimiter. Boy, the fox corrected. How to explain this? Alright, think of it like this. If every limit specializes in a certain ability, then the unlimiter specializes in being unspecialized. You lost me, Naruto deadpanned. Blasted big words. I figured, the Kyuubi dryly replied. I'll explain. The unlimiter was designed to provide the opposite of a specialization. It allows its bearer to be able to become anything or do anything, within human reason. For instance, if you wanted to become a blacksmith, then you would have just as much potential in that field as you would if you had chosen to remain a shinobi. You can master any area of expertise, as long as you have the patience to learn it. If you give up being a ninja 20 years from now and decide to become a healer, you'll be able to learn the field as quickly as if you were fresh from the academy. Your ancestor wanted all of his descendants to have the freedom to become whatever they wanted, with nothing to tie them down beyond their own goals and dreams. Humans who bear the limits, on the other paw, must follow a single or select few paths if they want to reach their full potential. Your ancestor observed this and made his bloodline to avoid that. Wow, that's pretty neat. But, how is that better than the Sharingan? Naruto asked. I mean, it's nice to know I can do anything, but I really do like being a shinobi. How does my bloodline help if I've already picked a field? That's linked to how the unlimiter works and why it allows you to choose any expertise, the demon replied. The bloodline is a total alteration on your genetic level, I told you, it's the basic foundation of your body, the fox growled at the boy's bemused look. Your body, brain, and chakra pathways have all been carefully altered to remove their maximum caps. Basically, there isn't a limit to how far you can go. You can get as strong as you want, learn as much as you want, or build as much chakra reserves as you want as long as you're willing to work to achieve it. You still have to train just as hard, but where others begin to slow down, you'll simply keep on going. This is why your bloodline is superior to the Sharingan bloodline limit. No matter how powerful the Sharingan is or how ingenious its user, they will eventually hit a glass ceiling where they simply can't get any stronger. Even the strength of the hermit and the healer barely change year by year. Yours will not. You'll still grow as fast as you do now till the day you die, even if you live to be a decrepit old man. It's really that powerful? Naruto asked in shocked amazement. He's had such a potent ability his whole life. The Kyuubi gave the boy a sharp and piercing stare before saying, Why do you think you were chosen to be my vessel? What other newborn infant could withstand the enormous strain on their bodies that comes with being my living prison? Only a child that can endlessly grow could possibly contain the strongest demon of this plane of reality. Your chakra coils can mold to any shape over time, so it would be child's play for them to adjust to imprisoning me. Even your DNA has altered itself to not only adapt to my presence, but to take advantage of it. Your healing ability is just one example of that. It needs my energy to work, but it was your body that created it. The genin flinched and stared down at his hands. It made sense. The question that had plagued him since the day he became a genin was finally answered. That's why the Yondaime chose me, he whispered. He didn't mean for the fox to hear, but those huge ears weren't just for show. Yes, that human may have been a disgusting, cowardly little yellow-haired rat, but he was a smart rat. He knew your body would not only adapt to the strain, but take advantage of it. He probably even felt that your mind would be up to the challenge and grow to accept the burden of my presence, the Kyuubi grumbled. Its hatred for the Yondaime changed its growling voice into one of spitting hisses. My mind too, must have had a lot of faith in me, Naruto said, as he wrapped his arms around his knees and rested his chin on them. He honestly didn't know what to feel about the Yondaime. His thoughts about the greatest of the Hokages were always a confusing mix of pride, resentment, respect, and sometimes burning anger. Maybe Naruto would feel differently if the man had survived and he'd been able to meet him face to face. The Yondaime had done a horrible thing to him and turned his life into a living hell from the day he was born. However, the man had also wanted him to be viewed as a hero for the normal life he was giving up. Naruto didn't kid himself with self-pity on the matter. He knew the Yondaime fully understood what fate he was inflicting on him as a newborn child. The Hokage knew and probably died feeling more guilt than should be humanely possible. He still did it though. When the choice came down to it, it was either the people of Konoha or a single human child. The Yondaime made his decision, and as someone who wanted to become Hokage, Naruto respected the man for saving his people. In a way, it was even an honor that he'd been chosen over any other child born that October day, as it implied that the Kyuubi was a burden that the Yondaime only trusted Naruto to bear. The boy felt a bit proud that the greatest Hokage had trusted him so much, even on the day he was born. But that still came as little comfort during all those dark, cold nights he'd spent alone during the first 12 years of his life. It was understandable why he had mixed feelings about the man. The Kyuubi's voice interrupted the boy's thoughts, snapping him out of his melancholy mood as the demon said, "Yes, even your mind has been altered by my presence. Or haven't you wondered how you're able to understand a demonic tongue older than your entire species?" Naruto felt a near electric shock as he realized that the Kyuubi wasn't speaking in a growling voice, its voice was growls. The demon was making growls, snarls, grunts, and occasional light barks to speak to him. He somehow understood the fox so well that he'd assumed it was speaking normal human language every time he'd talked to the beast. Naruto even understood the little inflections and gestures the Kyuubi used the same way he understood the changes in pitch and tone when he spoke to a human. When the fox gave a sharp, bellowing bark, it meant that the demon was laughing and genuinely amused. When the beast narrowed its eyes at him and twitched its right ear, it meant it was getting impatient and annoyed. If its whiskers were wiggling rapidly, it meant the fox was excited about something. A whole alien language, and Naruto understood it like he was a native speaker. It had been so natural that he'd never even noticed. Kami, what else about him had been altered by the demon's imprisonment that he was totally unaware of? That's so cool, yet so freaky, Naruto replied in a stunned voice. Well, at least he wasn't feeling depressed anymore. Nervous and slightly paranoid, but not depressed. The sharp, barking laugh followed the boy's statement. I suppose it is, the Kyuubi said. Naruto understood its odd head movements to be the fox's amusement. Anyways, is there anything else you wanted to know about your bloodline? I'm not a full expert on it, but I have learned a great deal about the Unlimiter over time. I thought it wise to do so, as the only humans with the potential to rival my power were the ones who bore it. Naruto frowned in thought, before he asked, there's nothing else to it? No flashy ultimate level or anything? The demon shook its head as it replied, no, but remember that it doesn't mean a lack of power just because you can't show it off to others. It may seem weak in the short term, but in the long run there isn't a human alive that you won't exceed. Well that's fine. It's cool enough as it is, Naruto said with a fox grin. Then he scratched his chin in thought and asked, but, can't the Sharingan do kind of the same thing? I mean, the Uchihas look like they can do anything they want. Funny you should mention that bloodline limit, the Kyuubi said thoughtfully. It happens to be directly linked to your bloodline. What? Naruto yelled in panic. You mean there are two traitors running around with the Unlimiter? No, brat. Calm down before you bust my eardrums, the fox grumbled in reply. You didn't let me finish. I said the Sharingan is linked to your bloodline, not that it is the Unlimiter. Alright, time for a little history lesson, boy. The man who created the Unlimiter was the great-grandchild of a refugee who came from a war-torn land far across the Eastern Ocean. The people of that land were known for their variety and adaptability, which was likely the inspiration for your bloodline. Now it's important to note that your bloodline has no unpleasant side effects, unlike many limits. Your ancestor dedicated his entire life to the creation of the Unlimiter, and it's as much a work of art and the ultimate tool. He spent decades researching and testing the seals and formulas to ensure the perfection of the Unlimiter before he sealed it into his newborn granddaughter. He was old by then, but he held on to life for another 15 years or so to make sure the child suffered no ill effects. The bloodline was a complete success, and he destroyed all records of his work only a few months before he died. With all his knowledge gone, there was no way to replicate your bloodline. Your clan was founded on his grandchild's blood, and it has survived many centuries till today. Though each member has been exceptional in their own right, the clan never grew very large and they stayed out of the public eye for the most part. The vast majority of other people had no idea the clan even had a bloodline at all, let alone the potent Unlimiter. I suppose your family preferred it that way. However, some people did take notice of the Unlimiter's presence and were very displeased. Several decades before the Leaf was founded, roughly 160 years ago, a Hyuga noticed that members of a certain family seemed to have unlimited potential no matter what they did in life. You've encountered Hyuga arrogance before, so I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you that this man was very irate that a small family of nobodies was more powerful than the famous Hyuga clan. This man was so envious that he studied your family from afar and attempted to modify the Byakugan to match their abilities. The result was a total disaster. The Uchiha clan. Disaster. But the Sharingan is the strongest limit I've ever seen, Naruto said. At least it seemed that way. Everyone he'd ever encountered that used the Sharingan was almost ridiculously powerful in combat. It had about 7 or 8 different functions, as opposed to most other limits that had 2 or 3 at the most, and each function was a powerful ability. Sometimes it felt like anyone with red eyes and comma dots inside the iris was unbeatable unless they fought somebody else with red eyes and more comma dots in them. At least, it seemed that powerful. Ah, you mistake disaster for weakness, the Kyuubi replied. I never said the Sharingan wasn't powerful. It is a very strong blood limit, but it is also severely flawed. Flawed? The boy asked. The perfect fighting tool that had everyone in Konoha green with envy was flawed. Yes, boy, the demon said. The Sharingan is near perfect in almost every way imaginable, but there is one serious factor that was overlooked in its creation. The Hyuga who made the limit was attempting to replicate the Unlimiter. However, he never truly understood the true nature of your bloodline. Obviously, your ancestors weren't going to tell anyone the true properties of the Unlimiter, let alone an arrogant man trying to steal it, so he attempted to divine its function through spying. What he saw was an ability that allowed the user to learn anything they wished, while the truth is different. This man was one of those genius types that gained so much favor in the shinobi world, so his arrogance was through the roof. He assumed he correctly figured out the nature of the Unlimiter and spent a great deal of time trying to recreate it. He failed. Or perhaps I should say, he lacked the patience to handle the setbacks he continued encountering. He finally got fed up in creating a new bloodline and instead heavily modified his current limit with the concepts he'd attained so far. The result was the Byakugan became the Sharingan, an optical ability that allows the user to analyze and record an opponent's actions. He didn't figure out how the learning process worked in the Unlimiter, so he did the next best thing and created a copycat limit. He sealed it into one of his sons and the Uchiha clan was born. Now to answer the question of how the Sharingan is flawed, remember what I told you about your ancestor, who was patient and made sure there were no bad side effects. He spent 50 years of his life creating your bloodline. This Hyuga, on the other hand, spent about 6 or 7 making the Sharingan. Obviously, there were going to be things that he missed. One of them was a basic part of the Unlimiter he never even considered. You see, you can learn any amount of material because your brain has the caps taken off. Any amount of data you're exposed to you can smash into your head without any ill effects to yourself. All the unused areas of the brain in a normal human are put to use in you, whether you're a genius or not. And to avoid potential brain trauma, your ancestor made sure to have careful functions added to the bloodline. The main goal of those additions is to filter through information taken in, memorize the important stuff, and then dump the rest. For instance, when you learned the Rasengan, all you learned was how to perform the jutsu and any important concepts related to it. You didn't memorize every single thing the hermit said or the exact size of every hole you made when practicing it on trees or every single sensation you felt when you powered the move up. Not only do you have almost endless memory in your head, you also have a way of cleaning excess junk out. The Sharingan has neither. It's an ability designed almost entirely to record data and dump it straight into the brain. A normal human brain, not one that's been equipped to handle such pressures. Even worse, many of the Uchiha habitually left the Sharingan open, constantly. Whatever the reason for this action, that's what they did, whether it was for show or to prevent ambush or to copy a stray jutsu. Anyone with a high-level Sharingan strolled about with it active and recording everything they saw all the time, even if it was something as foolish as how many steps an old woman took to cross the street or the exact hand motions to unlock and open your front door. Can you imagine what all that does to a human mind ill-equipped for handling such huge amounts of data? Wait, so you mean? Yes, information overload, the Kyuubi replied. Tell me boy, what happens to an overinflated tire? Or an overfilled water balloon? Or to your stomach if you eat too much? Naruto said, easy, holy shit. To their minds. The brain can't handle it and the mind eventually cracks under the stress, the fox said as it nodded to the boy's statement. Madness is a very common trait among Uchiha, but only Uchiha with the Sharingan. As you might guess, the stronger the Sharingan is, the worse the insanity gets. The entire clan had a reputation for being as unstable as they were powerful. They were a valuable trump card for the Leaf when it was first founded and a major reason why the village was able to survive in its weak years when it was young, but over time they became more trouble than they were worth. Considering they were the police force and half of them were nuts, it's a wonder they didn't destroy most of the Leaf while they were still around. I should mention that they were very good at hiding their insanity, at least from Anbu. Their madness took all forms, but the most common symptom was very obsessive behavior. Other shinobi probably dismissed it as a character flaw of the clan. Damn, when you put it like that, no wonder one of them snapped and took out the whole clan, Naruto said. Huh, he'd never feel envious of Sasuke again for having the Sharingan. What good was a weapon if you lost your mind using it? And the obsession thing made sense. Itachi was obsessed with power or something evil, Sasuke was obsessed with Itachi and that only grew worse after his Sharingan awoke, and Kakashi was obsessed with Ika, his best friend, and Hai. Oh shit, Kakashi-sensei. Naruto yelped, realizing that his former teacher also had the Sharingan. Fox, Is Kakashi-sensei gonna go nuts and kill everybody too? Kakashi. The Kyuubi said, trying to place the name with the human. Human names were hard for most demons to remember and they usually preferred a description when referring to the person in question, like, healer, for Tsunade or, hermit, for Jiraiya. It was easier for them to remember clan names, like Hyuga or Uchiha, but individual names were still difficult to place. Describe him, boy. Okay. He's tall, has silver gray hair, and reads perverted stuff in public, Naruto answered. His sweat dropped when the demon gave him a look that said, describe harder. He scrunched his face up for a moment, then said, he has the Sharingan, but only in his left eye. He usually smells like pine trees and rain, though sometimes he smells like clean dogs too. He always wears a mask, which is really annoying, but kind of cool too. He's also really lazy. I know who mean. The hunter is quite a skilled warrior, though that primary jutsu of his is as ridiculous as it is powerful, the fox muttered thoughtfully. Then it said in what, for a demon, passed as a reassuring tone, don't worry, boy. Your former commander is safe from the Sharingan madness, for the most part. He has only one Sharingan eye and it doesn't work as efficiently for him as it does for an Uchiha, which greatly limits the amount of raw data flowing into his mind. His copying abilities are weaker, but at the same time he doesn't suffer from brain overload as much. Most importantly, he shows restraint in its use and keeps the Sharingan covered most of the time. That gives his brain time to process and dump excess information naturally. He still has obsessions, but they are mild and virtually harmless, especially when compared to the Uchiha. If he hasn't lost his mind in the decade or so he's had the Sharingan, then it's unlikely he'll lose it anytime soon. Thank Kami, Naruto muttered. He let out a sigh of relief, glad that his former sensei wasn't going to go nuts. He held some resentment towards the Junin for ignoring him at times, but he certainly didn't wish anything bad on the man. He suddenly blinked. Wait a second. Hey Fox, how the hell do you know so much about Kakashi-sensei? The Kyuubi gave an amused chuckle, which sounded weird coming from a canine, and said, you're only now realizing that. Relax boy, I can't read your mind from this side of the seal. I can observe the outside world through your senses though. Usually it's rather boring, but I prefer keeping tabs on the goings-on in the leaf through you. I also keep an eye on you whenever you're in combat, just to make sure you don't get us both killed. Oh, I see, the genin said. Weird as it sounded, it was kind of reassuring that he had such a powerful being watching his back, even if it was rather evil. The Kyuubi was bad with a capital B, but it was also in the fox's best interests to keep Naruto alive through whatever means necessary. Hey, maybe he could get the demon to teach him some jutsu. Wait, how the hell does a several 100-foot-tall demon fox know human jutsu? Or history about Konoha and its clans? The thing knew more about Naruto's blood than he did, for Kami's sake. Fox, how the hell do you know so much? About us humans, I mean. It's not like you can spy on us, what the hell? Naruto's voice trailed off as he stared beyond the bars in dumbfounded shock. One moment he was craning his neck to look up at a monstrous demon and the next. Does this answer your question, boy? The human man said as he walked up to the bars of the cage. He was just a plain-looking guy, not very tall or noticeable. He was dressed in civilian clothes and looked just like any old merchant or tourist that Naruto would meet in the market sector. Watching the man casually brush his shaggy, brown hair out of his eyes, Naruto understood exactly how the demon could pass amongst humans unnoticed. That was one hell of a henge, if that was the jutsu the fox was using. If it weren't for the haunting double voice of demonic growls and human speech coming out of the man, Naruto wouldn't be able to guess it was the Kyuubi even after being its container for 14 years. The man looked amused at the boy's shocked expression and said, as you can see boy, shape-shifting is child's play for a demon of my age. It takes little effort for me to assume a human shape and disguise my chakra to walk amongst your kind. I've been doing it for tens of thousands of years, so I know all the tricks for fooling even skilled mortals like you shinobi. Damn, Naruto said as he walked closer to the bars to get a better look at the fox's shape. That's scary, but cool too. Is that the only shape you can take? Like a slow movie projector, the Kyuubi changed forms close to 24 times, pausing only long enough to give Naruto a glimpse of each shape the demon assumed. Most of them the boy didn't recognize, but he saw a few familiar faces in there, including Sandaime, Kakashi, and Tsunade. The fox finally settled on an older version of Naruto himself, looking about 20 years in age and wearing a more subdued and mature version of the boy's normal orange outfit. The real Naruto felt a little giddy at the sight of the tall, broad-shouldered, and handsome man he'd grow up to be. Thank the Kami. He wasn't going to be a midget for the rest of his life. So why did you spy on us humans so much? The genin asked curiously as he peered at the fox in man's clothing. His older doppelganger shrugged his shoulders. I kept tabs on you humans mostly to make sure you weren't growing powerful enough to become a threat. Other times I was merely curious or bored. I can't stand to be amongst such weak creatures like your kind for long, but you humans have proved to be a decent distraction for the most part, the Kyuubi said while idly scratching at his long, blonde hair. Then the demon walked up to the bars, crossing his arms and casually leaning up against one of the steel poles as he watched his vessel. I must admit, some of the things you strange apes have come up with have surprised even me. I've seen some jutsu that are so weird it would make you stare like a fool for hours after witnessing them. Really? Naruto excitedly exclaimed. Can you teach me some of them? Please. I promise I won't whine or complain about the training or anything. Can you please teach me some? Honestly, the thought of being taught by a demon didn't bother Naruto much. Hell, he'd been taught by Iruka, Kakashi, Ebisu, and Jiraiya. Did an ancient fox demon really stick out much amongst that crowd? Okay, so maybe it did, but the pros of being taught by it were incredible and far outweighed any cons he could think of. The Kyuubi's knowledge of jutsu made Orochimaru's obsession look like a child trying to complete his bottle cap collection. The Kyuubi stared at the boy for a moment, before turning away and looking down towards the floor in thought. The demon frowned and said, unfortunately, no. Or I should say, I could, but it would be little more than a waste of time. Like I said earlier before we got distracted with talk of bloodlines, we have little of that resource available to us. Huh, Naruto said. Damn, he seemed to be confused a lot today. What the hell are you talking about, Fox? I'm talking about the forces breathing down our necks, the Kyuubi sharply replied. He quickly reached through the bars and poked the genin in the stomach, making the boy jump in surprise. Or have you already forgotten what happened to you there? You mean the cloak freaks? Naruto asked, rubbing the spot on his abdomen. Yes, the cultists. But they are not the only ones after you, the demon said, still casually leaning up against the bar in a cool manner that put Kakashi to shame. To be fair, the fox did have a lot more practice than the Junin. The snake, and by proxy the red-eyed runt, will attack the leaf again, and I'm certain he'll make a point to kill you, if only because you've escaped him twice before. And even worse than those two factions, another group has entered the picture. This one is not just after you or trying to capture me, they wish to destroy us both as soon as possible. Who are they? Naruto asked, feeling a little nauseous at the amount of people out for his blood. Great, not 2 but 3 high-powered factions trying to kill him or worse. Some days, he hated being himself. You wouldn't have any idea who they are. In fact, I'd be surprised if more than 10 humans on the planet were aware of them, the Kyuubi replied, its tone dark and serious. They're demons like me. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if some of my subordinates are among their ranks. The seal that mauled you was a Tenma-fu, a demon seal. They exceed human seals in almost every way imaginable. They possess the ability to bend or break reality, and their only limit is the skill of their crafter. Only a powerful demon can create them, which means we have a powerful enemy. No human can use the seals without a contract binding them to a demonic entity or unless they have a demonic ancestor. Each seal is custom made and tailored for a set purpose. The one that hit you was designed for the single task of killing us both. If you hadn't exhausted your chakra reserves earlier that day, we would have died in a most gruesome fashion. That the cultists have the backing of a demon faction means we are in a situation more serious than I can convey. They may have originally been willing to wait 3 years before going after you, but with demonic support they'll be far bolder. They'll likely attack soon after they learn you've recovered. They probably even have demon seals that can track your movements and will know as soon as you leave the relative safety of Konoha. Had they not attacked, I would agree to train you, as you need to be strong for both of our sakes. With the Unlimiter, I could get you powerful enough to challenge your pervert sensei in little more than a year, but we simply don't have that much time anymore. Shit, Naruto muttered. Damn it, why couldn't people leave him the hell alone? So what can we do about it, Fox? I don't know, the Kyuubi said. He raised an eyebrow at Naruto's shocked expression. As flattering as it is for you to have so much faith in me, I still can't think of any options that'll work. We'd be attacked and killed before I could finish training you. If we ran, they'd simply find us in a few days. They've already proven that the leaf can't protect you. Going after them is obviously out of the question, as you are too weak to challenge them and they'd know you were coming the minute you left Konoha. As I said, I have no idea what to do. Well, what about you powering me up when I need it? You could keep us alive until I'm strong enough to face them on my own, Naruto suggested. Duh, why didn't he think of that before? It was so obvious. Because, there's an unfortunate little problem with me supplying you with chakra, the demon said. The dark, enraged look on his face made the genin back away a few feet. That slimy, filthy, yellow-haired, ape rat that imprisoned me here also left a nasty surprise inside the seal. The Kyuubi viciously waved his hand at the paper seal that covered the center of the gate that contained him. That accursed thing has an extra function beyond keeping me blocked from you. Whenever I give you chakra, it draws a portion of my essence along with the energy and destroys it inside your inner coils. The demon snarled. He gritted his teeth and clenched his fists for several moments before calming down enough to continue. I have no problem with lending my chakra to yours, especially if it keeps us alive, but the simple fact is that every time I do so my maximum chakra lessens. With enough repeated uses, I'll eventually run out of chakra entirely and be little more than a wraith. I'll be powerless to resist the seal's pull and will be drawn into your inner coils where I'll be destroyed. That's not a fate I want. And even if I am destroyed, I doubt our enemies will be satisfied with just me dead and will simply see it as an opportunity to take you out without my interference. As you can see, boy, we're being backed into a corner. Naruto's face had a pale and sickly look on it. This whole time he'd been leeching off the demon. How long have you known the seal did this? He asked in a queasy voice. The Kyuubi sighed as it replied, the day of the invasion, a couple years ago. You drew on my power 3 times that day and I noticed later that my chakra didn't recharge completely. I hadn't noticed any drain associated with the previous times you called forth my power as none of those times required a great deal of power on my part. The more power you draw from me at one time, the more the seal eats into me. And how much of you has been eaten? The boy asked, looking a little green at his question. If you were to divide my maximum power into 100 equal portions, then a little more than 4 units have been consumed, the demon replied. He noted the boy's surprised look at such a relatively small amount and gave a vicious grin. I have more power than I know what to do with, boy, but even that's not endless. Eventually, I'll run out and then we're both screwed. It seems the yellow rat had one last revenge against me before he sealed me inside of you. I suppose he didn't want to risk my ever returning to the leaf should you fail to contain me somehow. Naruto leaned forward, with the shadows darkening his face ominously for several moments before he jerked away from the gate and began storming up and down the line of bars. The Kyuubi watched the boy with curiosity and bemusement as the kid paced back and forth. The genin seemed to be muttering and cursing viciously to himself as he moved, though the demon couldn't make much sense of the boy's rambling. After several minutes passed, it became obvious the kid wouldn't be settling down anytime soon, so the fox finally spoke up. Damn it, brat, what's your problem? And stop moving around so much. You're making me dizzy, the Kyuubi grumbled. My problem, Naruto said as he walked close to the demon. Uzumaki Naruto is not a fucking parasite. That's my problem. The boy emphasized this by punching a bar next to the Kyuubi with his fist hard enough to make a loud clang that echoed through the room. The demon didn't even twitch an eye at the sound, but he did raise an eyebrow at Naruto as the boy sat down. Naruto leaned back against the same bar he punched and muttered, fuck. Alright boy, what's the big deal? I thought you would have delighted in my destruction, the Kyuubi asked, relaxing its arms from the crossed position they'd been in. If it was because me or the Yondaime killed you in a fair fight, then yeah, that'd be fine, Naruto quietly said. He seemed much more tired than he had when he first walked into the room. If you were just stuck in me for the rest of my life, then that'd still be fair. Just the price you'd pay for trying to destroy Konoha. But not like this. It's not right to die like an over-milked cow just because you couldn't be killed in a straight fight. And I don't like being the one that's doing it. I may borrow power to save someone's life, like when I fought Gaara with the boss Toad, but I don't take someone's power. That's the kind of shit that Snake Freak does. I'm not given power either. I've always worked hard for everything I've ever gotten in my life. I earn every scrap of my skill and strength through my own sweat and blood. Sasuke might be fine with other people giving him jutsu like it's his birthday or stealing it with the Sharingan or having the Snake Freak hand power over to him, but I'm not. That's not my nindo, damn it. I don't take things if it hurts someone else. Even if it's a demon. The Kyuubi shrugged and said, honorable, I'll give you that. Foolish maybe, but honorable. I had to fight my way to the top when I was young and I had no qualms about what I did to get power, as long as the price wasn't something I was unwilling to pay. Your nindo is much the same. I suppose we're similar like that. Hey, I guess so, Naruto said. Wouldn't surprise me if we're alike. Before I met you that time when Ero Sennin threw me off that cliff, I wondered if I was you reincarnated or something. Too bad I'm not, huh? If we were the same person, we wouldn't have to worry about the seal or anything. The Kyuubi's eyes shot wide open and his body stiffened as he heard the boy's words. On the other side of the cage, Naruto did the same thing. The boy stood up and looked over at the demon. As that, are you thinking what I'm thinking? He asked, gripping one of the bars with his hand. Yes, I believe so, the Kyuubi replied as he frowned in thought. I mean, is it possible? You said those demon seal thingies can do anything, right? Naruto tensely asked. It is possible and they can do it, but it would be obscenely risky for both of us, the demon replied, his powerful and ancient mind racing and considering all the factors. We can do it though, right? Become the same person. Your power and knowledge. And your body and bloodline, the Kyuubi finished. It's possible. With the unlimiter, it might actually work. Your body and mind could certainly handle the strain as long as we prepared carefully. It certainly couldn't all be done at one time. Even with your bloodline, you're still human and there are limits to how much you can take at once. Yeah, but it could work, right? Naruto quickly asked. It'd mean we wouldn't be us anymore, but it's our best chance to survive. The demon didn't answer for several long minutes as it puzzled over all of their limited options and the possible paths they could take. He had to admit, it was the only option he could think of that gave them a life expectancy beyond 6 months. But did he really want to do this? It would mean becoming one of them. A human. A weak little rat ape that runs about in all sorts of annoying ways. What other choice did he have? Facing oblivion when the seal finally destroyed him. Die alongside the boy and hope that his soul remained contained inside Naruto's as he moved on to the human afterlife. How did he know the seal wouldn't just destroy him upon the boy's death? He needed to think about this, long and hard before he made a hasty decision. Boy, wait here. I must ponder this before I make a choice. I will also need to prepare if I do decide to go through with it. I'll be back in several hours. I suggest you rest, the Kyuubi said as he turned and walked into the deep shadows in the back of his cage. Naruto watched as the demon walked away, shedding the human skin and resuming its natural form as it went. In less time than it took to count to 5, he was totally alone in the large room. Okay. Bye, he yelled sarcastically after the demon. Geez, stupid fox. Feeling exhausted from the long conversation and his earlier trials, Naruto decided to take the Kyuubi's advice. Walking over to the nearest wall to where he stood, he sat down while leaning up against it and rested his head on his knees. Rather than think too heavily the potential consequences of his proposal, he instead allowed himself to doze off. After all, when did Uzumaki Naruto ever stop to think things through? Boy, hey boy, get up. Sakura-chan, I didn't know you wore ramen string underwear. Off your ass, brat. Ah, Naruto yelled as he went from sound sleep to jumping into a standing position in less than a second. He looked upwards into the Kyuubi's massive canine face that loomed over him on the other side of the gate. Gah, that's the last thing I ever wanna see when I first wake up. The demon gave a snort that predictably threw the boy on his ass. Cute. Come over here and pay attention. We have plans to discuss, the Kyuubi said. Naruto dragged himself to his feet, wandered over to the front of the cage, and plopped down on the floor. He scratched the side of his head tiredly and looked up at the fox. What's up? He mumbled as he yawned. Dumbass, you don't need to yawn inside your own mind, the Kyuubi muttered. Louder. It continued, alright, pay attention. I've come up with a plan to merge the two of us together, but to pull it off successfully we need to get out of Konoha for a while. Naruto's mind cleared instantly. He frowned and said, leave the leaf. Why, can't we just do it here? Oh yes boy, sure we'll do it here. Then you can explain to the healer all about the little conversation you had with the giant fox demon inside your stomach and how it convinced you that breaking the seal and merging with it was a good idea. Being a responsible leader, of course she'll let you do it. She might even help you turn a demon loose, the Kyuubi drawled out sarcastically. Okay, I get it. We'll leave Konoha. Geez, bite my head why don't ya? Not literally. Naruto yelled when he saw the fox grin at his choice of words. The boy glared at the demon for a moment, before his expression turned puzzled. He asked, hey fox, why'd you agree all of a sudden? I thought you needed to ponder your decision. I made my choice boy and I'll neither go back on it nor will I explain it to you. Besides, you'll find out anyways when we merge, the fox replied. As I was saying, I've devised a ritual composed of demon seals that will most likely fuse us together into one being, or kill us. I'm not really sure. I've never heard of anyone doing something like this, even amongst other demons, so I don't know if it can be done. What are our odds? Naruto asked, a little nervous at the prospect of getting himself killed in some kooky ritual the demon living in his stomach cooked up. Let's just say, if it's possible it'll work. If it isn't possible, we're dead. That much I know for sure, the Kyuubi answered. I'm a grand master of demon seal creation, so in theory I can get them to do anything. If it's simply impossible for us to merge, then we won't get any second chances. Wonderful, Naruto muttered. Well, it beats sitting around waiting for someone else to kill us. Exactly. This gamble may have crappy odds, but at least there are odds, the demon said. Anyways, when we escape from Konoha we'll head due north about a day's travel, then turn northwest towards the foothills of Cavern Country. There are many large, open spaces within the valleys there that will suit our needs. I'll instruct you on how to create the seals when we're there. We'll need to hurry, as the cultists will be trailing us soon after we leave the Leaf Village. What's Cavern Country and don't I need to sign a contract to use demon seals? Naruto asked with a blank look on his face. Cavern Country is a small country northwest of Fire Country and southeast of Earth Country. It holds the hidden Waterfall Village and is a fairly mountainous region. They're pretty non-aggressive towards other countries, so they shouldn't bother us much as long as we don't go around attacking their ninja, the Kyuubi patiently explained. As for a demon contract, you don't need one. By housing me in your body you're automatically considered part demon and can use any demonic arts as you please. It's part of an ancient binding rule about hospitality and some such stuff. Think of it as a bonus on the rent for keeping me as a tenant. Okay. So if we live, how long are we going to stay away? Naruto asked. He really didn't want to be away from his home and friends longer than he had to. A year, I'd say, the demon replied. The being we'll become will need time to adapt to its new mind and body. We might be unstable for quite a while afterwards, so it'd be best to avoid humans for the first couple months. We'll return in exactly 1 year, if everything is well. You were planning on staying away that long with the hermit anyways had your training not been interrupted. Besides, it'll be good to get out of fire country for a while. This land is too green for my tastes. Naruto snorted at the comment and said, yeah, I bet you're not happy unless it's a barren wasteland. How are we supposed to sneak out of Konoha anyways? With a couple new jutsu, of course, the Kyuubi said. The boy immediately perked up at that. Now come closer to the bars and I'll show you what you need to learn. There are 3 skills you need to be at least proficient in if we are to leave undetected. 2 are jutsu from other countries and 1 is a demon seal that I've created. Now watch. Naruto stood a couple feet in front of the cage and peered through the bars. As he watched, a cluster of fog appeared in front of him just on the other side of the gate. It shifted around for a few seconds before it formed itself into a large, thin square that was about 2.5 feet long on each side. The fog's white-gray color turned clearer and a moving picture appeared on it. It was like looking through a wavy window. A pair of hands appeared in the fog window and began to move in a string of 7 seals. They moved at about half the normal speed Naruto usually performed his seals, making it easy for him to see each one. At the end of the string, the hands would pause briefly and start over again, allowing him to see the beginning of the order with ease. He waited till the string paused again, then jumped in and started making hand seals in time with the mirror. Good. Practice the hand movements till they're totally memorized. I'll explain what this jutsu does while you do that, the Kyuubi said, before going into lecture fox mode. Alright, this skill is the weakest of the 3 you have to learn. Heh, I stole the original skill from the Mist Village about 200 years ago and did a little modification to it. I call it the non-detection field, because that's all it does. It screws up chakra emissions within a certain area of effect, making it impossible for anyone outside the field to sense chakra being used inside it. Meaning you can perform a jutsu inside the field and no one will pick it up with ESP or anything. They can still hear or see the effects of the jutsu though. That Rasengan move of yours couldn't be sensed while inside the field, but people could still hear the wind rushing around it and see the light coming off of it. When you wake up for real, do this move first so you can cloak any other jutsu you use afterwards and avoid alerting any guards stationed nearby. If you perform it right, the move will cloak itself as you're using it, but screw it up and it'll make your chakra even more detectable. There's not much else to it beyond the cloaking function, though I believe it may screw up ocular blood limits as far as chakra detection goes. Naruto didn't look up from the seals he kept performing as he asked, which limits? Like the Sharingan, it can screw that up. I think so, but only the chakra detecting part of it, the demon replied. As long as you are in the field, chakra emissions are blocked, so the Sharingan wouldn't be able to copy your jutsu or anticipate your movement. It would still be able to copy your taijutsu and any hand seals you make though. Likewise, a Byakugan user wouldn't be able to see your inner coils or opening points, but they could still see your organs. The field only blocks chakra and not anything physical, but it would still greatly limit the effectiveness of those bloodlines. Hey, better than nothing if it can protect my jutsu and my coils, Naruto said tensely as he strained to keep up with the seals. They had been gradually picking up speed and were now moving twice as fast as he normally performed them. Despite his distraction, he still made a careful note of the properties of the field and how it affected both limits. Anything that could give him an advantage over either bloodline was welcome to him. Though it wasn't total, maybe they could make a specific jutsu sometime in the future that could completely block the effects of the Sharingan and the Byakugan. He was less worried about encountering Sasuke than he was his older brother, Itachi. The renegade Uchiha was supposedly stronger than any of the Sannin and Naruto would desperately need any advantage he could get if the Dark Man came after him again. Stop boy. That's enough, the Kyuubi said, as it noticed that Naruto had gotten the seal order down. Now watch carefully. The image in the fog window changed to a human figure standing in an empty dojo. As Naruto watched, the figure performed the seals and made a strange, grayish mist move out from his hands and bond with the walls. Now you can't perform this perfectly in here, but if you will it powerfully enough you can mimic having chakra here inside your mind. Just try to use your willpower to force our environment to be as similar to real life as possible, the demon informed as it watched Naruto concentrate on replicating the jutsu. When you've practiced this long enough, we'll move on to the other 2 skills. Now get working. Alright, slave driver, Naruto muttered as he carefully began to perform the jutsu. This was going to be a while. The humans, they is not listening to us anymore. I know. The seal was unsuccessful and now they've grown suspicious. It's unfortunate, but we'll just have to work around it. How's we doing that? I haven't decided yet. It doesn't really matter right now. Even if Kyuubi-san survived, it still won't be going anywhere for some time. It may even be crippled, though I won't assume that till I've seen it with my own eyes. What is we doing then? Watch, listen, observe. We'll keep tabs on both Kyuubi-san and the cultists. Corrupt one of the cultists if you can and see if you can gain us an ally in their ranks. The higher up the better, but any position will do seeing as there are only 8 of them, now that Deidara has fallen. As for Kyuubi-san, though I want it dead very much, it would be best to be patient. After all, it's still trapped in a human child. And mortals are so delicate. We waits, yes. When it's vulnerable, we attacks it and kills it. Exactly. Oh, and don't try to possess the unbeatable. Despite the madness induced by his eyes, his mind is still far too formidable to succumb to our coercion. In our current timetable, anyways. Try one of the others. Now go. I have other plans to see too. Yes, I go. Kyuubi dies. It dies and we grow. I go to peel a mortal's mind. Yes, you do that, little psychopath. It was to the quiet sound of electronic beeping that a set of bleary, bloodshot blue eyes cracked open. They closed immediately as Naruto felt a wave of dizzying tiredness sweep through him. A cold surge in his back let him know that the fox was spiking his adrenaline production. The sensation helped him force his eyes open again. For several long moments, all he could do was lay there and stare at the dull, white ceiling. A not-so-gentle surge in his adrenaline made him aware that his tenant was growing impatient. Slowly and painfully, Naruto worked his body up until he was sitting upright. His entire body felt like shit. Sluggish, congealed shit. He could barely move at all, even with the fox boosting his body's endorphin levels. His limbs barely responded and his entire body hurt like hell, even though the fox had said his muscles were totally rebuilt by now. His flesh had completely healed, and while that was a good thing, it also meant the several hundred stitches in his body itched so bad that he swore it felt like a swarm of fire ants and mosquitoes were attacking him all over. On top of that, his mouth was dry and he had to take a leak like nobody's business. What a wonderful day to be alive, Naruto darkly thought. When he got his hands on that overgrown cloaked fucker that put him in here, he was going to introduce the bastard to the 1000 years of pain technique. Pineapple version. He'd better get started if they wanted to get out the village before dawn. Which was only a couple hours away, he noted as he glanced at the clock. Naruto shook his head a bit to clear the cobwebs out and forced his hands to come together and make seals. Fortunately, his inner coils seemed fine as the fox had worked on those first. He wasn't going to push them if he could avoid it, but he could feel his chakra and use it as he needed to. Slowly and carefully, he finished the seals and gathered chakra into his hands, making sure it was cloaking itself as he formed the jutsu. Hikanryo, non-detection field, Naruto muttered under his breath. Gray fog appeared in his hands and slowly spread outwards and coated the walls. It paused for a moment, before it turned into a thin, opaque white mist that molded over every detail of the walls, surfaces and faded into invisibility. He waited several long moments to see if his chakra had been detected. When it appeared he hadn't alerted anyone, he made a far more familiar seal and said, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. A muffled pop followed and an instant later a second Naruto stood next to the hospital bed. The original took a moment to eye the clone to see just how bad he really looked. He was covered head to toe in bandages, so much so that no one had bothered to put one of those lame hospital gowns on him. Well, it's not like he'd get cold while he was bound up like a damn mummy. His face was almost totally covered as well and he couldn't see anything except for a pair of bloodshot blue eyes. He'd take a closer look at himself when he cut some of the bandages off. Oh well, first things first. The clone reached down and helped Naruto move so he was sitting on the side of the bed. Then it wandered over to the counters at one side of the room and scrounged up a scalpel, before coming back. Carefully, it cut the bandages on the back of Naruto's hand and pulled enough of them off to expose the boy's fingers. It then made a small slice on the end of the genin's index finger. Alright, here we go, Naruto muttered as he pulled back the bandages covering the clone's forehead. Carefully, he drew out a pattern with his blood over the clone's skin. He knew this symbol by heart, as the Kyuubi had made him draw it over 300 times when they were in his head to make sure he got it right. The fox had said that if he screwed up on the demon seal, anything with a capital A could happen and it almost certainly wouldn't be good. It could triple his power or switch his soul into the clone's body or accidentally summon a demon lord from hell or any number of unpleasant possibilities. Naruto pulled his hand away and narrowed his eyes at the seal he'd made. It looked perfect, but he wouldn't know for sure until he activated it. The boy closed his eyes and sent a mental message to the Kyuubi. Hey Fox, we're ready on this end. Good, boy. Here's the chakra and for hell's sake, be careful with that body of yours. I know. You've yelled at me about it for an hour already. I'll talk to you again when we're outside of Konoha. Naruto broke the mental connection and held his hand out. As expected, a faint glow of red engulfed it as demonic energy pooled into his palm. Reaching out, he pressed his first 2 fingers into the center of the seal on the clone. Tenma Fu. Ketsu Bunshin, Demon Seal. Blood clone, Naruto said as he allowed the demon chakra to flow into the marking. The clone jolted and tensed like it was being electrocuted. As Naruto watched, the blood seemed to change into glowing, liquid fire. The lines of the seal branched out and moved under the bandages of the Bunshin. Though he couldn't see it, Naruto knew the seal was covering the entire clone's body and modifying it. After several moments, the fiery red lines turned black like normal seal ink and retreated back into the original shape of the seal. The dark marking slowly faded away into normal skin, much like the seal on Naruto's stomach did. Whoa, that was a shocker, the clone muttered as it shook its head, before covering it back up with the bandages. It reached down and grabbed Naruto's arm and hauled him to his feet. The clone had to steady the real boy, as Naruto's body was still sore and sluggish. Here, let me help you with those. With the clone's help, Naruto removed the 2 IVs in his left arm and let them rest on the bed. The clone peeled back the bandages on its chest, while Naruto pulled the sticky heart monitor pads off his own torso. Quickly, they placed the leads onto the clone, making sure they rested on the same spots as they had on Naruto's body. Both boy and clone nervously looked over at the heart monitor, praying it wouldn't make one of those flat line alarms like they always did in the movies. The machine did a couple weird reboot functions, but after a couple moments the clone's heartbeat was picked up perfectly by it. Both blondes sighed, relaxing their tension. That's a relief, Naruto muttered. No kidding, the clone replied calmly. Seeing that its creator could stand without its help, the blood Bunshin walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. It handed the scalpel to the boy and said, "Don't forget some medical supplies and a pair of tweezers. You're going to need to pull those stitches out somehow." Naruto nodded, taking the sharp tool and wobbling over towards the bathroom. He laid the scalpel on the sink before he went about relieving his aching bladder. While Naruto was occupied, the clone did its best to figure out how the hell the IV needles worked. Finally, it shrugged. It had real flesh, but pain didn't bother it much, so it just jammed the needles in as best as it could. It looked over its work critically and nodded. Hopefully it would pass inspection. Naruto, meanwhile, had flushed the toilet, washed his unbandaged hand, and was gulping down about a liter of water straight from the faucet. Wiping his mouth, he stood up straight in front of the sink, looking down at himself. Through his still partially foggy mind, he slowly began to realize an important set of facts. 1. Underneath these bandages he was naked. 2. Since he obviously didn't undress himself, someone else must have done it. 3. The only people Jiraiya would have trusted to work on him were either Ba-chan or Shizune-chan. He crunched the facts and came to the logical conclusion. 2 people, 2 girls had seen him naked. The clone looked up in curiosity as it heard a mortified scream echo from the bathroom. It shrugged after a moment. Weirdo. Luckily for the 2 of them, the Anbu guarding the door had finally succumbed to nature's call and rushed off not 2 minutes prior. Considering the man had been standing in near mortal terror for the past 6 or 7 hours, he'd probably be a while. Naruto smacked his padded cheeks, trying to shake off the embarrassment. When he thought about it logically, he seriously doubted they'd paid much attention to his scrawny butt and other features considering they were busy trying to save his life at the time. URG, but he just knew Ba-chan would tease the hell out of him when he got back. If he got back, the boy looked up into the mirror and stared idly for a few moments at his bandaged form. Wait, where was? In a panic, Naruto reached up to feel his neckline. Damn it, it had to be there. If it had fallen off or if someone had stolen it. His fingers felt a thin strip of leather just underneath the upper layer of gauze. Tracing it, he found the place where someone had tucked the stone underneath the bandages near his clavicle. Pulling it out, Naruto gave a deep sigh of relief as he stared at the glimmering, green stone hanging at the end of his necklace. It was perfectly fine. There wasn't even a speck of blood on it. In fact, looking closer, Naruto noticed that it seemed to be even cleaner than usual. It was probably Shizune-chan. The young medic seemed to notice things like that. She or Tsunade must have tucked it under his bandages to make sure nobody would take it. It was a very valuable stone after all. Naruto allowed his necklace to hang out as he took the scalpel and began the lengthy task of cutting off his bandages. The fox had advised him to leave some of them on, especially near his joints, but he still wanted at least half the cottony junk off of him. Not only was it harder to move with the gauze on, but he'd never be able to pull his clothes on with this crap all over him. 15 minutes later and Naruto was looking at his mostly uncovered body in shock. An annoying side effect of his healing factor was that his tan faded quickly when he wasn't in the sun daily, so his skin had grown very pale over the last couple weeks. Fresh, thick pink scars crisscrossed his chest, arms, and legs. Every scar had a line of black stitches tracing it. He knew from experience that the scars would fade completely in a few days, but it was still disturbing to see so much evidence of the damage inflicted on him. He moved to poke at a stitch and winced when his arm protested the movement. The Kyuubi had told him that though his muscles were completely restored, they were still soft, for lack of a better word, and would need some time to adapt to the strain he normally put on them. On the plus side, once he got all the stitches out and spent a week or so exercising in the sun, he'd be good as new. He still swore to perform some horrible revenge on that Tsurugi guy the next time he ran into him. Naruto gathered all the bandage scraps and shoved them into an air duct in the ceiling. He didn't want any questions raised, and there most certainly would be some if he left 5 pounds of used gauze strips lying about. He grabbed the scalpel and wandered out into the hospital room. As he walked in, a flash of color in the corner of his eye made him glance up at the side table. And the medical tool fell from his hands and clattered on the floor as Naruto took in the most gorgeous sight he could ever imagine, barring Sakura wearing a ramen string bikini, of course. Orange. Glorious. Wonderful. Bright orange. The color. The shapes. The colors. Man, the colors. It was the prettiest. No, the most beautiful. No, the most kick-ass bunch of flowers he had ever seen. He had absolutely no idea what types of flowers they were, just that they were orange. Wickedly cool. Drool-worthy orange. Oh, and there was a pretty yellow flower at the top too. He didn't really know what that one was either. But the whole thing looked really, really cool. That's the most awesome thing I've ever seen, Naruto said, his jaw still hanging open a little in delighted shock. No shit, the clone said as it too stared in amazement at the bouquet. It's a masterpiece. They stared at the collection of flowers for several moments longer before the clone finally looked up at Naruto. Hey, you need to get dressed and get going. It's almost 4, it said. Naruto shook himself out of it and glanced at the clock hanging on the wall. Sure enough, it read 3:52. He did need to leave soon if he was going to make it out of Konoha without leaving a trail. He walked over and began searching through the lower cabinets, letting out an aha when he found his spare set of his normal jumpsuit outfit. He started pulling on his clothes and turned to talk to the clone as he dressed. You're right, I'll get going soon, but who do you think brought us flowers? He asked as he hiked up his pants. The clone looked up from where it was reading through the get well cards. It wasn't Sakura. Her daffodil is right next to the big bunch, it said, as it finished the card and looked at the signatures. The old man and Ayame-chan say, hi, by the way. Damn, Naruto cursed viciously. I'm giving up Ichiraku ramen for another year. Blasted fox had better appreciate this. You don't really appreciate this, the clone responded casually as it picked up another card. You haven't thought this through at all and you haven't questioned your decision either. You don't even know why you agreed. Not thinking things through again, you're probably going to get busted up somehow. Oh, and Kiba and Shino say, hey. Yeah, look, it's this or we die, Naruto replied, as he pulled his shirt on. He winced as several stitches snapped from the movement. I don't have to think about it. If I don't do this, I won't have the power to survive and I won't be able to protect our friends. And Kiba brought a card. Actually, Shino did, but I smell Kiba on it. He and Akamaru need to wash more often, the clone said, wrinkling its nose a little at the card as he set it back on the table. It picked up another and began to read through it as it said, logical choice, but you do realize you won't be you anymore, right? Naruto paused, shrugging on his jacket. His blue eyes got a dark, faraway look as he quietly said, yeah, I know. Needed sacrifices and all that. I'll do anything to protect the people I love. Anything. Even not being me anymore. The clone glanced up as Naruto finished zipping up his jacket. It thoughtfully watched him for a couple moments before nodding and saying, I see. Hinata-chan and Neji send their greetings. Hinata-chan. Maybe she was the one who brought the flowers. The boy said as he leaned down and fumbled through the cabinets for several moments before letting out a curse. Damn it, I can't find my sandals. Why'd they bring a fresh change of clothes and forget my shoes? Probably because we only own one pair and they were likely ruined from all the blood, the clone replied calmly. And I don't think Hinata-chan would buy something that bright. Do you? Naruto winced at the thought of the poor, shy girl carrying something so attention-grabbing. I guess not. She'd probably have a heart attack from all the looks she'd get, he said. He let out a resigned sigh and stood up from the cabinets. Looks like I'm going barefoot. Hope the fox is feeling generous when it comes to healing. You'll be fine. We used to run around barefoot in the woods all the time when we were kids, remember? The clone said, waving off Naruto's complaint. I guess so, the boy said. He turned and started rummaging through the upper cabinets, gathering up odds and ends for his trip. Think it was Tenten or the Tamari chick? Nah, I got Tenten, Lee, and Guy's card right here. I don't think any of them are the flower type, the clone said. It and Naruto suddenly looked at each other with identical queasy expressions. At least, I hope they're not from Lee, or Guy. Which one is worse? Naruto muttered, before he turned and gathered all the medical supplies up. He dumped them all into his side pouch and belted it on. It was his spare pouch. Whoever had gotten his clothes must have thought to bring along. His usual one must have been trashed or saturated with blood from the fight. Tamari. She might be grateful that Gaara's doing better. She doesn't seem like the flower type either, the clone said. It gave a weary sigh as it finished reading the card from Guy's team. Lee says, "Get well soon." Really? Naruto said suspiciously as he grabbed the scalpel off the floor and tucked it into his pouch. The same person who forgot his shoes must have forgotten his kunai too. He'd need every sharp tool he could find. His thoughts drifted back to what the clone had said about Lee. What does it really say? He and Guy filled the entire thing with crap about the blazing fires of youth. Both pages, the clone deadpanned. It flipped the card over. And the back. Naruto took on a look of slight horror. All of it? He asked, incredulously. The clone gave him a dry stare as it held up the card and said, Tenten had to sign the front cover. Sweet Kami, we know some weird people, Naruto said with a bit of dazed expression. No kidding, the clone replied, setting the card on the side table as far from the bed as possible. Really, they appreciated the thought, but there were limits. I guess that leaves that blonde friend of Sakura's. Ino. Huh, the other boy said thoughtfully. I guess that makes sense. I think Sakura once said that she lives in a flower shop or something. I don't know though, she seems kind of bitchy. I hate to say this, but Sakura isn't. The clone replied with a pointed expression. You have a point, Naruto muttered. He may like the girl, but he was honest enough to realize that she had rather sudden mood swings. And boy did her swings hurt. So, Ino must have left those for me, huh? She has good taste, just like us. The clone looked thoughtful as it suggested, perhaps it's not so much she likes the color, but that she knew you would appreciate it. After all, few other people understand that orange is one of Kami-sama's most wonderful creations. And ramen, Naruto interjected immediately. And Sakura's rear, the clone immediately pointed out. Then it scowled slightly. He certainly messed up with her personality. Although, maybe she'll grow out of it. And maybe she'll give up on Sasuke too, Naruto said hopefully. He paused as he considered just how impossible that sounded. The faces of both Bunshin and Boy fell as they realized the odds of that ever happening. Well, we can't all be lucky enough to have a demon inside us that's smart enough to make us undergo an ancient jutsu that changes our priorities. True I suppose. Anyways, you want to take a couple flowers with you? The clone asked, gesturing towards the side table. Naruto looked thoughtful for a moment, then nodded. He walked over and grabbed the daffodil and the sunflower, then stuffed them in his pouch. To the clone, he said, I'll leave the rest of them with you. Gives this place some style. The blood Bunshin grinned and reached over to orange flowers that were left in the vase. As it straightened them around to cover the hole in the top, it said, You want to leave a message for them? Sure, Naruto said as he double-checked his pouch to make sure he didn't need anything else. Tell them, thanks for the flowers. Man, I can't believe Ino can make such cool bouquets. You know, she is quite a bit more healthy than Sakura is, the clone pointed out. I'll bet you 3 ramen packs her rear is better than Sakura's. Maybe, but her personality is even worse. And she's a Sasuke fangirl too, Naruto replied. His eyes closed as he started gathering chakra for his last jutsu. That's 2 big strikes against her. Who knows? Maybe she gave up on him, the clone pointed out as it watched the boy with curiosity. Naruto was starting to make a long line of hand seals. You certainly couldn't have been the only one smart enough to forget the asshole. Maybe, but I ain't betting ramen on it. Cash maybe, but not ramen, Naruto said. He made the 11th and last seal of the jutsu and pressed 2 fingers into the palm of his left hand. Shinkuman, Midnight Veil. Both of the blondes watched as a silver, metal-like liquid pooled up in the palm of Naruto's hand. The boy let the liquid grow enough to coat most of his fingers, then he lifted his hand and ran them down his entire body. A silver metal line was streaked from his hairline to past his navel. As the clone watched, the metal spread outwards, seeping across Naruto as it slowly covered his entire body. Over the course of a minute, the topmost layer of his entire body was covered in the stuff as it finally closed up at the back of his neck. He looked like a shining, poorly detailed, silver statue. Damn, this shit is sea cold, Naruto said through chattering teeth. He tried to lift his arms to see his hands, but found that he couldn't with his sore arms, much to his annoyance. And heavy too. The fox said it fades, the clone said as it watched the boy with interest. Sure enough, the metal covering gradually contracted on Naruto's body and became skin tight. It darkened too, so it now looked like there was a perfect sculpture of the boy made out of mercury standing in the room. Naruto found that the material was almost weightless now and he curiously raised his hands to look at them. It also wasn't nearly as cold as it used to be, though a noticeable chill remained everywhere it touched his bare skin. Cool, he said, turning his hands this way and that, watching the gleam of the fluorescent lights play across the metal. Then he nearly jumped in shock as his hands faded from sight. In a few seconds, he had turned completely invisible. Very cool. It turned out that Naruto had cloaked himself not an instant too soon, as the door suddenly swung open and an Anbu wearing a cat mask dove inside. The blood clone switched modes from interested observer to half-dead demon boy in about 0.23 seconds as it slumped back and pretended to be asleep. Naruto himself jumped 3 feet into the air and moved backwards towards the window. He winced, thinking the Anbu would hear his movements, before forcing himself to relax as he remembered the properties of his jutsu. The Midnight Veil was a near-perfect camouflage technique that included sound muffling, scent blocking, and hiding body heat as extra abilities on top of the invisibility. He was right to relax as the Anbu barely glanced in his directions as he looked around the room. The man looked about carefully as he walked around the hospital room, obviously trying to figure out where the voices he had heard came from. Naruto had to take several steps to the side to avoid the guy bumping into him, but the Anbu never noticed anything was out of place. Though, he did flinch when his masked face looked towards the flower vase. The man made a warning gesture at it and backed out of the room, never taking his eyes off the bouquet. The door closed quietly behind him. The clone opened its eyes and gave a lopsided grin. It seemed the jutsu was a success if even an Anbu couldn't detect it. The blood bunchen nearly jumped when it felt an invisible, chilly hand press on its shoulder. Later, Naruto's voice whispered from the air next to the clone's head. Good luck, the clone whispered back. The hand left its shoulder and a few moments later, the hospital window slid open. A few seconds passed and the non-detection field suddenly broke off the walls with a faint plume of gray fog as Naruto released the non-detection field. The window slid closed again and the clone knew it was alone. It sighed, feeling a little melancholy. It seemed even clones of Naruto disliked being alone. Still, the bunchen turned and looked at the bright orange flowers next to the bed. It smiled at the sight. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad after all. It leaned back in the bed and settled into wait. 48 hours was a long time to wait when you don't need to sleep. What could it do to amuse itself? A wicked grin spread across the clone's face as it thought about the Anbu stationed outside the door. Oh, this was going to be fun. Leaping from rooftop to rooftop while still recovering from severe muscular destruction and atrophy was one of the more unpleasant things Naruto had been forced to do in his life. His body's reaction time was terrible and he felt like he had put a pair of Lee's weights on. He'd already had a couple close calls where he nearly undershot a jump and had to grab onto the side of a building to keep from falling. Thank the Kami Kakashi sensei had taught him how to stick to things with chakra. The only reason he could keep running like this was because the fox kept his endorphin levels up. The natural painkillers were a godsend. As he landed from a particularly long jump onto a dew-slicked roof, he felt his foot go out from under him. He rolled, bouncing and bumping along the sheet metal and shot straight off the building into the alley beyond. The genin let out a pained grunt as he hit a closed dumpster with a booming clang, and rebounded off it to the ground. He lay there panting for a moment, before he staggered to his feet again. He didn't have time to waste. Concentrating chakra into his hands and feet, he quickly scaled a wall closest to him. As he reached the roof and clambered onto it, Naruto glanced at the still black horizon to the east and took off running again. The Kyuubi had been keeping track of the days and had told him earlier that it was the 1st of May. That meant early spring. The sun would be rising between 6 and 7 in the morning. He had to be several miles from Konoha by then. His camouflage jutsu had only one major weakness: sunlight. At night, he was undetectable and untraceable as long as he didn't speak out loud. The metal skin covering him even dampened the effects of his passage, so he left no footprints and barely disturbed leaves and branches as he moved. When sunlight touched the skin though, his body would become partially visible as a clear, distorted figure. The scent, sound, body heat, and the physical dampening effects would all be weakened and bleed through the camouflage skin. The jutsu would still work, but any Junin-level ninja could track him, let alone the hunter nins they'd probably send after him. All this info had been pounded into his head by the fox while he sat inside his own mind listening. The Midnight Veil technique was an advanced camouflage skill that the Kyuubi had picked up from the hidden steel village several hundred years ago. The ninjas there had very powerful technology and metal-based skills like magnetism and other complicated stuff that Naruto didn't bother to remember. The village had been destroyed by one of their own weapons during a civil war and there were no known survivors. The fox didn't know if any skills had survived to other villages, but it did know that it knew more of the steel's jutsu than any other creature alive. The Night Veil had been merely one of them, though it was the only one useful to them for the time being. Naruto was very curious to learn more of those extinct skills, but the Kyuubi had told him that he had neither the time nor the skill to learn the others yet. Oh well, if the merging worked, then he'd probably be strong enough to learn them. Till then, he'd just have to be patient. He hated being patient. Naruto perked up as he saw the village wall up ahead. A wave of relief passed through him. He was almost home free. Home free leaving his home. Whatever. He shook the thoughts from his head as he gathered the chakra to his feet and leapt from the last rooftop onto the wall. He quickly ran straight up it and jumped to the top. He paused for a moment, to make sure he wasn't going to smack into any guards as he crossed over the barrier. With one last look at the still sleeping village, he took a running vault out into the trees beyond the wall. The leaves barely rustled in response to his passage. I'll be back, I promise. 2 days after her disturbing dream, Ino found herself once again walking through the IC ward. She hadn't had the chance to run into Kakashi yet, as she'd been forced to immediately leave on another mission the morning after her nightmare and she'd only gotten back from it late last night. She wanted to check and see if Naruto was doing any better and to see if his lazy ex-teacher was about. She really wanted to get the man's opinion, but she had no idea where his regular haunts were. Perhaps Sakura would know if she was in today. Sakura was, in fact, in that day. She was stooped over Naruto's bed, looking at the IVs in his left arm, when Ino walked in. She gave a small wave, then went back to her inspection. The other girl noticed the frown on the medic's face and walked over to see what she was doing. Something wrong, forehead? The genin asked casually. In response, Sakura lifted the arm she was examining and gestured with her free hand for her friend to come closer. Take a look. Some idiot nurse put the IVs in all wrong, the medic said, irritation evident in her voice. Ino couldn't really tell what was wrong about the way the needles were sticking into Naruto, but she wasn't about to let her friend know that. Sakura took the genin's nod at face value and set the boy's arm back down. The needle in his inner elbow went right through the vein and into the tissue behind it. Worse, the one in his hand missed the vein entirely. This is terrible work. I had no idea the medical staff was so incompetent on this floor. It almost looks like he tried to put them in himself. Neither girl noticed Naruto's mouth quirk a little. Are the nurses really that bad? I mean, they always seem a little shifty and nervous whenever they come near this room, Ino pointed out. Hell, even that Anbu guy outside is acting jittery. Everybody on this floor acts strange around Naruto. Actually, now that I think about it, haven't you noticed that almost everyone has always looked at him like he's some sort of, I don't know, demon child? What if they did it to him on purpose or something? A strange noise that sounded like a choked-off laugh floated up to them. Both girls looked at each other, then looked down at Naruto. The boy appeared the same as he always had for the past 2 weeks. HMPH, he must have farted. I always told him not to eat so much ramen. It's probably ruined his digestive tract, Sakura said as she looked back up at Ino. And yeah, I have thought about that. I really don't know why people hate him so much. I mean, yeah, he's annoying, but they look at him like he's the devil incarnate or something. And you won't believe this, someone was nasty enough to actually steal some of his flowers. As both girls look over to the side table, neither saw the way Naruto's jaw clenched as though trying not to laugh. They stole his flowers. Ino shrieked indignantly. What kind of freaks are running around this place? That's just tacky. Actually, I think they have a lot of taste, Sakura said as she moved around to the other side of the bed towards the vase. She made sure she kept some distance from the orange bouquet. They took my daffodil and your sunflower, but left those horrid orange things behind. What? That sunflower was the best part, Ino grumbled as walked over to stand next to Sakura. Yellow would go really well with him. PFF'd. Come on, Sakura snorted and waved her hand in dismissal of the statement. Blue would look much better on him. It'd match his eyes. Well, yellow would match his hair. Ino snarled, sensing a challenge from her rival. Sakura narrowed her eyes and replied, yellow would look terrible on him. Blue is a much better color. If he was awake, he'd say, yellow. Ino growled. He'd say blue. Sakura yelled as she got into her rival's face. Big forehead. Dumb pig. Yellow. Blue. Yellow. Blue. Yellow. Blue. Actually, orange is my favorite color. Sakura let out a choked-off scream and Ino's jaw dropped as they both turned to the bed. Naruto was calmly sitting up, with a relaxed expression on his bandaged face. His bright blue eyes were dancing in mischievous amusement as he watched the two girls. He looked very healthy for a guy suffering from grievous injury and atrophy. What's wrong? What's goi sweet Kami? The cat-masked Anbu let out as he burst in the door. Though it couldn't be seen, it was pretty obvious his mouth was hanging open behind his mask. Oh good, you're here, Naruto calmly said, giving no other reaction to the man's dramatic entrance. Could you do me a favor and go get the Hokage? I have something I need to tell her that she really needs to know. The boy's request got no response from the 3 slack-jawed shinobi standing in the room. He sighed as he watched them. Really, what was so weird about this situation? Get out of my way. Hokage-sama, what's ro-oof? Many of the medical staff of the Konoha hospital noted the eerie similarity between today and the day almost 2 weeks ago when Naruto was first brought in. Not surprisingly, both incidents directly involved the boy and the Hokage. The cat-masked Anbu trailed behind the Godime, watching in horror as she barreled through the halls, knocking everyone dumb enough to stay in her path out of the way. Or through walls, doors, the occasional window, etc. Tsunade reached Naruto's hospital room door and ripped it off by its hinges in her hurry to get inside. The Anbu behind her winced, then lifted the object off the floor and set it back into the doorway to afford the Hokage some privacy. He was just grateful that all he had to do was wait outside on guard duty. A door was poor defense against the fifth, but it was better than standing next to her. As soon as she stepped into the room, Tsunade stopped in her tracks as she stared at the boy on the bed. She didn't notice the door being replaced behind, nor did she notice the two young kunoichi sitting on the couch. The boy sitting on the bed had stripped the bandages away from his face and she could see that he looked just like Naruto. Physically, he was identical to the genin in every way. Even his eyes sparkled like Naruto's. He sounded like Naruto. He looked like Naruto. But this was not the boy she thought of as her little brother. Sakura and Ino didn't seem to notice anything was amiss as they tried to make conversation with the blonde. Either that or they just dismissed it as some side effect of being in a coma for 2 weeks. But to Asanin's well-trained eyes, it was blatantly obvious. This Naruto sat up straight and spoke clearly, without any slang or improper grammar. His speech held a lilting eloquence to it, rather than the brash and hectic manner the real Naruto spoke with. More than that, this boy had a tranquil air about him, like he was completely at peace with himself and his surroundings. The real Naruto had so much pent-up energy inside him, he always seemed to be vibrating whenever he wasn't running around. His smile was different too. It was a relaxed, gentle smile and his eyes were wide open. The real Naruto usually wore slit-eyed, fox grins that made him look both mischievous and cheerful at the same time. Before Tsunade could analyze him further, the boy looked up and saw her. "Hello, Ba-chan. It's nice to see you," he said, with a happy sparkle in his electric blue eyes. Tsunade relaxed a minute amount. Imposter this boy may be, but he wasn't hiding any sort of malice. If he was an enemy spy, there would have been a glint of something before he covered it up with cheerfulness. This person that looked like Naruto was genuinely happy to see her, for no reason beyond enjoying her company. That was the only reason why she didn't immediately tear his head off his shoulders. "Who are you and where is Naruto?" Tsunade demanded as she walked a little closer to the bed. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed both Sakura and Ino jolt in surprise. Damn it, you'd think the people he graduated with would know the difference between an imposter and the real thing. She'd be sure to add a lesson regarding that to Sakura later. "Ah, I didn't expect I could fool you of all people," Naruto said with a small smile. His composure remained completely unruffled, even though he'd been found out. Naruto is probably somewhere far out in the wilds of Fire Country by now. He's probably been running non-stop since he left. As for who I am, well, that's a little tricky. I am Naruto, but I'm also not him. A clone? Ino asked with a puzzled look on her face. Every member of the Rookie 9+ Guys team knew of Naruto's talent in clone creation, but to be able to leave one behind while he left the village far exceeded even his skills. Impossible, Sakura stated firmly. 1. Kage Bunshin has a limited range. 2. It also has a time limit that depends on chakra control. And 3. You have 2 IV needles sticking in your arm. No clone can be maintained for more than a couple seconds after taking damage. Ah, but who says I'm a shadow clone? Naruto asked mischievously. There aren't any other clone types that can take long-term damage, Sakura retorted haughtily, crossing her arms in annoyance. Even a clone of Naruto could test her nerves. Who say I'm any clone you've ever heard of? The boy replied. For an instant, his eyes darkened and a red sigil appeared on his forehead. The next moment it was gone, leaving the two young kunoichi to wonder if they had seen it at all. That seal, Tsunade whispered. It wasn't identical by any means, but the seal on the clone's forehead was definitely the same language as the one the Akatsuki had used on Naruto in the first place. How could they have taken him with a guard on watch? The clone held up his hands and shook his head, denying her question. No, they don't have him. At least as far as I know, it said to correct the Hokage's assumption. Naruto created me and left Konoha all on his own power. The group that attacked him has nothing to do with it. Not directly anyways. And to clear it up, I'm a modification of a Kage Bunshin to a much more advanced level. Naruto learned it from his ally. I can take damage without being forced to dispel, I know each of his skills and can perform them as easily as he can, and I'm completely independent of him. No matter how far away he is, if he's asleep, or even if he's dead, I'll last until my chakra runs out. Pretty good diversion, if I say so myself. While Sakura and Ino were staring in amazement at the advanced clone, Tsunade was having a different line of thought. The way the clone said, ally, meant only one thing to her. Kyuubi. The Kyuubi was teaching Naruto new skills. It was also likely it was behind the boy's sudden flight. If the demon fox was involved, this whole situation just got a hell of a lot more complicated. The fox had already taught Naruto at least one rank, maybe even S rank, jutsu so far, and there was no telling what other skills it would give him. A clone like this could be used for anything. If Cage Bunshin was forbidden, then she was tempted to outlaw this skill entirely. Assassinations would be far, far too easy for this jutsu. It was like making a perfect replica of yourself that was totally expendable. Ridiculously useful as cannon fodder, distractions, support units, primary units in battle, the list just went on and on. Hopefully, because the Kyuubi was involved, Naruto was the only one who could use it. If Orochimaru ever got his hands on this jutsu. Why did he leave? Ino asked, interrupting the Godime's thoughts. For that matter, how? He's been totally mangled for 2 weeks and all of a sudden he can go running off into the woods. He should be lying there half dead for Kami's sake, not going camping. The clone stared at Ino for several seconds before it busted out laughing. Ino irritation grew the longer the Bunshin laughed. How ridiculous. A fucking clone mocking her. I told him you might be interesting, the clone said as the last of its chuckles died away. Its face turned serious so quickly that the young shinobi jumped and Tsunade tensed. Extremely interesting. You have a great deal of potential in many different ways, Ino-san. I hope you'll grow into some of it by the time Naruto gets back. He's coming back. When? Sakura tensely asked. Of course he's coming back, Sakura-san, the clone said as it rolled its eyes. Sakura blinked at the lack of a chan suffix at the end of her name. Did the clone think differently of her than Naruto did? He wouldn't abandon the leaf. Not permanently. Anyways, I have a message from him for you, Ba-chan. It may answer some of your questions. Tsunade gave the clone a careful look, before she nodded and said, alright, let's hear it. Okay, here it is, Heya, Ba-chan. The clone's entire demeanor changed in an instant. It truly seemed like Naruto was sitting there now, complete with fox grin and everything. It was both startling and disturbing, like they were seeing a ghost of the boy. I know you're probably pissed at me. Sorry for all this, but I don't really have much of a choice. I ain't gonna lie and say you don't have a reason to be scared, cause there's a big chance I won't be coming back. Not alive anyways. Tsunade's stomach twisted. I have a damn good reason for leaving though. I found out from the you-know-what that stuck you-know-where that borrowing its chakra has some bad side effects that neither of us wants. It also warned me that there are worse things out for my blood than the cloak freaks and the snake weirdo. We have a plan to survive, but it might not work and I need to be far from Konoha and people for it to have a chance. I hope I'll be able to come back sometime soon, but I can't promise anything. The plan is actually so stupid it's almost suicidal, but it's still the best shot we have. If I don't return, at the very least we've kept the you-know-what away from the cloak freaks, right? When I get back, I'll tell you everything, I promise. Oh yeah, I can't wait to tell you all about my bloodline. The you-know-what told me all about it. It's really awesome and I hope to test it out while I'm gone. I'll tell you how it goes when I get back. Shit, I'm running out of time, so I have to cut this off. I'll be back sometime soon. Later, Ba-chan. The clone's face relaxed into its usual placid expression and it watched the gathered kunoichi for their reactions. Sakura and Ino stood with dumbfounded and confused faces as it had expected. Tsunade, however, looked both serious and very worried, though she tried to hide it. The clone felt a wave of regret at adding to the woman's already high stress levels, even though there was nothing it could do about it now. I'm sorry, Ba-chan. He really did have no other choice, the Bunshin said, sounding both apologetic and reassuring. The group has gained disturbing new allies and they'd make another move on him long before he was ready to face them. This is his only chance to survive. Besides, he's in good hands. His ally is very knowledgeable and he's watching Naruto's back. It's in both their interests that he stays alive, so you don't have to worry much about that. I see, Tsunade replied, taking all the information into process later. And when does he plan to return if their plan works? He left 2 days ago on the 1st of May, the clone said. He plans to return to Konoha on the same date next year. Assuming he lives, of course. Ino spoke up then and said, is there anything else you can tell us? Yes, actually, the Bunshin began. It suddenly made a deep, booming voice that sounded suspiciously like Guy's as it said, you are magnificent. Truly a noble creature like you is a gift from the very gods. Only a splendid, celestial being could have crafted the wondrous masterpiece you chose to grace our humble, lowly selves with. We bow to your awesome glory. You have shown us the light and it is orange. The three kunoichi stared at the clone, utterly shocked and with massive sweat drops on the backs of their heads. The clone's Guy impersonation was disturbing in its accuracy. Thank the Kami Naruto had been Kakashi's student. He actually said that. Ino hesitantly asked, Kami, oh please oh please oh please oh please don't let the boy who'd caught her interest be another clone of that thick eyed-browed lunatic. That would be worse than anything she ever went through with Sakura or Sasuke. Much worse. No, I made it up. It's been boring the last few days, you know. 3 loud thumps sounded as each kunoichi face vaulted. What did he say, then? Ino asked as she stood back up and dusted herself off. He said, "Thanks for the flowers," the clone replied with beaming smile. The blonde girl relaxed. It seemed Naruto liked them as much as she thought he would. The Bunshin continued. In fact, he took a couple of them with him, though he couldn't take the orange ones. I think he was kind of disappointed. He stole his own flowers. Sakura dryly asked as she raised an eyebrow. The Bunshin shrugged and said, I suggested he take something along from the get well pile. He preferred the flowers to Guy and Lee's card. Ino shuddered as she looked over at the thing and said, well, that's unders. A loud gasp from the clone cut her off. The Kunoichi all stared in shock as the seal on the Bunshin's forehead reappeared, jet black this time. The fake boy shuddered as the seal began to fragment and fade away bit by bit. Oh hell, the last of my chakra just ran out, it said through clenched teeth. Ba-chan, is there anything else you want to know? Nothing I can think of, Tsunade replied as she stared at the Bunshin. She had a strange, uncomfortable feeling at the clone's impending dispel. She didn't know why it felt so weird, but it might have been because the Bunshin seemed so human compared to a normal clone. Hesitantly, she said, thank you for telling me all this. The clone managed one last smile at her and said, you're welcome, Ba-chan. The last of the seal broke up and disappeared. As the three shinobi watched, the clone's body turned into a glowing red, liquid-like energy. It didn't burst or puff like a normal Bunshin. Instead, it just slowly faded from sight until it was gone completely. The sheet fluttered to the bed, while the IVs and wires clattered onto the floor with nothing to support them. Tsunade stared at the bed for several long moments, before she turned to the girls. You two, not a word of this to anyone. Consider that a law, the Godime ordered. When she saw the two Kunoichi still staring at the bed in shock, she sighed and said, Sakura-chan, take Ino to your office and stay there until I send Shizune to get you. Get something to drink from the vending machines if you need to, but keep the door closed and don't talk about this to anyone. Am I clear? Sakura finally snapped out of her stupor at her sensei's words and nodded her head. Yes, Hokage-sama. We'll stay there, the medic replied formally. She hesitated and asked, Tsunade-sama, will Naruto be? I'm going to get Kakashi and a couple other trackers to follow him immediately, Tsunade replied tensely. I have no idea what his plan is, but considering he left Konoha without telling anyone, it's probably borderline insane and so suicidal that only an idiot would try it. So of course, he won't think twice about doing it. I want him stopped and dragged back here as soon as possible. Don't worry. Kakashi's an excellent tracker and I'll get somebody else with a good bloodline limb. Tsunade stopped in her speech as she remembered the clone's message. A bloodline. According to the Kyuubi, Naruto had a bloodline. But he hadn't said limit. Could that mean? No way. He's part of that family. But surely Jiraiya or Sarutobi would have noticed, considering all their close contact with the boy and access to all the classified records. Naruto would have been given far more advanced and rigorous training if he did have such a powerful ability. Did the third and her old teammate simply not know? Impossible. If Naruto was a part of that family, then those two of all people would have known and done something about it. Unless they didn't want to draw attention to it. That was an unsettling thought. Granted that family had many powerful enemies, but to squander such a potent bloodline was near heresy to any hidden village, let alone the weakened leaf that had to take every advantage it got to survive. Then again, as much as Tsunade loved her old sensei, she still disagreed with many of the decisions Sarutobi had made in his lifetime. Allowing the Chunin exam to continue 2 years ago because Orochimaru threatened invasion and conceding to the Cloud's demands during that incident with the Hyugas were just a couple examples. She wouldn't be surprised if he had allowed the boy to be trained like a normal ninja. Naruto certainly hadn't received any training to control the Kyuubi until Jiraiya had stumbled across him by complete accident. Although, maybe the fox was at the heart of the matter and the reason behind Sarutobi placing Naruto amongst the other ninja children. The boy is the Kyuubi vessel and the people of Konoha would certainly have looked unfavorably at him being trained at heightened levels. But Sandaime still should have tapped that boy's ability. Or perhaps that was what he'd been hoping for when he assigned Kakashi to Team 7. Well, then he should have known not to add an Uchiha to the group, as Kakashi would have certainly favored him over the others. Which he hadn't at Naruto's expense, leaving both the bloodline and the Kyuubi untapped. But maybe Sarutobi had hoped the rivalry would strengthen both boys and given the leaf 2 powerful bloodlines. Tsunade groaned and pressed her fingers to her forehead. This was just like her old sensei. He would make plans that looked excellent on paper, but had a hell of a time working out in real life. Of course Team 7 would fail. Naruto had a foolish ego, Sasuke was obsessed with his past, Sakura was a love-struck fool at the time, and Kakashi had favored the only other person with a Sharingan he'd seen in years. Oh well, live and learn. She'd just have to learn from Sarutobi's mistakes. When Naruto got back, she'd make sure he'd get advanced training from Jiraiya and several other high-level Chunin. She might even teach him a few things herself. If Naruto had the Unlimiter, Then not only would he be able to handle the pressure, but he'd probably be a match for the Yondaime in a few years, and the Leaf desperately needed someone with that kind of power. Yondaime. Tsunade had to resist the urge to hit her head repeatedly into the nearest wall, which would have done little except add to the maintenance costs of the hospital. Of course, there was no longer any doubt in her mind that Naruto had the Unlimiter. The Yondaime had been a smart man, and even when he was desperate to find a way to seal the Kyuubi, he wouldn't have made any mistakes in its imprisonment. He would not have trusted the task to any child except one that bore the bloodline Unlimiter. Any other child would have died immediately or have slowly gone insane from demonic corruption over the years. A child with the Unlimiter, on the other hand, wouldn't just keep the Kyuubi contained, it would flourish with the demon's presence. Yes, when he got back, Naruto would get more training than even he wanted. After she punched him through a wall for worrying the crap out of her, of course. Kage-sama, Hokage-sama. Sakura's voice shook Tsunade from her thoughts and made her realize that she'd been standing still for almost 5 minutes. Yes, sorry. You have your orders. I'll try to give you an update later tonight, the Godime said as she turned and put her hand on the doorknob. There was a groan and the door fell forward into the hall. The Anbu guard jumped aside just in time to avoid being flattened as it crashed onto the floor. Tsunade stepped over the door and calmly ignored the stares she received from the medical staff. All right, get going, she said to Sakura and Ino as they filed out and kept a careful distance between them and the potentially crazy woman. As they left, the Hokage suddenly noticed the cat-masked Anbu as he stood up and brushed his clothes off. And you, Tsunade growled as she stalked towards her prey, what part of, or else, didn't you understand? Damn, and I just had my sandals cleaned this morning. The Anbu whimpered as his doom drew near. So, what do you think is going to happen? Is he going to be a missing nin? Sakura asked as she leaned back in her chair. She and Ino had been waiting for almost an hour in her office for Shizune to come by. The majority of that time was spent in silence, each girl processing what they'd learned. The silence had only been broken once by Ino when she'd gone to the restroom. Though she loathed to admit it, Sakura wanted both reassurance and input from her friend, so she'd finally spoken up. I mean, he said he'd be back, but he's so unpredictable, who knows what he's going to do? What do you mean? Defect to another nation like Sasuke did? Ino asked as she leaned against the wall with her arms crossed. She shook her head. No, I doubt that. I don't know him well, but Naruto seems loyal to the point of idiocy. He's stubborn too. He'd never abandon Konoha unless we were actively kicking him out. He's no traitor. But Tsunade said a weird seal hurt Naruto. If Orochimaru was the one who attacked him, then it might be the same thing as Sasuke-kun, Sakura pointed out. Even an Uchiha couldn't fight off his seal's effects, so what chance would Naruto have against them? Ino narrowed her eyes and snorted. Her voice took its typical sharp tone as she said, 1. Sasuke left of his own free will, curse seal or not. I did some research on them after that Forest of Death mess, and I found out that while curse seals can influence someone's actions, that person has to willingly give into them for them to work. Sasuke may have chosen to use his, but Naruto's way too stubborn to fall for some psycho's trap. 2. A group attacked Naruto and nobody has said anything about sound nins at all. And 3. I saw what Sasuke looked like with the curse seal on him. Naruto's body was damaged in a totally different way. If a seal was used on him, then it wasn't anything like Orochimaru's work. This has nothing to do with the sound, as far as I can tell. I guess you're right, Sakura said, looking somewhat relieved. Then she looked up and gave Ino a sly grin. No, Kun, huh. Don't tell me you've given up on Sasuke-kun, Ino pig. The blonde girl's stunned look caught the medic off guard as Ino said, yeah. Of course I have. Sakura blinked and asked, you're joking, right? Why would you give up on him? I thought you liked him almost as much as I do. Yeah, Ino said slowly, as if talking to a child. Maybe she was. That was before he turned traitor and got 5 of our friends nearly killed. 6 if you include Lee running off after them. But that wasn't his fault. Sakura protested. It was that damn curse seal Orochimaru put on him. Really? Ino scathingly replied. Her friend was still carrying a torch for the bastard. And how did he change after the curse seal was put on him? He kept starting fights for no reason and was really cold to people, Sakura said. She ignored the fact that she had to think hard to come up with a difference in Sasuke's attitude. He even started challenging Naruto and he always ignored him before. And how is that different than what he used to be like? Her friend asked in a coldly logical voice. As far as I remember, he was always fighting with people or treating them like shit. The only reason why he started picking fights with Naruto is because he got strong enough to challenge him. Sasuke's always been like that. Either you're stronger than him and he wants to fight you, or you're weaker than him and he thinks you're dirt. Kami, that was the worst crush of my entire life. I can't believe I fell for someone that screwed up. Sakura's jaw dropped at Ino's statement. The thought of her rival not chasing Sasuke just didn't compute in her head. Finally, she managed to get out. Well, you don't know him like I do. There really was a big change after the curse seal was put on him. It did something horrible to him. Sasuke-kun is strong though. He'll fight it off and come back to the leaf before you know it. And even if he doesn't, Naruto and I promised we'd rescue him from Orochimaru when we get strong enough. There was long silence following her words in which Ino kept her face angled towards the ground. Sakura shifted uncomfortably and was about to speak up again when her friend quietly said, Sakura, one day you're going to realize that Sasuke isn't who you believe him to be and he never has been. Your dream is just that. A dream. I hope it's not too painful for you when it happens. More than that, I hope you're strong enough to walk away from the illusion when you realize that. What are you talking about? Sakura asked. Ino didn't answer as she walked to the door. Hey, where are you going? Hokage-sama said to stay here. For a walk. I doubt there'll be any news for a while, Ino replied as she pulled the door open. As she started to step out, she grumbled, I need to get away from the estrogen waves for a while. Sakura had jumped up and simultaneously yanked Ino back inside while slamming the door closed before she was consciously aware of her movements. She spun her friend around and started to yell, I'm not done, damn it. Where do you get off telling me Okami you're bleeding? For a panicked instant, the medic thought that she had hurt her friend somehow when she'd grabbed her. Then Sakura noticed that the blood was coming from Ino's right nostril and eye, forming a gentle trickle down her face. Fear shot through her when she realized that the blonde girl's eyes were rolled up into her head and her face was twitching rapidly. Was she having a seizure? Some kind of fit? Sakura grabbed her friend to steady her as Ino made a strange whining sound of pain and grabbed the sides of her blonde head. The medic's concern grew worse when she noticed blood also running out of the girl's left ear. Something was happening inside her friend's head and she had no idea what, despite her medical training. Sakura was just about to force Ino to lie on the floor and summon a medical team when the girl's fit stopped. The medic felt a brief surge of relief when her friend's gray-blue eyes opened. Then the next moment the floor seemed to fall out from underneath her as the most terrifying and monstrous chakra she had ever felt in her life slammed into her senses. Sakura was barely aware of Ino's detached concern as she collapsed forward and grabbed onto her blonde friend. Someone was screaming so loudly it hurt her ears. She felt a brief moment of surprise when she realized she was making the sound, before another pulse of that evil and horrifying chakra ripped across her mind. Ino wobbled slightly as Sakura collapsed to her knees and wrapped her arms around the blonde's waist. She felt odd, detached, like everything was happening to her, but not really affecting her. She felt the alien chakra. She felt the terror inflicted on the animal part of her brain. But it merely passed through her mind, like water through a sieve. Her head felt weird, like something had broken or ruptured. It hurt, but not in a totally bad way. She felt like she was waking up and fainting at the same time. Ino tried to focus, but all she could really do was hold Sakura's head and try to calm her down as she sobbed into her shirt. As she ran her hands through her friend's bubblegum pink hair, the blonde girl tried to remember what she had seen moments before the terror struck her. Wind and light, fire and darkness. Two figures were facing each other across a great, featureless white plain. A glowing, blue-white human figure stood tall and determined. A massive, red-black canine form, ancient and proud, watched the other. Despite being featureless, there was more definition and depth to their forms than any physical detail could ever convey. They were souls in pure form. They were what someone looked like when every bit of the body and mind had been stripped away. There was nothing between either of them except the distance they stood apart from each other. Above, in a sky that was as pitch black as the ground was pure white, a massive sphere of energy grew over each figure. One was blue-white and swirled and shined with unrepressed energy as it grew larger. Its light grew too bright for human eyes to look at it after only a few moments. The other sphere was an old, deep crimson color and it boiled and burned with a dark fire. It was at least 100 times larger than the other mass of energy. A blistering heat that would sear any human's flesh in seconds came off the orb in waves. The crimson ball of energy looked almost identical to a red giant star, though its power was growing, not dying. The blue-white sphere resembled a shining moon orbiting its burning star as the two grew larger in size and stronger in intensity. Ino remembered thinking that she was either going to be burned to death by the heat or irradiated into dust by the light at any moment. Just when she'd been absolutely sure she was going to die, the spheres reached their limits and rushed at each other. The figures moved parallel to the orbs of energy and all four impacted at the same time. The backlash of pure power on a level she couldn't understand had hurled Ino back into herself. She'd seen Sakura's concerned face for an instant before the crippling wave of terror had swept over them. And now she could barely understand what was going on. There was an annoying humming her head that wouldn't go away and Sakura refused to let go of her or calm down. Ino's hands kept stroking her friend's hair, worried about her but not able to do much about it. A red blotch on the girl's pale skin caught her attention. Another one appeared even as she watched. Ino wiped the drops away, annoyed at the crimson color marring her friend's smooth forehead. A second, More powerful surge in the chakra wave made her knees feel watery and she had to lean on Sakura's shoulders for a moment to catch her balance. Surprisingly, the girl seemed to be calming down with the second wave. Ino watched in idle curiosity as the medic slowly got control of herself. After several long moments, Sakura finally forced herself to her feet, though she still had to hang on to the blonde girl for support. She glanced at Ino and said something. The genin blinked. She heard the words, but her brain refused to make sense of them. Sakura was still fighting the wave's terror, so she didn't immediately notice her friend's lack of response. When she fought the fear off for a moment, the medic was able to get a good look at Ino's face. The fact that the blonde girl didn't even flinch at Sakura's horrified shriek only worried the medic more. Ino was vaguely aware of being dragged out of the office and down winding halls and open doorways. Everywhere they went, the same sight greeted them. People lying on the floor, screaming or crying in terror from the chakra wave. The blonde girl noted that the chakra had only intensified in the few minutes since it began. The walls and lights twisted and warped as she was rushed along, making her wonder if she had woken from her dream or if she was still trapped in one. It was disorienting in a very bad way and it was made worse with the speed they were moving. Apparently Sakura took her attempts at slowing them down as a sign of imminent collapse on Ino's part, because the next thing the blonde knew the hull was moving away from her. She blinked, then realized she wasn't running anymore. She looked down and saw pink hair. Sakura hadn't joked when she said she'd learned some of Tsunade's strength abilities. The medic was carrying her like she weighed no more than an infant. A powerful surge in the chakra made Ino's head feel like it was being split in two and Sakura stumbled in her run, only barely managing to keep them both from sprawling across the floor. The power was so intense it felt like her head would crumple inwards, piece by piece. Ino closed her eyes and gritted her teeth against the pain as it seemed to crush her skull. She was dead. She was going to die. This was it. She couldn't take the pressure ANYM. The chakra suddenly relaxed and began to ebb away. Ino opened eyes and stared at the white circle in front of her. It took her almost a minute to realize she was looking at Sakura's back and her body was as limp as a rag doll in the other girl's arms. She couldn't even hold her head up. The bright fluorescent lights made her want to close her eyes to sleep and at the same time they kept her awake. Ino sighed in relief when they moved into a much dimmer room that was faintly illuminated by glowing medical machines. She felt Sakura carefully lay her down on a long and narrow bed that wasn't very comfortable. The blonde girl allowed her eyes to close as the last of the chakra wave faded. She blinked her right eye in irritation as the blood began clotting and gumming the eyelid up. A low murmur of a couple different voices discussing something relaxed her, even though they sounded rather tense. She was able to make out a few words, though most of the conversation was a babble to her. She understood trauma, Hokage, and MRI, whatever that was, but she couldn't concentrate hard enough to focus on the rest. A cool object touching her face made her open her eyes to meet a pair of concerned green orbs looking down at her. Sakura's voice spoke reassuringly to her as she cleaned the blood off Ino's face with a damp cloth, though she may as well have been speaking gibberish. The only word the blonde girl was able to understand was sleep, so that's what she decided to do. Her vision darkened to Sakura calling out her name and grabbing her shoulder. She managed one final coherent thought that would have started a loud cat fight if the medic had actually heard it. You shouldn't worry so much, Sakura. Don't want that big forehead to get wrinkles. Tsunade had been waiting impatiently for almost an hour for Kakashi to show up when she felt the chakra wave hit. Its raw power had sucked the air from her lungs and felt like a physical blow. Of course, she wasn't a Sannin for nothing and she only lost her composure for a minute before she was back on her feet. Judging from the loud thumps outside her door, her guards weren't so lucky. The Hokage stormed over to her newly replaced window and flung it open to look out over the leaf. It was like a scene from hell. Civilians, shinobi, even animals, everyone and everything was running about or collapsed on the ground screaming in mortal fear. Though it was still mid-afternoon, the sky had blackened without her noticing and the only light was an eerie red glow that came from the horizon off to the northwest. Tsunade narrowed her eyes. She had never personally felt its chakra, but there was only one creature with this much raw power on the continent. Kyuubi. Something was happening with the Kyuubi. She'd heard the stories and read the old reports. The demon fox's aura played on humans' animal instincts and made them feel like they were prey for the beast. Only shinobi of phenomenal caliber were able to resist its effects. As if the fox hadn't been strong enough to begin with that day 14 years ago, its mere presence had been enough to cripple almost 3/4 of Konoha's forces. Only the strongest of the Junin and Anbu had been able to effectively fight alongside the Yondaime. The rest had been sitting ducks. No wonder most of them held a grudge against Naruto. Shinobi instinctively dislike and hate two major things: being helpless and anything stronger than them. The boy was a living reminder of both. Even when a second, stronger wave of chakra ripped across her senses as a halo of light of blue-white rippled across the sky from the northwest. Tsunade's eyes widened in shock. She knew that chakra. Naruto. What the hell was he doing with the Kyuubi? This was their plan. All they're doing so far is giving everyone in the leaf panic attacks. Perhaps with the addition of the boy's chakra to the Kyuubi's, maybe anyone who was familiar with him was able to fight off the effects of the wave. It certainly made it easier for her to withstand it. A couple minutes later, the door banged open and Kakashi rushed inside. Nice of you to join me, Tsunade growled in a manner that made the Junin almost as nervous as the chakra wave. That's Kyuubi. What's going on? I thought Naruto was in the hospital. Kakashi demanded, his eye visibly worried. If you had shown up when I told you to, you would know that not only did Naruto escape 2 days ago, but he and the Kyuubi are planning some damn fool stunt out in the backwoods of Fire Country. Which they just managed to do, the Hokage said with a strong note of reprimand. Noticing the man didn't respond to her implied criticism, she grumbled a curse and said, your orders are to take the Nara boy and Guy's Hyuga kid to go and investigate. If Guy himself doesn't have a mission, take him too as backup. I want Naruto found. I want to know what the hell he just did, and I want to know as fast as you and your little doggies can run. Now get moving. Kakashi nodded and turned to run back out the door. The Hokage's voice calling his name stopped him just as he made it to the doorway. And Hataki-san, if you ever ignore me again when I send for you, I'll have you stripped to Chunin and made Yumino-san's assistant, Tsunade said in an icy monotone that showed she was deadly serious. I don't care how guilty you feel about your dead friend, it's not to interfere with your work. You're an elite Junin of the Leaf and you will obey your commander's orders immediately and not whenever you feel like it. If you want to stare at the memorial for hours, do it on your time off. Is that clear? Kakashi wasn't as much surprised that she knew about Obito as he was that she had said anything about it. The third had simply ignored his tardy habit or laughed at Kakashi's lame excuses. Then again, many people made the mistake of thinking Tsunade was anything like Sarutobi and everyone who did wished they hadn't after the fifth got through with them. It not like he enjoyed it or anything. He just couldn't help but think about his friend and stare at the marker for hours. On the other hand, if he kept it up he was going to wind up Iruka's assistant. The mere thought of such a thing made a quiver of fear race up his spine and it had nothing to do with the terror wave. He had no idea what was scarier. This woman angry at him or that man as his boss. He was getting shivers thinking about either of them. Yes, Hokage-sama, the Junin said, before making a hasty exit. Kakashi would rather face that damn fox than those two any day. Konoha wasn't the only place that felt the terror wave, as survivors of the Kyuubi's original assault quickly came to call it. The hidden sound and waterfall were hit by its intensity hard, as they were closest in proximity to it. In fact, the residents of the sound finally discovered something that terrified them even more than their master. Sasuke woke up after a post-training nap to blindly thrash about his room for several minutes before winding up on the floor. The feel of the second chakra in the wave both horrified and enraged him. Just the thought of Naruto having anything to do with that kind of power set his teeth on edge. He was still cursing the boy's name when Kabuto came to get him 10 minutes later. Elsewhere, Yumino Iruka had been traveling home from the mission in Wind Country he'd left for weeks ago. He was eager to get back to Konoha to check on Naruto and to get back to his classes. One moment he was hurrying along and the next he was on the ground, feeling the same nightmarish presence that had haunted him for 14 years. Memories of the sight of the demon and the death of his parents had crippled him until he felt the second chakra wave. Recognizing Naruto's energy, the Chunin had collected himself, then started running as fast as he could to Konoha with the other members of his team lagging behind. Further away, but way too far inside Fire Country's borders for anyone's comfort, a pair of blood-red eyes watched the glow with interest. The figure was one of two beings that didn't even flinch at the power of the chakra. In fact, this individual seemed almost pleased at the strength of the wave. If one had looked closely, one might have noticed the briefest ghost of a twitch at the corner of the man's mouth. But since the expression, and the man, was gone the next moment, one couldn't tell for certain if it was there at all. And finally, far to the south, one other person stood and watched the strange light show over the forests of Fire Country. A pair of frost-green eyes didn't even blink at the intensity of the chakra, though they did watch with curiosity. When the second wave pulsed, the figure stood up straighter and grabbed the large gourd sitting next to him. He calmly leapt off the sand-blasted ruins he'd been perched on towards the dusty ground. As he neared the desert floor, a wave of sand rose up and caught him, then moved off to the north at very high speeds with the figure riding it like a cross between a chariot racer and a surfer. Something was happening to the one who'd pulled him from the darkness and he didn't appreciate it one bit. He intended to be the first one there to assist the Uzumaki boy if he needed help. After all, it would be fitting for Gaara to return the favor. Hatake Kakashi was not in a happy mood. Okay, a more accurate description would be Kakashi's pissed. His eye tracked his summoned nin dog, an odd pug by the name of Pakun, as the little canine stopped for the 15th or 16th time in the past hour to pick up the trail. Which he had lost. Again. They had to stop. Again. Naruto had tricked them. Again. Yeah. Kakashi was pissed. Damn it. Lost it again. Huh. Nara Shikamaru grumbled in annoyance as he landed next to the copy nin while they waited for the dog to pick up the scent. When the hell did Naruto of all people learn to cover his tracks? I thought you said Jiraiya-sama was only teaching him combat and mental skills, not evasion tricks good enough to fool hunter nins. He didn't learn this from Jiraiya, Kakashi replied as he watched Pakun. Behind them, Hyuga Neji and Maida Guy landed on the soft forest floor. He has a partner, for lack of a better word, that probably knows more jutsu than any hidden village. Maybe even 2 hidden villages combined. This is child's play for Naruto's ally. His partner, Neji coolly asked as he walked up next to them. His Byakugan was active and the veins jutting out on his face made him look like he was in danger of a stroke. The fact that he was breathing hard only added to the impression. Who would be working with him? And who is skilled enough to evade the Anbu guards while assisting in his escape from Konoha? His ally is more than skin deep, Kakashi muttered as he thoughtfully eyed the surrounding forest. It is also likely responsible for Naruto's sudden departure. I saw how injured he was, Kakashi-sensei, Neji replied as he finally shut down his blood limit and panted from exertion. Unless this partner was carrying him, there's no way Naruto could have left on his own power. He certainly shouldn't be responsible for that wave we felt. Naruto-kun is far stronger and more resilient than he appears, Neji-kun, Guy answered as he approached his student and offered him a canteen. The Hyuga eyed it for a moment, before taking it and gratefully draining half in one go. He also has a habit of finding resources in unexpected places and performing seemingly impossible feats. You of all people should know that. I still get the impression you aren't telling us something, Shikamaru grumbled as he turned to look back at the 2 shinobi. You and all the other Junin were acting like the devil himself came back to town. We all felt that freaky-ass chakra wave, but you older guys seem to recognize it from somewhere. It'd be smarter and less troublesome in the long run if you just told us now rather than beating around the bush. Guy gave a near inaudible sigh as he watched his rival. Kakashi's shoulders had a stiffness to them that was out of the norm for the laid-back ninja. He knew this was hard on the man. Not only was one of his former students in serious trouble and most likely dead or worse, but the chakra wave was probably dragging up unpleasant memories of the Yondaime's death. Kakashi carried large burden of survivor's guilt from that day, though he had dealt with it better than he had Obito's loss. The copy ninja had been tense and irritable from the minute they'd left Konoha, and the frustration caused by trying to track Naruto's well-hidden trail wasn't helping matters. Guy himself was acting far more reserved than he usually did, both from the fresh memory of the chakra wave and his rival's somber mood. It had been almost a full day since they'd left Konoha. The red glow had been still on the northwestern horizon, so they'd quickly headed towards it. Kakashi had summoned a few of his nin dogs and set them out ahead to find the trail, and they'd started off at a good pace. Until the dogs came back with the message that there was no trail to follow. While the copy ninja had been debating this turn of events with his summons, Neji had activated his Byakugan and used the telescopic and X-ray abilities to scan the ground over a distance. Gradually, he was able to pick up slight irregularities in the forest that led to the northwest. A bent twig here, several meters later a depression in the mud there, and the occasional disturbed brush slowly made the trail apparent to his vision when he lined them all up over a great distance. When the boy had told Kakashi, the Junin had promptly ordered him to take the lead and dispelled all his dogs except Pakun. However, even with his blood limit, Neji still had a hell of a time keeping the trail. They had to stop every few minutes for him to line up the path again. Apparently, Naruto wasn't just satisfied with covering his tracks and had apparently run around in all directions like the hyper freak he was, leading them on a wild goose chase for half a day. Unfortunately, they'd been forced to stick to following the trail no matter where it led, as the glow from the horizon had long since faded and northwestern fire country was a lot of ground to cover. Then they'd caught a break. Pakun picked up the scent 5 hours into the trip. Kakashi would have been a lot more pleased had they not been a measly 2 hours out from the village as the crow flies. As it was, with both Pug and Hyuga tracking it, the trail became considerably easier to follow. The farther they got out from Konoha, the easier it became to track Naruto. 7 hours straight out from the village and it seemed the boy was just getting sloppy. Even Shikamaru was easily following his footprints and the lazy boy had no advanced training in tracking whatsoever. Pakun was unerringly following the course and Neji was able to give his eyes a needed break. Half a day of constant Byakugan use and non-stop running were straining his reserves. The trail was becoming easier to keep to, as Naruto had apparently given up on running all over the place and had gone into a dead run. Both Guy and Shikamaru made amazed comments as they looked at the boy's stride and jump lengths. They all knew the blonde was a stamina freak, but to keep running at top speed for hours after just getting out of the hospital. That was just ridiculous. Kakashi kept his opinion on the matter to himself, though he did pick up his own pace. They started making good time. Until they hit a snag about 14 hours straight out from the village. The trail was vanishing again. The scent disappeared the further they advanced, the footprints faded, and the other little signs of disturbance became as scarce as when they had first started. Neji had to activate his Byakugan again for them to get anywhere and was starting to lag in his pace from the constant chakra exertion. So now here they were, in a small clearing in the middle of the woods of northern Fire Country with the lot of them gawking at the trees like idiots. It felt like there was a big sign above their heads that said, "Sucker." In Naruto's hideous handwriting, Shikamaru half expected to see, "Kick me," scrawled on the backs of his fellow shinobi. If the situation weren't so serious, he'd have bet his life savings that this whole mess was an elaborate prank played on them by the loud blonde. He wasn't reassured by the thought of their quarry having an accomplice. This talk of an ally worried him. He wasn't genius for nothing, after all. "Well, are you guys gonna tell us?" the lazy Nara asked, as he crossed his arms over his flak jacket. Kakashi didn't reply as he continued focusing on the surrounding forest. Guy frowned thoughtfully and said, "Rival, I know it's the big rule, but in this case, I'm not breaking the Sandame's law unless it's life or death." Guy, the copy ninja interrupted in a cold voice. "I expect you to do the same. And my point is, if we encounter Naruto and he's been influenced by his ally, then it will be life or death," Guy replied in a firm tone, not intimidated in the slightest at Kakashi's attitude. "You should know, considering you were the one who told me about the boy's abilities." The copy nin went dead quiet for several moments as he considered the taijutsu master's words. At length, he sighed and said, "Well, Hokage-sama isn't happy with me as it is, so what's breaking the big rule on top of it? Tell them. We'll take responsibility for it when we get back." Pakun finally stopped sniffing around and nodded at Kakashi. "Tell them as we move." Pakun's found the trail again, the Junin said as he jumped into the trees with the dog. Guy motioned for the two Chunin to follow as he leapt after his rival. When they were moving at a decent clip again, Shikamaru looked over to Guy and asked, "Why would the third make a law involving Naruto?" The Tai expert frowned as he did a casual side flip to follow a sudden change in direction by Kakashi. How to put this to them? After a minute or so of thinking, he said, "Tell me, what do you two know about the Kyuubi no Kitsune? Is he going to be alright, Tsunade-sama?" Shizune asked as she set down a tray laden with a light lunch and tea on the Hokage's desk. Tsunade didn't answer for a couple moments as she stared out the window of her office. Her student frowned a little and walked around to gently lay a hand on the woman's shoulder. "Tsunade-sama." The Hokage jerked suddenly and became a blur of motion that ended with her fist halted an inch from Shizune's face. The younger medic flinched in surprise, but made no move to back away as Tsunade shakily sat back down in her chair. "Or maybe I should be asking, are you going to be alright?" Shizune gently said as she poured some tea for her mentor and handed it to her. A loud shrock sound echoed through the large office as the Hokage accidentally crushed the cup into wet porcelain mush. "Damn it, what's wrong with me today?" Tsunade asked, as she glared down at her hands. She almost jerked in surprise again when Shizune carefully pried her hand open and wiped it clean with a hand towel. "I'd say you're worried about Naruto-kun," the young medic calmly replied. "I'd be worried too if someone that close to me was involved in that chakra wave. You managed to sneak up on me and I nearly punched you through the wall, Shizune-kun," the fifth angrily said as the young woman wiped the tea off the floor. "That's more than a little worried." "You didn't hit me though," Shizune replied with a slight smile as she set the grungy towel aside. She pointed at the large, jagged holes scattered about in the walls and the ceiling of the room. "Unlike the Anbu that continue to bother you for some suicidal reason." Tsunade let out a tired chuckle even as she sweat dropped. She said, "Well, I happen to like the extra light in here and the fresh breeze feels nice." Of course, Shizune deadpanned, bringing a surprised smile to the Hokage's face at her student's sudden bout of dry humor. "It has nothing to do with the council and the Anbu commander's repeated demands for you to see them." The fifth's expression darkened as she said, "If those fools want an audience then they damn well better show up here in person. I'm the Godime Hokage and I'm in charge of this backwater dump of a village. Sending a couple lackeys to fetch me because they feel they're too important to walk over here themselves is not something I'll tolerate. It's a good thing I left the leaf when I did all those years ago, because if I had caught any of them treating Sarutobi-sensei like this I would have started a bloodbath. He may have put up with their crap, but it'll be a frosty day in hell before I will. When they have the balls to show up in person, then I'll deal with them." "Are you sure that's wise?" Shizune calmly pointed out as she half sat on the edge of the Hokage's desk. "This can be considered a crisis, with the ninja ranks and the civilians panicking. It may only add needless strife to the situation." Tsunade snorted as her scowl deepened, though it wasn't directed at her student. 1. If they can't handle themselves in the middle of a minor crisis like this, then they're dead the next time the sound invades. With an idiot for a commander, it's no wonder the Anbu take such heavy casualties all the time. The council is mostly filled with bureaucratic, simpering old fools. I'm not surprised the stigma regarding Naruto was tolerated, if they kept interfering with Sarutobi-sensei's protective actions, she began as she leaned back and ticked off the points with her fingers. 2. They need to learn to come to me only if a situation is impossible. The Hokage is not on errand call for any official who wants their hand held. 3. If the chain of command isn't clearly established now, then it could get us killed during a real emergency. I don't care if I bruise some egos or bust some heads if it keeps us all alive in the long run. I have more important problems to worry about than spending my time reassuring a bunch of prejudiced idiots. And you don't want to hear what they have to say on this matter, Shizune said as she watched the Hokage. Tsunade stiffened for a moment, before she replied, I can't fool you, can I? No, I don't want to hear what they have to say. I already know what they want. To declare Naruto-kun a missing nin and to have him hunted down, her student finished for her dark eyes downcast. Not if I can help it, Tsunade growled. He's coming back. He gave his word. He'll be back the 1st of May next year or he'll be dead. For Naruto, it's as simple as that. But if both the council majority and the Anbu commander stand against you on this, you won't have a choice, Shizune countered with a worried tone. That was a law made by the first to avoid being forced to follow poor leadership if the Hokage is acting foolishly or is growing senile, the Godime interrupted. Yes, I know that. But my grandfather also set it up so they can't completely overrule the Hokage. Otherwise, what's the point in having a cage at all if the supreme leader can be bossed around? Anyways, if Naruto is declared a missing nin, I'll just make sure he isn't high on anyone's priorities and give him a chance to come home without getting killed. So, no hostilities, orders and maybe AC rank. The younger of the medics replied, with a resigned yet hopeful tone. Tsunade gritted her teeth and pressed her fingers to her forehead while she said, I don't think I'll be able to pull that off. Naruto has learned both a jutsu from the Forbidden Scroll and a rare A-rank battle technique. Not only that, but he's been a Sanin's personal student for the past year and a half. We unfortunately added all those facts to his official record when he first left after that Uchiha brat's defection. A training trip can be declared an extended mission with my approval so a nin can keep receiving pay, but the standard procedure is to update the shinobi's profile before they leave. It's for security and it's normally a good thing, but in this case all the commander will have to do is look at Naruto's file to know he's no ordinary genin. And that's before we get into the whole mess with Kyuubi. Wait, does the profile say he knows the fourth's technique? Shizune tensely asked. If it got out that Naruto knew the personal jutsu of the legendary Yondaime. No, I made sure it was put in as a general A-rank jutsu, Tsunade firmly replied, much to her student's relief. Naruto is already known as the Yondaime's legacy. I want to avoid as much connection between the two as possible until the time is right, especially where the council is concerned. Why? Shizune asked curiously. At the Hokage's steady stare, she suddenly realized, your replacement. You want Naruto-kun to take over as Hokage when you retire. Tsunade nodded and said, Naruto would make a perfect Rokudime with a few years of seasoning and heavy training. It's come to my attention that he has an ability that gives him the potential to exceed even the Yondaime. On top of that, he also has the Kyuubi. If he wants it badly enough, Naruto could exceed any human on the continent. A dark, weary expression spread across the Hokage's face as she muttered, the leaf needs somebody with that kind of power. But Tsunade-sama, you're one of the three, Shizune said, a concerned look on her face as she watched her mentor. Even Orochimaru hesitates to attack Konoha with you and Jiraiya-sama here. That's what this whole psychological campaign of his is about, right? Partially, though I think he wants to wear us down in a war of attrition before taking us head on again, Tsunade replied. She leaned back in her chair, her position unintentionally emphasizing her bountiful assets. Shizune glanced away with a bit of a blush as her mentor continued, Orochimaru hesitates for now, but that's more because he wants to finish us all off all at once in one of his elaborate schemes. He doesn't fear me or Jiraiya anymore. If he were in his old body, I would have about an even chance at beating him and Jiraiya would rip him apart. It would be costly, but we'd almost certainly win. However, with that kin jutsu of his, he has all of his knowledge and skill put into a brand new and fresh body. He doesn't have to hold back in the slightest or worry about the price his body pays for using his jutsu like I do. Jiraiya and I are powerful, but we're getting older. Orochimaru isn't. The two of us together could still beat him, but it'd likely cost us our lives. And that's where Naruto-kun comes into play. Shizune asked as she poured herself a cup of the still warm tea. Yes and no, Tsunade replied as she stared up at the ceiling. Naruto can exceed even the Yondaime. Only 4 or 5 people in the last century can brag that potential. The fourth even kicked the shit out of Orochimaru once for insulting Jiraiya. I spent about 3 hours piecing Orochimaru back together afterwards. Yondaime walked away without a scratch. And if Naruto can exceed even him, then only a suicidal fool would challenge the leaf, her student finished. Shizune stared down at her cup for a moment before she said, and you want him here, where you or Jiraiya can watch over him to teach him how to be the leader we need. Exactly, the Godime said as she leaned forward enough to look at her apprentice. If those idiots on the council had their way, they would have him killed or driven out of the village, probably right into the arms of one of our enemies. They already know Naruto is determined to become Hokage, but if it got out that he has a connection to Yondaime, even if it is only through his techniques, then they'll interfere and I can't have that. This goes beyond my personal feelings for the boy. I refuse to allow a group of simple-minded, short-sighted fools to make our greatest asset into our worst enemy. For good or bad, Naruto is our future and I for one want him on our side. His mind has held up remarkably well considering the life he's led so far, but he'll eventually be pushed over the edge if they keep this shit up. And declaring him a traitor and a missing nin just might cross the line, especially when the council would be more forgiving to someone else, like that Uchiha boy, Shizune said, her head nodding as Tsunade's attitude began to make sense. No wonder you don't want to talk to any of them. Can you blame me? Tsunade grumbled as she leaned forward. She grimaced and rubbed at her shoulder with one hand. No, not really, Shizune replied as she set her cup down. She quickly moved behind the Hokage and grabbed the Sannin's shoulders before the older woman had a chance to react. Channeling a small amount of healing chakra into her fingers, the medic began to gently massage her mentor's muscles. What I can blame you for is working yourself up like this and trying to hide it from me. Or did you think I didn't notice you rattling around in the kitchen at 3 a.m. this morning? Tsunade groaned slightly as some of the tension left her knotted shoulders. Despite her annoyance at her student for catching her off guard in her own office, she couldn't summon up the energy to fight with the younger medic. Instead, the Sannin allowed herself to relax under Shizune's skilled fingers. Damn, that woman would butcher the masseuse market if she ever felt inclined to open her own business. It still didn't shake the dark thoughts plaguing Tsunade's mind. I'm worried about him, she finally admitted after several minutes of silence. A lot. I don't think he's scared me this much since his heart nearly stopped during that fight with Orochimaru and his boy toy. Shizune stayed quiet as she kept rubbing her mentor's shoulders. She sensed that Tsunade wanted to talk rather than get feedback for the moment. Well, she was used to the Sannin not listening to her, so she'd bear with it. Hell, at least with Orochimaru and his flunky I knew what they were going to do, the Hokage continued. This deal with the Kyuubi on the other hand, it's a demon older than our recorded history and it's been trapped inside Naruto for almost 15 years. I have no idea what games it's playing. It could have 100 different plans in place. It's had a decade and a half to plan everything out and Naruto isn't the most suspicious person to begin with. Even with his stubborn streak, he'd stand no chance against that demon. And as a medic, I'm scared out of my mind that's he going to reopen all his injuries and bleed to death in the middle of the woods. Or run into Akatsuki again and without Jiraiya's help this time. Or that the chakra wave alerted every country within 100 miles and their nins are going to find him before ours do. So I take it you're worried, Shizune gently said as she channeled chakra into a particularly dense knot of muscle. Tsunade snorted and said, yeah, you could say that. The younger medic thought for a couple minutes, while idly massaging the back of Hokage's neck, before she said, well, judging from the attack on Naruto-kun and the message he left behind, I'd say the Kyuubi is pretty worried about something. It may just be taking advantage of a bad situation like you suspect, but there's a strong possibility that the fox genuinely perceived a threat and is trying to deal with the problem alongside Naruto-kun. It's never acted in this manner before, at least not that we know of, so there's a solid chance it's not misleading Naruto-kun. Of course, I could easily be wrong or there could be a threat and it's manipulating Naruto-kun on top of it, but remember that a threat to Naruto-kun is a threat to Kyuubi and vice versa. It's in the demon's personal interest to keep him alive and healthy. And though I hate the thought of it being something so evil, I have to say there's nothing stronger on this continent or perhaps even the world that could be watching out for Naruto-kun. Even if he is being manipulated, the Kyuubi will probably keep him safe, if only for its own designs. Tsunade let out a tired chuckle as she said, Shizune-chan, how is it you can reassure me and scare the crap out of me better than anyone else and all at the same time? Skill, I suppose, Shizune replied with a small smile on her face. And years of practice dealing with you when you're stubborn. The older medic half turned to look up at her student. Tsunade's soft-featured face marred into a frown as she said, about that, Shiz. Hokage-sama, the Anbu commander is here to see you, one of the guards said as he opened the door and leaned inside. His face took on a curious look as he saw the unusual position the two medics were in. I healed the last of the tears in the ligament fibers of your shoulder, Shizune casually said to Tsunade as she stepped around to the front of the desk and gathered up the tray and its now cold meal. With her back to the other shinobi, she gave a small wink to the Hokage before she continued, next time be more careful when you're training with Sakura-chan. I may not be around to patch you up. Thank you, Shizune-kun, Tsunade calmly replied, though it was easy to tell she was annoyed at being interrupted in their conversation. To the guard she said, send the commander in. Ah, yes Hokage-sama. The man said, not hiding his confusion very well. He openly stared at Shizune as she walked by, until an angry, ahem, from the godime snapped him out of his thoughts. The expression of Tsunade's face made it apparent that he'd better go get the commander. Now. Tsunade made an annoyed face as the now pale man scurried out of the room. The first moment of relaxation in 2 days and that blasted commander just has to ruin it. On top of her worry for Naruto and the whole mess he'd caused, there were all the numerous panicked and injured civilians that had swamped the hospital and left the staff short-handed. That was stressing, as she made it a point to always have available medical personnel to deal with the constant inflow of injured shinobi, which had only increased after Orochimaru's little decree. As the Hokage, she refused to tolerate one of her ninjas dying because some fool fell down a flight of stairs in a blind panic and occupied a doctor's time. And then there was that whole issues with Sakura's blonde friend. The MRI results were odd and she wanted to spend a bit of time checking the Yamanaka girl over. Time she was unlikely to have with all the complaints and idiots eating up her schedule. Tsunade restrained the urge to send the Anbu commander through a wall as the man burst into her office and started prattling on about the terror wave. Kami, the junk people come up with. Like a bunch of panicking, retarded sheep. The goddamn sighed as she got ready to deal with this annoyance, which would be whenever the commander ran out of steam and let her get a word in. Why did she ever allow that blasted brat to convince her to come back to this village anyways? Shikamaru shook his head to clear some of the cobwebs in it. He jerked as his foot almost slipped off the damp branch he'd just landed on. The sudden jolt of adrenaline was more than enough to wake him up all the way. They had just broken camp, as Guy finally managed to convince Kakashi that they needed to rest after almost 30 hours of running. The copy nin had agreed when his rival pointed out that they'd be in no condition to fight if they found Naruto and whoever else while they were dead on their feet. Guy had taken first watch, while Kakashi dispelled Pakun and went to sleep immediately. Neji hadn't even bothered to set up a bedroll. He'd just curled up in a somewhat comfortable spot under a tree and was out before his head hit the proverbial pillow, which in this case was his side pouch resting on a tree root. Shikamaru, on the other hand, had lain awake for a couple hours thinking about what Guy had told them earlier. Naruto was the Kyuubi vessel. The adults had lied to them this whole time. The Yondaime hadn't killed the demon. He'd trapped it in a newborn infant. That infant was their friend. The villagers hated him. Most of the Leaf Nins hated him too. He trained under Jiraiya-sama to control the fox. A very deadly group of people was after him. They almost killed him 2 weeks ago. Naruto somehow healed up overnight. He'd easily escaped and evaded detection. He caused that freaky terror somehow. They had to find him. He might be crazy or possessed. Possessed Naruto equals dangerous Naruto. Half of the continent was probably sending nins to investigate. They'd have to deal with any interlopers they might meet along the way. The dangerous group could already have beaten them there and abducted Naruto. Or the Sound could have. Or any of the other countries that probably had agents inside Konoha's territory. Assuming, of course, Naruto had even survived. When you have an IQ in excess of 200 and you've just learned some disturbing information, you don't tend to get much sleep with your brain chewing over all the details. Shikamaru hadn't slept much and he hadn't slept well. The only other person more exhausted than him was Neji. Even after sleeping like a rock for 6 hours straight, the Hyuga boy was still beat. He'd never had cause to keep his Byakugan active for so long at one time before, and the constant chakra use and eye strain were getting to him. He was to the point where he left the Byakugan off unless they lost the trail, and then he only opened it for a minute or so at a time. The other Chunin was lagging and his reactions were slowing down. In fact, Shikamaru moved quickly and grabbed the back of Neji's coat as the pale boy almost stepped right of the branch he was standing on. The lazy Chunin pulled him back onto the tree limb and didn't let go until Neji waved him off. "Thank you," the other Chunin said, showing a gratitude that wouldn't have been present 2 years ago. "That would have been most embarrassing." "And painful," Shikamaru dryly replied as he leaned his head over the edge and eyed the 60-foot drop to the forest floor. In the trees ahead of them, Kakashi, Guy, and Pakun, who'd been resummoned when they'd broken camp, stopped and glanced back. "You two all right?" Guy hollered, even though he was only 30 feet away. The copy ninja and the pug both flinched at the volume. The shout echoed throughout the semi-shadowed forest around them. "We're fine. Just had a little slip up," the Nara genius called back, at a considerably more reasonable level. He glanced at Neji. "Ready?" At the boy's nod, the group moved again and continued leaping through the trees, though now at a slightly less hectic pace. Shikamaru noticed Neji redoubling his pace to keep up with them. "Hey, don't push yourself too hard," he drawled out, even as he did a front flip over a large branch. "There's a reason you Hyugas only use your eyes for combat and spying, you know." "Yes, I know," Neji said, still managing to sound aloof and annoyed even though he was panting. "When I get back to Konoha, I'll increase my stamina training. I may even practice keeping my Byakugan active for long periods of time. Though my eyes and head hurt, I haven't pushed myself like this for quite some time. Under other circumstances, I could find it invigorating. I'll speak to Hiyashi-sama about it when we return." "Sounds like a plan," Shikamaru replied, not showing the slightest bit of envy at the other boy's superior fighting ability. "Just don't kill yourself from chakra exhaustion." "HMPH. I have more common sense than that," the Hyuga boy muttered as dove through a gap between several boughs. He smoothly caught a branch on the other side and swung himself onto another limb. Damn, it was annoying traveling in the canopy of the forest. It gave him a better vantage point when using the Byakugan, but the thick foliage still slowed them down. Not to mention that all the extra acrobatics weren't helping his stamina levels any. In mid-jump, Neji spared a quick glance at Shikamaru to make sure the other Chunin had cleared the hurdle. And promptly smacked face first into a wall. Shikamaru landed on a branch behind him just in time to catch Neji as he, again, nearly fell into the forest below. The Hyuga looked up, even as he rubbed his stinging face, to see that he had slammed into Guy's back. The Junin had barely noticed the impact and was watching something with great interest. Neither Chunin could see what it was as he was blocking their vision. After helping Neji regain his balance, Shikamaru moved up beside the taijutsu master. What's up? The lazy Chunin asked. See for yourself, Guy replied as he nodded in the direction ahead of them. Kakashi's taking a closer look now. What are yo? Holy shit, Shikamaru said as he looked through the forest. What appeared to be a massive wall blocked their path. Jumping onto a branch several feet ahead, Shikamaru got a better look at the odd structure. It was a massive wall and it was made entirely out of fallen trees. It looked like pictures he's seen at the academy of the barricades made in the old eras to protect poor villages. Although, this was on a scale he'd never heard of. Fallen trees were stacked on top of each other, rising well over 50 or 60 feet high. The barrier reached almost through canopy layer of the forest and the whole mess leaned on the remaining upright trees for support. Looking off to both sides, Shikamaru noted that the wall moved off out of sight in either direction. The genius was duly impressed. He couldn't have made a better barricade if he had a week and 20 builders to craft it. The question was, what the hell was a large-scale barrier doing out in the middle of nowhere? And who the hell had managed to build it without any leaf nins noticing? What the hell is this doing here? Neji asked as he landed next to the Nara boy, not realizing he was echoing the genius's thoughts. I don't know. You see anything behind it? Shikamaru asked, his eyes tracing downwards to the ground where Kakashi was investigating the base of the wall alongside his little pug. Wait a moment, Neji said, then gritted his teeth as he activated his bloodline. His eyes took on the eerie shine and appearance of the Byakugan as he squinted at the barrier. Almost immediately he muttered, what in the hell? What is it? Guy asked as he dropped onto a branch behind them. What do you see? Nothing, Neji replied, with a sharp tone of disbelief. Something wrong with your eyes? Shikamaru asked, looked at the Hyuga boy. You have been using the... No, I mean there's nothing behind it, the other Chunin interrupted. Beyond the barrier, there's nothing. What do you mean? Guy asked, frowning slightly. I mean there. Look, you'll just have to see it for yourself, Neji said as he closed his Byakugan and stepped off the branch. The other two shinobi watched for several moments as the pale boy rebounded back and forth between two trees as he made his way to the ground, before they followed after him. They caught up to Neji as he stood panting near Kakashi at the shadowy base of the barrier. Shikamaru looked over at the copy ninja and watched as the man leaned down to run his hand along the bark of one of the fallen trees. Shikamaru-kun, do you notice anything odd about these trees? The tall Junin asked without looking back at them. Aside from the fact that they're even here. The genius drawled. Turning a little serious, the boy critically looked over the wall, letting his sharp mind analyze what his eyes were taking in. He suddenly jerked in shock and resisted the urge to smack himself at missing such an obvious feature. This isn't man-made. No, it isn't. At least, it doesn't look like it, Kakashi agreed as he stood upright. He turned and walked towards them, his visible eye crinkled in thought. How do you guys know? What were you looking for? Neji asked, still panting as he dug out his canteen. He nearly choked at Shikamaru's response. They're all uprooted, the Nara boy said as he looked over the barrier. Even the trees at the top of the barrier have been pulled up. None of them were chopped down and not one of them has the bark stripped. Strange, though, some of them seem to be burned in spots, though the scorch marks don't look like a forest fire or anything a human would do. Neji let his eyes trace the odd wall. Shikamaru was right. He could see roots sticking out all over the place. Every tree was intact, barring the ones cracked apart by the weight of the others. Each tree had its bark, roots, branches, and even their leaves still in place. And some of them did have odd scorches on their surface, though there seemed to be no pattern or reason to the burns. It almost looked like a giant had hand-woven a massive basket together, but had used trees instead of grass. The trees certainly looked like they'd been pulled up by a giant anyhow. The dirt hadn't even fallen off the roots yet. Wait, dirt. Neji moved over to the wall and jammed his entire hand into a mass of roots and earth at the base of one of the trees. He tore a large clump free and brought it to his face, then took a big whiff. This is fresh. Hey, Kakashi-sensei. This dirt is fresh, the Hyuga boy called to the Junin, who had wandered off a ways. Kakashi walked up to him and peered down at the clump of soil. I thought as much. It smells fresh all right, the copy nin muttered thoughtfully. There's still grubs and earthworms in it too, Neji said as he broke the clump up and looked at the little bugs and squirmers moving around on his palm. And all the leaves are green. The broken wood is still damp and the sap still runs, Kakashi continued as he drew a kunai and made a notch in the bark of one of the trees. Neji let the dirt in his hand fall to the ground as he watched the sap ooze from the wound. If it's so fresh, then it probably has something to do with that creepy stunt Naruto pulled, Shikamaru said as he walked up next to them. Kakashi nodded and said, there's no other reason for something so unusual to be out here. As soon as Pakun gets, speak of the devil, dog. There he is now. The other three ninjas looked up as the small nin dog jumped over a thick clump of bushes and trotted up to the copy ninja. I found a place to get through. It's this way, the pug said, before it turned and ran back the way it came. The shinobi followed after immediately, not wanting to lose track of the little summon. Pakun led them to a small, washed-out gully near the crest of a hill. The tree barrier went straight across the hole, but not into it. It wasn't large, being only about 10 feet across and 12 feet deep, but it was long and went well under the wall. Kakashi didn't hesitate and dropped down into the eroded gully. He landed in the small creek that ran down the center and quickly walked upstream and under the barricade. 3 consecutive splashes sounded behind him as the others followed. On the other side of the barrier, the copy nin focused a little chakra and did a super jump up and out of the wash, alongside Pakun. As he landed, his jaw dropped behind his mask. Rival, why did you stop? Good Kami, Guy trailed off as he jumped up behind Kakashi and got a good look. What are you gawking at? Huh. Well, that explains where the trees came from, Shikamaru said as he stared at the odd sight in front of them. As Neji landed beside him, the Chunin said, I assume this is what you meant by nothing. Yes, though I didn't expect it to be this bad, the Hyuga said as he looked across what used to be a large forest. They stood at the edge of a massive, circular plain. It was roughly 3 miles at its widest, by the best estimates of the Junins, and was totally barren. No trees, grass, or any animal life could be found anywhere. Pakun leapt up and ran towards the center of the expanse, with the 4 shinobi following. At top speed, they crossed the distance in about 5 minutes. Immediately, the pug started sniffing around. Kakashi kneeled to look at the ground, then stood and slowly turned in a circle to eye their surroundings. They were near cavern country, with the border so close they could see the large foothills off in the distance over the tree line. Inside the plain they could see large layers of old volcanic rock that rose out of the earth and made fairly smooth sheets of stone here and there. They stood on the largest, which was a good 100 feet long or so. It appeared to be worn smooth by erosion, but upon closer inspection, perhaps something else was the culprit. Underneath their feet, there were 3 large circles composed of strange runes and symbols that had been burned several inches into the face of the rock. The largest of them was about 12 feet across. A slick, shiny material coated the stone for almost 10 meters in every direction. It took Kakashi a moment to realize that it was glass, presumably formed by sand and dirt that had been melted by the same intense heat that had seared the symbols into the rock. Moving outwards in a circle, the earth had been blasted away, exposing more of the stone outcrops to the bright sun. The same force that had peeled the soil from the face of the earth was apparently responsible for tearing every tree within a mile and a half radius out of the ground and hurling them away, where they clumped up and formed the odd barrier. The wall of trees framed the edge of the plain they stood in, with a large layer of dirt packed on top of this side of the mess. Well, that explained where all the topsoil went. This plain was exactly in the same direction they'd seen the red glow emanate from. Logically then, Naruto and the Kyuubi must have caused all this, though they could see no sign of either. What the hell had the boy done to create this field? Start a localized typhoon or a mile-wide tornado. Move out, with each of you to a compass direction. Search for any sign of Naruto. Footprints, clothing, kunai, anything, Kakashi ordered as he pulled a scroll out of his jacket and unrolled it. Pakun, start hunting along the wall for his scent. His trail coming in must have been blasted away, but he had to leave somehow. And all of you, keep your guard up. I doubt we're the only ones who noticed the chakra wave and other forces may be here already. What are you going to do? Shikamaru asked as he curiously eyed the scroll the copy nin was now inking seals onto. I'm going to make a copy of these symbols to bring back to the Hokage. Then I'll destroy the originals, Kakashi replied as he continued to make the complicated series of seals to form a scribing scroll. Destroy them. Why? Neji asked as he looked over at the Junin. He almost immediately answered his own question as he said, we don't want the sound duplicating whatever happened here. Exactly. Them or anyone else. Could you imagine the damage this would cause if performed in the center of a village? Kakashi rhetorically asked, as he laid the scroll on the ground to have a better writing surface. Orochimaru is already obsessed enough with seals and jutsu as it is. If he discovered that these existed, he'd hunt Naruto to the ends of the earth. Regardless of whether or not the Kyuubi has corrupted him, I don't want the sound getting to him before we do. He's attracted enough attention to himself as it is. Neji flinched and Shikamaru frowned at the mention of the fox demon. Neither had really been able to process the disturbing information yet, so it was still an unpleasant subject for them. Shikamaru kept puzzling over all the little details he'd missed over the years, and Neji was dealing with an odd mixture of annoyance and relief. Annoyance that Naruto had used the fox's power to beat him at the exams, and relief that the blonde boy had the willpower to keep the demon from killing him. Neji felt a cold shiver of fear crawl up his spine every time he thought of that match. He'd arrogantly taunted and threatened a demon. He had to wonder why he was still alive. The only thing that had saved his life was likely the same bull-headed stubbornness he'd criticized Naruto about so much. If anyone had the balls to stand up to a demon's influence, it was Uzumaki Naruto. Whether it was bravery or stupidity, he neither knew nor cared. If the situation had been reversed, with Neji as the bearer of the Kyuubi and Naruto the arrogant prodigy, then the Hyuga would have let the demon kill the other boy in a heartbeat. That Naruto hadn't finished him off or tried to kill him could be taken either as a sign of great character or as a conceited insult. Since Naruto wouldn't know a calculated insult if it slapped him across the face, Neji doubted it was the latter. To be honest, out of all the members of their crowd, Naruto was probably the best choice to bear the Kyuubi. He'd use the demon as opposed to Shikamaru, but not misuse it as opposed to Sasuke. Just the thought of that arrogant Uchiha traitor having such a powerful weapon at his disposal left a nasty taste in Neji's mouth. Alright, get going. Kakashi's voice broke the Hyuga out of his thoughts. 3 shinobi and a dog nodded before they dashed off in various directions. Guy headed east, as the sound would come from that direction if they sent ninjas to investigate. Neji headed west and Shikamaru to the north, which left Pakun to wander off south. The copy ninja watched them go for a moment, before he went back to the task at hand. A half hour later and he was just putting the finishing touches on his scroll. Kakashi looked it over critically as his skill with seals was far lower than any of the Sannin. Jiraiya had taught him a couple tricks whenever the older pervert had stopped by during the first week after Naruto had been injured, but the copy nin still lacked the experience of the hermit. Still, it should work. Kakashi allowed the last of the ink to dry and glanced around. He could see the forms of the other 3 shinobi moving about here and there, off in the distance. None were paying him any mind. He took the opportunity to pull off both his mask and his forehead protector and wipe the sweat from his face with a handkerchief. He had already taken off his flak jacket because of the unseasonable heat. The sun was warm today, and after traveling for 2 days in the cool shade of the forest, it was an unpleasant change. It didn't seem to be just the sun, though, that was making this place hot. The very air of the dusty, barren plain seemed to boil and wave with some unnatural heat. It was likely a side effect of whatever stunt Naruto had pulled here. At least the ink dried quick in this weather. Kakashi ignored the sweat sticking his bodysuit to his back and pulled his mask back up, though he left his forehead protector on the ground. It was too hot to put that piece of metal back on his head, and it was a good idea to have the Sharingan ready to be opened in case an enemy ninja sneaked up on him. Keeping his left eye closed, the copy ninja rolled the scroll up part of the way, so that only 4 feet was left exposed. There was a large, blank spot in the shape of a rectangle framed by seal script in the middle of the paper. He laid it in the center of the glass-coated rune circles and started inking a faint line of seals outward from the scroll to the edge of the farthest circle. He carefully traced the entire outer ring of alien symbols, before he led a line back into the scroll opposite the first. Fortunately, these were just simple seals to define the boundary of the scroll, so it didn't take long. If all went well, a perfect copy of the rune circles should be recorded onto the scroll. With all the preparations complete, Kakashi gathered chakra into his hands, made a few seals, and slammed his hands into the center of the scroll palm first. Nothing happened. The copy ninja blinked his open eye and stared at the scroll under his hands. What the hell? He'd done it perfectly, or at least good enough. Why wasn't it working? A slight tremor tickled the underside of his lowest hand. A sound like screeching metal tore through the hazy air. Kakashi tried to jump back, but found his hand stuck to the scroll. He opened his left eye to see what was happening. He immediately closed it, feeling nauseous. Chakra was swirling in a sickening, dizzy pattern in the air all around him. He finally knew what the hell the heat waves were. It was leftover chakra, and though it was invisible to the naked eye, the Sharingan saw it as a dark, evil crimson that could have only come from one source. Kyuubi. Even as he tried to pull away from the scroll, the Kakashi could feel the heat growing worse around him. It seemed to bake his skin through his bodysuit, and all the sweat on his body dried in moments. With a sense of horror, he noticed the symbols on the ground ignite and blood-colored flames seemed to flow inwards towards him. The copy nin chanced opening his Sharingan again, and this time he closed it in fear. A massive sphere of the evil chakra was building around him, and he couldn't do a blasted thing about it. The seals he had written suddenly burst into blue flames that rose several inches off the scroll. The ones on the ground ignited as well and began to rise. Slowly, the blue circle formed a dome around him that was composed of flaming blue kanji script. The fire from original red symbols began spiraling inwards towards his hands. The dome provided some protection from the heat of the chakra, but it was still overwhelming to the senses. The Kyuubi's terror began to build up in him, feeding his panic and making him instinctively want to find a hole to hide in. Sweet Kami, if this was how powerful the traces of the Kyuubi were, how strong was the real thing? Kakashi tried pulling on his hands again and found to his surprise that his right hand came free, though his left was still stuck to the scroll. Not hesitating, the copy nin withdrew a kunai from his holster and swiped it at his left hand. If cutting his hand off would get him the fuck out of here, then he'd gladly sacrifice it. In the demon-induced panic, Kakashi didn't complete the strike properly and wound up slashing the back of his hand open just beneath the protective metal plate on his glove. The blood splattered across the scroll and the spiraling red flames. Kakashi immediately wished he hadn't done that. The blue dome collapsed and merged with the red runes on the ground. With a whirlwind of heat and raw energy, the mixture of red and blue fire spiraled straight into the back of Kakashi's left hand. The copy nin was unable to hold back the scream of pure agony that forced its way out of him. He hadn't felt this kind of pain since that time Itachi used his torture gen jutsu on him. No, this was worse. Worse than 100 cattle brands searing into him. It felt like it was boiling right through his flesh and into his spirit. The mass of evil chakra pulsed once, then followed the path of the seals and swirled into his hand. For an instant, all was still as all heat from the plains disappeared, leaving only behind a bitter cold that contrasted sharply with the bright sunlight. Then the ground exploded. Kakashi went flying over 20 feet, slammed into the stone outcrop, and skidded another 10. For several long moments, he could only lie there with his hand on his chest, too pained to even move. Chips and splinters of rock rained down on him and the surrounding area. The hazy heat came back as the chakra moved away from the seals and into the air again. The Junin carefully lifted his left hand and slid it into his right armpit to protect it, before he opened his eyes. He closed the Sharingan when he noticed the nauseating swirls of chakra were back. Wincing, he slowly forced himself into a sitting position and glanced around with his normal eye. The dust was still settling across the rune circles. He noted that his scroll was completely destroyed, with only a few charred paper strips lying scattered about. Voices calling out to him made him look up, seeing Guy and Shikamaru approaching from different directions. He wondered for a moment where Neji and Pakun were, before he held up his right hand to keep Guy from bowling him over. Rival, are you all right? What was that horrid sound? And that explosion? Speak to me. Are you hurt? Are you? The taijutsu master halted when Shikamaru put a hand on his shoulder to calm his frenzy. Kakashi-san, are you wounded? The Chunin calmly asked, though the dark-haired boy's concern was evident. Yes, but I'll live, Kakashi replied in a deeper, raspier tone than normal. Is the circle still intact? Shikamaru frowned, but glanced back anyways to check the blasted ground. Looking back at the copy nin, he said, the inner circle is mostly destroyed, but the others are still intact. You know what happened. I tried to use a scroll jutsu that would record the symbols so Jiraiya-sama and the Hokage could look at them. I guess I set something off instead, the Junin replied as he sighed and leaned forward a bit. He blinked a little as some blood and sweat ran past his open eye. He probably looked like shit. Well, whatever it did must have hurt like a bitch. You look like shit, the lazy Nara said, echoing the other man's thoughts. He critically eyed the Junin, who had nicks and cuts all over his face and a hunk of his mask missing at the chin. His silver hair was gray with dust and was matted to his head with sweat and blood. It didn't escape the genius's notice that the older man was protectively cradling his left hand. I feel like shit, Kakashi muttered. He tried to get to his feet, only to slump back down. The copy nin gave a weary sigh at his predicament. Let me help you, rival, Guy spoke up, his worry for his friend almost overbearing. He stepped around behind the other Junin and grabbed him to help him up. Unfortunately, he chose to grab him under the armpits. Guy jumped back like he'd been stabbed as Kakashi gave a hoarse bellow of pain from the accidental jostling of his left hand. Rival, forgive me, I didn't know you were hurt there. I'm sorry, I'll punish myself, I swear. 500 no, 1,000 laps around Konoha. On my hands. With a boulder on my feet. I promise, just plea. Guy, shut up, Kakashi said in a raspy voice. The other man instantly fell silent. Just come around and grab my hand. My right hand. The other Junin complied and carefully hauled the copy ninja to his feet. Guy fidgeted nervously for a few moments, wanting to help his friend, but reluctant to do anything for fear of hurting him. Guy, why don't you check on Neji? If he didn't come running like you two did, then something might be wrong, Kakashi said, taking pity on his odd friend's plight. The taijutsu expert hesitated for a moment before nodding and dashing off towards the western edge of the circle. Here, you might want this, Shikamaru said, holding out the copy ninja's flak jacket and forehead protector. Kakashi glanced at them and mentally cringed at the thought of putting either item on with his hand in such a painful condition. He carefully let his left hand hang free as he reached around into his side pouch for a roll of gauze. Would you mind wrapping my hand for me? Kakashi asked as he held out the bandages. Shikamaru nodded, then took the roll and gestured for the Chunin to hold his hand out. When the other man did, the Chunin almost dropped the gauze in shock. Holy hell! Shikamaru cursed as he stared at the copy nin's hand. Kakashi-san, what happened? What? Kakashi trailed off as he stared down at his hand. Well, shit, now what the hell was this? His arm was bare up to the elbow, as the glove and sleeve had apparently been blasted off. His skin had a purple-gray look to it, indicating a serious burn. What really caught his attention, though, was the back of his hand. There was something on it that had him very worried. After all, how many people had 9 red lines forming a spiral sealed into the back of their hand? What happened? Damned if I know. The seals told us the brat left Konoha about 4 days ago. We tracked him to northwestern Fire Country, then he disappeared at the same time the Kyuubi's power was unleashed. Itachi-san was out in the area and he checked it out. Said he didn't find anything, and if he couldn't scrounge anything up, then I doubt any of us can. This is disturbing news. The seals don't work now. Even with the vessel's blood. Nope, not even a trace. It's like the kid has up and disappeared off the face of the continent. Perhaps he did. We were warned that the seals have limited range. Some sort of powerful teleport jutsu. You think the kid could pull something like that off? No. The Kyuubi on the other hand. Ah, I get your point. If the fox is involved, who knows what'll happen? Indeed, if the Kyuubi is guiding or teaching the vessel in some way, then we must be very careful and gather as much information on the two of them as soon as possible. What should we do? Send the word out. All members of our order are to keep a lookout for the vessel or anyone fitting his description. Start in Fire Country and work your way outwards. Also, have Itachi-kun go and find out if Orochimaru has captured the vessel or not. If he has, we'll butcher his entire pitiful country and let Itachi-san cut whatever body he's possessed into pieces. That little snake will learn not to screw with our plans. Yes, it was folly enough to leave us. If he actively interferes with our ambition, then we will retaliate and erase any trace of him. No kidding. I don't care what body he's found, there's no way he can beat Itachi-san. Even if he has possessed his brother. My thoughts exactly. Uchiha Sasuke will always remain inferior to Uchiha Itachi, now more so than ever if Orochimaru has used one of those ridiculous curse seals on him. Dumb brat. Actually falling for one of the snake's games. And here I thought all Uchiha were supposed to be ingenious. It seems not. Or perhaps he simply falls short compared to Itachi-kun. No matter. Orochimaru is only worth the trouble of dealing with if he has actually taken the Kyuubi vessel. Otherwise, we'll leave him to his little power games. Right. I'll let Itachi-san know. He and Kisame-san will probably head out immediately. And where are you planning on going? Since I'm without a partner at the moment, I'll head to Wind Country in disguise. Might as well check on the other target while I'm away, and I certainly shouldn't tempt fate by wandering into Earth or Lightning Country. No, we wouldn't want you to have to butcher a dozen of their hunter nins trying to escape. Be careful near the one tail. Shukaku's vessel is very skilled and perceptive, especially for one who never sleeps. He's detected our agents before, though he hasn't learned of our order yet. Assuming I can even find the black-eyed runt. I swear that kid can disappear from the inside of a bathroom and stay gone for weeks. The case cage can't control him in the slightest, though he seems to have calmed down some recently. If he's gaining control over the demon, then that only makes our plans that much easier. Hey, right, I'll see if I can find either of the vessels while I'm there. It'll probably take me a while. I'll send a message in a month or so. Alright, we'll call for you if we decide to attack Orochimaru. Yeah, definitely let me know if we're going after him. That's one fight I don't want to miss. Gotta test my new sword out somehow. It would be enjoyable. I'll watch for your message in a month. I'm getting shivers thinking about killing some of those weaklings. Anyways, I'll see you later. Let's hope your venture is profitable, Tsurugi-kun. This is one pain in the ass mission, Shikamaru muttered as he leaned over Kakashi's hand to get a better look at it. Remind me to thank Naruto for the lovely tattoo, the Junin sighed as he stared at his burned limb. A thought occurred to him and he turned his hand upside down. Both he and the Chunin jolted when they saw another 9-line spiral on his palm. This one was a mirror image of the first, except it was a strange shade of blue, rather than red. It looked like the seal had been burned straight through the back of his hand. Kakashi sighed again. This was not his day. What the hell is it? Shikamaru asked, squinting at the odd marks. It probably has something to do with the Kyuubi, though I'm scared to even ask what, Kakashi said. Kyuubi. Why would it? 9 lines for 9 tails. And the spiral? The genius asked. The spiral may be generic of Konoha Shinobi, but I think it was the Kyuubi's symbol long before we began using it. At least, a 9-line spiral is the demon's symbol, the copy nin said as he brought his hand up to get a closer look. Wait, didn't he have a cut there? Examining the red spiral showed that he did indeed have a very faint scar that neatly bisected the mark horizontally. It didn't really interfere with the seal's appearance and it would probably fade completely in time. The spiral, on the other hand, looked very permanent. Its lines were a deep crimson and edged very faintly in black. The only part that wasn't red was a single blue-white dot at the very center of the mark, from which the 9 lines radiated out from. Though he had called it a tattoo, it certainly didn't look like one. Where a tattoo's colors often looked gaudy or unnatural on the skin, this seal's colors were perfectly balanced and it almost looked like it belonged there. Turning his hand over, Kakashi got the same impression from the blue seal on his palm. From the outer edges working in, the spiral was a bright color that made him think of the tropical seas he'd seen far to the south. The inner half of the mark gradually darkened into a deep blue color that reminded him of cold mountain lakes. It was rather nice looking, though he really hadn't come out here to get a freaky seal of some demon burned onto his hand because its crazy vessel did some insane jutsu that no one knows a thing about. Speaking of demons and their vessels, they still hadn't found any trace of Naruto. We need to keep searching. I'll bandage my hand up as best as I can. Can you make a drawing of the symbols? Kakashi said as he scratched his chin with his good hand. Sure. I used to doodle at the academy whenever I felt like it, Shikamaru replied. He tossed the gauze roll back to the copy nin, before he walked over to the circle of runes. Kakashi grimaced and slowly began to unroll the bandages around his arm. He wished they had thought to bring a medic or at least some extra supplies along, but they'd been in such a rush to leave that they hadn't brought anything beyond the standard stuff in their jackets. Hell, they didn't even have any soldier pills to give to Neji. He'd be sure to avoid repeating that mistake in the future. A sudden breeze made the copy ninja look up. Shikamaru had used a weak wind jutsu to blow the grit and debris off the ground seals. As Kakashi watched, the boy pulled a scroll out and did a few funny seals before unrolling it. The Junin's eyes widened as the scroll exploded in a puff of smoke and a large sheet of paper about 14 feet long fluttered out of it. Shikamaru grabbed it and set it across the marks that had been seared into the rock. He pulled a piece of brown-colored paraffin from one of the scroll sleeves in his vest and knelt down to make a rubbing of the seals. The lazy genius glanced up at Kakashi and grinned while saying, "Sure I could draw them, but why waste the effort when tracing is easier?" The Junin shook his head, though his eye crinkled into a smile. Looking down at his hand, he turned a bit more serious as he continued to bind it up. He winced as he wrapped the cotton around his palm and the back of his hand. Hopefully Tsunade-sama could do something about the seals. At the very least, she should be able to heal the chakra burn. Kakashi finished binding his forearm with a small metal clip to hold it in place. Now how would he go about putting his jacket back on? Need a hand? Shikamaru asked. The copy nin glanced up and noted that the boy was already done copying the marks, with the scroll bound up in its normal form. The genius calmly slid it into his own flak jacket before he reached down to grab Kakashi's. Here, hold your bad arm out first. Shikamaru was surprisingly careful as he helped the Junin put his jacket on. Kakashi's arm wasn't bumped once. When he got it on, the genius boy grabbed the forehead protector off the round and rigged it up to make a sling which the Junin promptly hung around his neck. The copy nin sighed in relief when he placed his wounded arm in it. Much better. So you're all done? Kakashi asked. Yep, got it all right here, Shikamaru replied as he patted the pocket with the scroll. Good. Stand back, the copy ninja said as he walked towards the seals. The Nara boy did so and watched curiously as the other ninja brought his right arm up and held his hand cocked in what looked like a tiger claw. For several long moments, nothing happened. Chidori! Kakashi suddenly roared, scaring the living crap out of Shikamaru. A crack of energy sounded as the glowing blue chakra gathered around the man's hand. As soon as enough was gathered to complete the move, Kakashi slammed his hand into the middle of the circle of runes. The resulting explosion spread outwards and shattered the top foot of rock for several meters in every direction. The copy nin himself disappeared in the cloud of dust that erupted from the ground. Shikamaru waved the grit away from his face as Kakashi walked towards him out of the cloud. The genius grumbled, "How'd you manage that with only one hand and no seals?" Years of practice, the copy ninja replied, wiping his hand off on his jacket. Though I won't be doing another one for a while. Why? The Chunin asked with a puzzled frown. When I do it one-handed, it's over twice as inefficient, Kakashi said as he looked back at the hole. The dust was starting to settle enough to get a good look at the mess he'd made. Without the seals or a second hand on the wrist to stabilize it, the jutsu costs more chakra, is less concentrated, and spreads out rather than penetrating. I also can't maintain it for long. In this case, it was perfect for destroying the evidence, but in an actual fight it's almost worthless. Shikamaru walked towards the spot where the runes had lain. The dust had settled enough to reveal a wide, shallow hole that had been blasted into the ground. The rune circles had been totally destroyed. There weren't even any large fragments of the markings. I see, the Chunin muttered. Glancing over at Kakashi, he continued, we should probably go and check on Guy and Neji. The last I saw, Neji was working his way south, so he might have met up with your dog. I didn't find any traces to the north, though I'll be surprised if anyone finds anything at all with the ground torn up so badly. He had to leave somehow. Hopefully it was on foot, the copy nin answered as they started walking to the south. A cool breeze hit the Junin's sweaty face, making him sigh in relief. Wait, cool breeze. Kakashi snapped his Sharingan open and looked at the air about him. The dark chakra was gone, though there were still a few rapidly fading traces of it. The hazy effect had vanished and the air had grown noticeably cooler. Without a huge mass of heat rising up into the atmosphere, the northern winds from cavern country were starting to blow through the dusty plain. The Kyuubi's residual energy must have been linked to the seals. With them gone, there was no real evidence of what had taken place here. Interesting, the copy nin thoughtfully said, closing his enhanced eye again. What is? Shikamaru asked, jolting the man from his thoughts. Oh, nothing, Kakashi replied, shrugging the question off. Fortunately, the Chunin was one to let things go, rather than making a temper tantrum about it. They started moving again, only to be nearly bowled over by Guy as he appeared out of nowhere and landed in front of them. Come with me. You two need to see this, the Thai expert said, then raced off to the south. The two laid-back shinobi glanced at each other and shrugged, before following. Guy led them almost straight south, all the way to the tree barrier. As they approached, Kakashi took notice of a large, shadowy hole that had been made in the wall. They paused at the edge of it, until Guy carefully walked through and gestured for them to follow. Did you or Neji make this? Shikamaru asked as he looked upwards. The tree wall was almost 15 feet thick at this point, but the hole looked like it had been torn open with ease. No, that's one of the things that has me worried, Guy replied in a serious voice. He walked forward and followed a natural path between the trees. And before you ask, that's not what I wanted to show you. It's up ahead. They walked in silence for several minutes, until Guy pushed his way through a large clump of ferns and bushes. When Kakashi and Shikamaru followed the Junin, they stopped dead in their tracks. Damn, that was a lot of blood. They stood at the edge of a small, natural clearing. It wasn't even as large as the one Shikamaru had fought those sound genins in during the Forest of Death fiasco. Strewn all about the place were bodies. Well, bodies, body parts, some internal organs, and blood. Lots of blood. The red liquid had been splattered across everything, from the grass to the trees. There was a large pile of corpses in the center of the clearing that seemed to have a spotlight on it, as a large beam of sunlight had broken through the canopy and was shining right on the mass. Flies buzzed about the mess, illuminated by the light. Shikamaru gagged and fought the urge to puke. He distracted himself by looking away from the pile. He noticed Neji and Pakun poking around at the southern edge of the clearing, the two of them examining something on the ground. Kakashi stepped forward and lightly kicked what was left of a man's head. As it rolled over, a blood-stained forehead protector came into view. It had a familiar symbol on it. So the sound beat us here after all, the Junin said as he turned his attention to the central mass of bodies. He calmly walked towards it, ignoring the flies and the smell. Kneeling, the copy nin grabbed a relatively clean twig and ran it through a large puddle of blood. It's not totally dried. This was recent. Within the last 6 hours or so. So who killed them? Naruto? Shikamaru asked as he stepped a little closer, despite himself. At least until he noticed that one of the twigs he was looking at was actually a severed finger. He had to turn away at that point. Kakashi noticed something at the bottom of the puddle. Leaning closer, he carefully poked the stick through the semi-congealed red liquid and into the material. His open eye narrowed as he realized what it was. I'll be damned. It's sand, Kakashi said as he sat in front of the Hokage's desk. It was a day later and the Junin was giving his full debriefing to the fifth. There was sand in every puddle of blood. When I looked closer, I realized the bodies had been crushed by a massive amount of concentrated force. The evidence matches the abilities of only one ninja we know of. Gaara, Tsunade said as she frowned thoughtfully. Her mouth was obscured by her hands as she leaned on her desk. I don't know whether to be worried or relieved. Relieved, the copy nin replied, sounding a bit incredulous. That kid is a total psychopath. Who knows what he'll do to Naruto? Probably look after him, the Godime answered. When she noticed the Junin wasn't buying it, she continued, when your Uchiha student turned traitor and I had to send those genins out after him, I requested some support from the Sand Village. Gaara's team was the one that came. When I asked the Kazekage about it later, he told me that the boy had insisted on coming as soon as he learned that Naruto was involved. I don't really understand why, but apparently the kid feels he owes Naruto a large debt. You said it was only the sound that had been killed. You found no traces of any other shinobi. Kakashi nodded his head, staring at the Hokage with a strange look. Tsunade continued, Then Gaara came to find Naruto when he felt his chakra in the wave. If he killed a group of sound nins, it was likely in protection of the boy or because they were trying to get him to hand Naruto over. I can't say I'm happy with him being in the hands of someone so unstable, but at least we don't have to try and rescue him from Orochimaru or the Akatsuki. Gaara will likely watch over him until he feels his debt is paid. And if he goes nuts? Kakashi dryly asked. The Hokage snorted and said, then I expect Naruto will be able to handle himself. He's beaten Gaara once already and he's been training under a Sannin for the past year and a half. He's also learning skills from the Kyuubi, so he's a formidable opponent, to say the least. I doubt he'll fall to the sand brat. Although, the Kyuubi reminds me, did any of the sound nins have a copy of the seals Naruto used? Yes, Neji found one scroll on them that was readable. The rest were trashed, so we burned them along with the bodies, Kakashi replied as he dug a bloodstained scroll out and passed it to Tsunade. The Hokage unrolled it and spread it on her desk. I see, she said after a minute of looking it over. They must have drawn it by hand. It's not as accurate as Shikamaru's rubbing. Still, it would have been bad had it returned to Orochimaru. I see they managed to copy the inner circle. Jiraiya can use this to fill in the blank spots on the other scroll. When does he return? The copy nin asked. I wanted to ask him if I screwed up that scroll jutsu he showed me. The one that caused that seals to be burned into your hand. Tsunade said as she looked up from the scroll. I doubt it. It probably worked just fine and accidentally triggered something within the seals left behind. I'll have him look at the marks on your hand when he gets back. Though it looks like an odd, but stable seal, I think it's the same language as the other two I've seen. The other two? Kakashi questioned as he looked at his heavily bandaged hand. Tsunade had carefully healed the burn, which had been 3rd degree, that had spread up his arm, but hadn't been able to do anything about the spiral seals. His arm was in a normal sling and his forehead protector had returned to its usual place. The first seal was the one we had so much trouble breaking the day Naruto was brought in. The other one I encountered was on a heavily modified and advanced bunshin that Naruto used to distract us, Tsunade said. She drew a small brush and carefully sketched each seal in the margin of the scroll she was reading. See the similarities between their design and the ones from the circles you encountered. Kakashi looked down at the paper when the Hokage pushed it across the desk to him. He frowned and nodded. I see what you mean. The lines aren't kanji or seal script or even any other language I know of, but they all look similar to each other. Do you have any idea where they come from? The Junin asked as his eye traced the lines of the seal that had injured Naruto 3 weeks ago. No, not even the scroll of forbidden seals makes a mention of them, Tsunade said as she leaned back in her chair. Naruto could have only learned them from the Kyuubi, though that doesn't explain how or why the Akatsuki was able to use one. I guess the seals have some link to demons, but beyond that I don't know. Well, at least we know how to recognize their script, Kakashi muttered as he eyed the scroll. I suppose so, Tsunade shrugged. Anyways, what else do you have to report? Nothing much, beyond what I've already mentioned, the Junin answered as he leaned back from the desk. With the Byakugan, Neji estimated that there were 12 sound nins killed there. Looked like 3-4 member teams. We found no traces of any other groups while we were there, so I'm assuming Gaara got them all. Pakun smelled Naruto at the clearing, but he and Gaara disappeared from there without leaving any trail, so we weren't able to follow them. I'm assuming they were headed for Wind Country. We returned after we destroyed the corpses and we didn't encounter anything else on the way back. And how are Neji and Shikamaru taking the news? Tsunade asked, referring to the Chunins being informed of the relationship between the Kyuubi and Naruto. Good and not good, Kakashi said as he scratched his masked chin with his good hand. Shikamaru seems to be taking it well, though not much phases him. I suspect he won't be sleeping well for a couple of nights, but aside from that I don't think he'll be much different. And the Hyuga boy? The Hokage prompted. Neji, well he seems a bit pissed off, the copy ninja replied, looking a little sheepish. I got the impression he isn't too happy that he tangled with a demon or its vessel. I honestly can't tell if he's mad at himself or at Naruto. I have no idea what he's planning on doing in the future. Odd but a less severe reaction than I feared, Tsunade said. She'd just have to take measures in the future to avoid any bloodshed. Am I going to be punished, Hokage-sama? Kakashi calmly asked. Aside from the fact that you'll have to face Naruto if you cost him 2 friends. No, you won't be punished. You were preparing your comrades for a potential threat and I find it reasonable under the circumstances, the 5th replied. At the Junin's crestfallen look, she reassured him, don't worry, Hataki-san. Naruto's tougher than he looks and he's going to have to learn how to find true friends eventually. If they let a little thing like being a demon vessel get in the way of their friendship, then they aren't worth it anyways. But I doubt it'll come to that. Shikamaru is very loyal, despite his lazy attitude, and Neji is a good kid when his pride isn't getting in the way. I doubt they'll abandon him. You did make sure they understand the serious penalties that come with breaking that law, right? Yes, Hokage-sama, the copy nin answered confidently. They understand how serious the Sandame's rule is and they swore not to break it. Excellent. I think that right there is a good sign that not all the bridges have been burned between them, Tsunade said with a small smile on her face. Was there anything else you needed to tell me? Not that I can think of, Hokage-sama, but I'll let you know immediately if something I missed occurs to me, Kakashi replied. In that case, you're free to go. That arm of yours should be totally healed up in a week, Tsunade said as she rolled up the scroll on her desk. Kakashi nodded, before he stood to leave. The Hokage suddenly smacked her head and cursed. Shit, I almost forgot. You're friends with the Yamanaka's girl, right? Ino-san. I suppose you could call us that, Kakashi said as he eyed the Godime suspiciously. Did this woman know every part of his life or something? Why? What's wrong? According to Sakura-kun, Ino-san had some sort of fit just as the Kyuubi's chakra wave started, Tsunade said. She's suffered some unusual brain trauma as a result. The MRI results were strange, so I took a look for myself. Hundreds of her neural pathways were severed, though I don't know how or why. That caused many of the capillaries in her head to rupture and to fill her cranium with blood. Fortunately, the pressure was relieved out her sinuses and her ear canal, so she avoided permanent brain damage. Oddly, the neural pathways were already reconnecting themselves on their own. All I really did was speed up the process with a healing jutsu. She's stable now, though she's still unconscious. She's in the IC ward a few doors down from Naruto's old room if you want to visit her. I have to warn you though, I have no idea what she'll be like when she wakes up. The brain is a mystery even to me. There may be severe changes in her personality, so be careful when you talk to her. Kakashi's mind raced as he heard the news. He nodded at the Hokage and turned to leave, wanting to check on the girl. Tsunade's voice stopped him, in a creepy parody on the last time he'd been in here 3 days ago. Hataki-san, come back. There's something else I forgot to mention, the fifth said, her voice tense. The copy nin reluctantly moved back to his chair, hoping he wouldn't get chewed out about his habits again. He seriously hoped she wasn't going to make him give up Ika. Didn't these things come in 12-step programs? I had little chat with the council earlier, Tsunade said as she gave the Junin a serious look. There's something they had to say that you need to know. This is about Naruto, isn't it? Kakashi said, as realization set in. He doubted the council was interested in his perverted habits. The Junin sighed when Tsunade nodded. Damn, it sucked when he was right. So, you're finally waking up, huh? The first thing Ino noticed when she became aware of her surroundings, aside from the strange headache, was the familiar lazy voice of the copy ninja. She slowly opened her eyes and took in the sight of the hospital ceiling above her. She shifted her head to her left and looked at Kakashi's outline. The Junin was sitting in front of the window and though it was cloudy out, there was enough grayish light filtering in that the man's features were obscured in shadow. Hataki. You. Her voice came out dry and raspy. Her throat felt parched. Hang on. The figure moved a bit, though Ino couldn't really make him out. A large, standing lamp clicked on in the corner of the room and its yellow light made a pleasant contrast to the gray light from the window. The upper end of her bed suddenly rose with a mechanical whir, so the genin wound up reclining rather than laying. She blinked at the sudden sight of Kakashi's masked face right next to her. Here you go. Ino gratefully accepted the glass of water and drained it completely. The cold liquid helped to clear some of the fog from her head, but the strange feeling refused to leave. Kakashi's concern made her antsy, so she hastened to reassure him. I'm feeling okay, Hataki. My head is feeling weird, but aside from that I'm fine, the blonde said. Kakashi stared at her in surprise, though she couldn't really tell why. Really, a Junin should know to hide his emotions better. Okay, the copy ninja replied. His eye crinkled a bit, then he shrugged it off. Anyways, you almost gave Sakura-chan a heart attack. She says she understands now how Tsunade-sama got her fear of blood. Huh, what are you? Oh, yeah, Ino mumbled as she stared down at the empty glass in her hands. All the memories started coming back. Of the weird clone, her argument with Sakura, and the bizarre visions she'd had followed by that chakra terror. What happened? Well, you see, you had some sort of fit when Naruto did some weird ritual or something out in the middle of nowhere, Kakashi began, as he still carefully watched the girl. Why on earth was he checking her out to see if she was nuts? He could be a little more subtle about it. Tsunade-sama says your neural pathways were all severed and reconnected, which caused your brain itself to bleed. All that leaked out your nose, ear, and eye. That was actually a good thing, since it kept you alive, even if it did give Sakura-chan a panic attack. The Hokage herself checked you out after the MRI results came back odd. MRI. The genin repeated, not having any clue what the man was talking about. Ah, I had no idea what it was either, so I asked Shizune-san about it before I left the tower, the copy nin said while sheepishly scratching the back of his head. Turns out it's a medical machine that people used hundreds of years ago. When Tsunade-sama first came here and became Hokage, she found a few documents describing it and other machines in the old records. She sent out a survey team to one of the ruins of the old cities and they managed to find one of the units in a destroyed hospital. It was broken, but they were able to reverse engineer it. We've been using it for a little over a year now. We only have the one, but that's more than any other hidden village can brag. It's handy. It uses magnetic waves to make pictures of your entire body, though it's mostly used for the brain. Oh yeah. Sakura-chan said she'd give your earrings and those rings from your dress back whenever you woke up. Wearing metal in one of those machines is a bad thing, it seems. Okay, Ino replied, most of the jargon going over her head. It was kind of obvious Kakashi didn't know much more about it than she did, but she let that slide. So what else has happened? Well, you've been out for almost 4 days so far. I've been hanging around here for only a few hours. I just got back from a mission and I haven't had much sleep, so I was just about to take a nap, Kakashi answered. What kind of idiot do you take me for, Hitaki? The blonde scathingly snapped. You were going to read that damn perverted book of yours. Actually, you're right. I was going to read Ika Ika, the Junin said with his eye narrowed. His entire demeanor suddenly changed and he cheerfully said, anyways, you'll be happy to know we managed to catch Naruto. He pulled off a creepy jutsu that managed to make him stronger, which is why that wave hit everybody, but we were able to bring him back anyways. He's a little beat up, but he's just down the hall and perfectly safe. Why the hell are you lying to me, Hitaki? Ino snarled as her hand clenched the glass hard enough to crack it. If that's your idea of a fucking joke, then you must have been raised in a goddamn barn, you asshole. I was lying, Kakashi said seriously, his demeanor completely changing again. So tell me, how did you know that? It was obvious, jackass, the genin replied, her anger not dissipating in the slightest. You weren't hiding it at all. You're a pretty crappy Junin, you know. But what did I do that tipped you off? Where did I screw up? The copy nin continued, leaning forward a little bit as he stared at the girl. Easy. You were acting. You didn't. Ino trailed off as she realized that she had no idea how she knew the man had been lying. You know, not many people can tell a Junin is lying. Especially a genin, Kakashi continued, looking thoughtfully at her. So, how do you know I was planning on reading Ika Ika? Why did you reassure me when you first woke up, considering I didn't ask you a question? I don't know, the girl mumbled, growing a little panicky. Had she woken up? Was this another of her weird dreams? Calm down. I am calm, damn it. Ino yelled at Kakashi. Her anger faded at the man's shocked look. What is it now? Ino-san, I didn't say that out loud, the copy nin said with a wide-eyed look. The girl felt an icy chill of shock ripple up her spine. She felt a sense of pride radiate from Kakashi, just before he said, congrats. It looks like you have yourself a bloodline limit. That explains the headache, Ino muttered as she rubbed her temples. She set the cracked glass on the table and gave the Junin a sharp look. So how do I learn how to control it? Picking up people's emotions and occasional thoughts isn't very handy. Ah, there's the sharp-tongued girl I'm so fond of, Kakashi replied. He ignored the genin's growl of anger as he said, Tsunade-sama was worried that the rewiring your brain went through would alter your personality. I'm glad to see she was wrong. I told you I feel fine, except for this headache. Which, I might add, had better go away eventually, the blonde grumbled. A sudden wave of tiredness made her slump backwards on the bed. What the hell? Looks like your limit eats up chakra to use and you don't have much to spare right now, Kakashi noted as he stood up and walked towards a set of cabinets on the far side of the room. He rummaged around for a few moments, then came back with a small pill that he passed to Ino. The girl noticed that his left arm was bandaged and in a sling as the man walked back to his chair. Eat up. It's a soldier pill. I know you don't want to rely on them, but you need the boost in chakra since you can't control your bloodline yet. The genin glared at the pill for a moment, then popped it in her mouth and chewed it down. A surge in energy revitalized her and she was able to sit upright again. Okay, so what's really going on? Ino asked, her mind clearing as her headache faded somewhat. What's up with Naruto and why is your arm busted up? Kakashi sighed and said, Naruto escaped Konoha 5 days ago using a series of techniques that no one in our village has ever heard of. Even in the old records and the Forbidden Scroll, there's no mention of anything like those jutsu. 3 days ago, his escape was discovered, though by then it was too late and he performed an unknown ritual in the northwestern woods of Fire Country. That was the cause of the bizarre chakra wave everyone felt. Myself and 3 others were dispatched to find him and learn what he did. It took us 2 days to track him down before we were finally able to find the place where he performed the ritual. Why are you telling me this like it's a mission briefing? The genin questioned, her eyes narrowing. She felt something shift from the copy ninja and she found herself unable to sense what he was thinking. The place was a wasteland, Kakashi continued, ignoring the girl's question. The land was stripped clean of trees and most of its topsoil in a circle about 3 miles wide. We found many strange seals burned into solid rock at the very center of the field. There was a rather odd incident that resulted in my arm being injured, but I won't bore you with the details. After searching the entire circle, we found a pile of sound nin bodies that had been crushed into pulp. There was evidence that Gaara of the Sand killed them and either helped Naruto to escape or abducted him. Why are you telling me this? Ino asked, a thread of fear coiling through her at the mention of Gaara. We didn't run into anything else and I was able to return and give a full debriefing to the Hokage. She in turn told me about your status. She also repeated a plan that the council is putting into action, Kakashi continued, again ignoring the genin's question. Why are you telling me this? Ino yelled, the surrealism of the situation getting to her. What the hell is wrong, Hatake? Why are you acting so weird? Kakashi's head lowered and his eye closed. He gave a tired sigh and refocused his attention on the genin. Naruto has been declared a B-class missing nin. The Anbu commander has also placed orders that he be apprehended on sight and killed if he resists in any way, the Junin stated in a monotone voice. Ino gasped in shock. She tried to speak for several moments, but could only move her mouth with no words coming out. She finally managed to choke out, why? He's only a genin, for Kami's sake. Why the hell would they make him such a high-ranked criminal? Kakashi shrugged and said, well, he's been a Sannin's apprentice for almost 2 years. He's also learned an A-rank battle jutsu and has stolen a jutsu from the Forbidden Scroll. That makes him a far worse threat than any normal genin. What rank is Sasuke? Ino demanded, her question seemingly coming out of left field. At the Junin's confused stare, she continued, I know you're lying, Hatake, or at least you're hiding the real reason. What class missing nin is Sasuke? And tell the truth. I'll know if you're lying anyways. The copy ninja hesitated, then said, C class, with orders to capture alive if at all possible. So why the hell is the dead last a worse criminal than the Uchiha prodigy? The genin continued, her sharp blue-gray eyes boring into the Junin's. For an instant, he could have sworn they changed color. I can guess why they want Sasuke back. They're desperate for a breed-able Sharingan to come back to Konoha. But why are they using any excuse they can grab to kill Naruto off? When you're right, Ino-san, Kakashi said as his eye drooped worse than usual. The council would forgive almost anything Sasuke has done as a sound nin, as long as it meant they get their Uchiha trump card back. The C rank is in place only because Tsunade interfered and had his class raised from D. She also altered the orders so that Leaf Nins can kill him if necessary. The commander wanted orders for him to be left alive at all costs, even if he attacked our shinobi. With an idiot like that in charge, it's no wonder Anbu takes such high casualties, Ino dryly said, not knowing she was repeated the Hokage's words from several days earlier. At the Junin's raised eyebrow, she continued, come on. Even the genins hear about it. Anbu has the highest mortality rate in Konoha, rather than the least. You'd think it would be the opposite, considering they're supposed to be so skilled. Something has to be wrong with that. Everyone from the Rookie 9 wants to be an elite Junin or at least a special Junin, like you and those weird examiners. No one wants to get killed less than a year after promotion. I know you agree with me, so don't even deny it. Behind his mask, Kakashi smirked. This girl had potential. He was glad he had agreed to Tsunade's proposal, even if it was suggested by the council. You're exactly correct, Ino-san, the copy nin said as he leaned back in his chair. The commander is more than a little foolish. Fortunately, Tsunade-sama is the exact opposite. He wanted Naruto declared S-class and killed on sight, but she was able to force it down to its current rank. Though it seems bad, she's given Naruto some freedom to be able to come back without getting killed immediately. It could have been much worse. S-class. Ino shrieked, her regained calm shredded like confetti. What the hell would possess that man to declare a genin an S-class criminal? Funny you should say. Possess, Kakashi muttered. He paused when he noticed the girl's questioning look. He'd made his decision on the way to the hospital. If Ino was going to be a part of the council's plan, then she had the right to know why. He just hoped Tsunade would forgive him again. At least he had an excuse this time, though the Sannin would probably see right through it. Ino-san, focus your attention on me and try to see what I'm showing you, okay? Concentrate on my thoughts as hard as you can. Let them flow into you. My vision becomes your vision. My hearing becomes your hearing. Concentrate. Ino frowned at the Junin's words, but obeyed. She focused hard on the copy nin, who had closed his eye in concentration. At first nothing happened. She was just staring like a fool at the Junin. Then, she suddenly wasn't seeing him anymore. She was seeing a bizarre double image of normal vision and the flows of chakra through objects and people. With one half of her vision, she saw a source of chakra that was so intense it looked like a red sun. She saw a yellow-haired, bleeding man standing atop a massive frog that had an open wound across its left eye. The man stared defiantly at the bright chakra and performed a jutsu that summoned a hazy specter behind him that only her chakra vision could see. A hideous, tattooed hand flowed out from the man's chest and reached out towards Kami-sama. That thing was the Kyuubi no Kitsune. A dark and powerful fox demon, so large it exceeded even Gamabunta in size, whom she now recognized. 9 tails that crackled and burned with power swirled overhead, ready to lash out at anything that came too close. The fox apparently didn't consider the hand a threat and instead swept a paw at a group of shinobi perched in the trees between a couple flattened buildings, killing them all before they had the chance to even scream. It started to move deeper into the shattered village, but was halted suddenly. The hand had grabbed the demon's chest and pulled a monstrous, swirling ball of energy out from the beast. The fox froze and its body suddenly crumbled into dust. As Ino watched, she saw Gamabunta rush the man and the huge mass of energy across the burning village to the Hokage's tower. The vision faded and a new one appeared in its place. Ino saw the blonde man and the Sandame standing over an altar in a room that was covered in seals. As she watched, the man performed a series of high-level jutsu and used the hideous hand to press the red mass into a bundle lying on top of the altar. With a blaze of fire and kanji script, the energy flowed into it and the hand retracted itself back into his chest. As she watched, the man said something inaudible to the third, before he collapsed to the ground. Somehow, Ino knew he was dead, even as the vision moved forward and an unfamiliar, gloved hand reached out to check the man's pulse. The double vision was suddenly clouded and distorted as it stared at the man's handsome face. A shrill sound broke the silence and the same gloved hand reached up to swipe the tears away. Ino recognized the unfamiliar sound, though she'd only heard it a few times in her life. A baby crying. The dual vision turned and slowly moved to where the Sandame was leaning over the altar, making soothing sounds to the bundle. Slowly, the she moved around the Hokage and got her first good look at what lay on the pedestal. A growing horror rose in the girl as the gloved hand reached forward and gently tugged the blankets aside. A baby, splattered in ink and so young that its navel was still bleeding. A baby with a blonde tuft of hair and 3 black slashes on each cheek. A baby with a jet black spiral surrounding its navel and a complex seal encasing both. A baby who calmed down as her gloved hands gently lifted it up and rocked it to settle it down. A baby who opened its squinty eyes to stare up at her. Electric blue eyes. Ino was suddenly back in herself and gagging as bile rose in her throat. Kakashi immediately helped her up and into the bathroom where she emptied her stomach, which really had nothing in it, into the toilet. After several minutes of dry heaving and swirling some cheap hospital mouthwash, the genin found herself back in her bed, trying to erase the image from her mind. Well, you handled it better than I did, Kakashi said with a cheerful tone. You mean you puked all over Sandame's shoes or something? Ino said in a raspy tone, grateful for the distraction. Well no, but I did get drunk off my ass for a week straight afterwards, the copy nin said with a shrug. Because of what they did to that baby? The genin asked, her stomach turning again, though she held it in. That and that blonde man was the Yondaime, my sensei, Kakashi replied with a downcast look in his eye. That baby, that was Naruto, wasn't it? Ino said as more of statement than a question. At the Junin's weary nod, she continued, and the Kyuubi, it wasn't killed, was it? No, the fox is very much alive. At least as long as Naruto is, the copy nin answered. So this whole time, Naruto's had a demon trapped inside him, Ino stated, as she looked down at the linen on her bed. She suddenly chuckled, drawing a surprised look from Kakashi. And just a few days ago me and Sakura were wondering why everyone acted so weird around him. They hate him, don't they? All the adults. And us kids must have picked up on it too. Like a bunch of sheep. Fools following fools. Fuck. I can't believe we were so stupid. Kakashi stared in surprise as Ino's eyes glowed an eerie teal color for several seconds as she gritted her teeth in rage. As the color faded back to her natural blue-gray, the genin gave him a fierce look. When did he learn about the Kyuubi? Did he always know, or did he spend his entire childhood wondering why people hated him? The blonde girl demanded. The copy nin's shoulders slumped and he replied in a sad voice, Sandame-sama told me Naruto learned he was a demon vessel the night he graduated from the academy. The third had made a law that prohibited anyone from speaking about the Kyuubi incident. A traitor schoolteacher told Naruto the truth when he tried to kill the boy and Iruka-san. The night he graduated, Ino repeated with an incredulous look on her face. That means 12 years. He spent the first 12 years of his life being a hated outcast and no one even had the decency to tell him why. It's a feeble excuse, but there is a law in place. The Sandame dealt harshly with anyone who spoke or did anything harmful to Naruto. He even sent a high-ranking Anbu to the Wind Country's shinobi prison for talking about it in public, Kakashi said. Okay, so Sarutobi had really sent the guy to Wind Prison for punching a 6-year-old Naruto out in the middle of the market sector, but it had also been for screaming demon at the top of his lungs. Same difference. He sighed at the look in the genin's eyes and continued, and even if I had been allowed, I had a hard time even looking at him for years. I never blamed Naruto for the incident, but he was still a reminder of the night my sensei died. Not exactly fair, but I am human after all. Ino sagged backwards and rested her head against the pillow. Her anger drained away at the honest remorse in the Junin's voice. And it really wasn't his fault. Even if it was, the damage had already been done. Nothing she said or did could change that. Now she was wondering how she could have missed all the weird signs. Granted, she wasn't very close to Naruto, but she still should have seen something odd. Shit, no wonder he was always trying to get attention by any means necessary. It was almost pathological. Actually, it probably was pathological, considering how Naruto had grown up. So what happens now? Ino dryly asked as she looked over at Kakashi. He's gone, the council wants him dead, and I have a bloodline I can't control. The Junin was silent for several long minutes. He appeared to be seriously considering something over, so Ino allowed him time to think. Her own mind wandered a bit, carefully feeling out the variety of different buzzing sounds that seemed to be coming from all over the place. The girl almost jumped when the Junin's eye focused on her with a serious expression. From now on, you're my official apprentice. It's already been decided and okayed by the Hokage. Okay, she was not expecting him to say that. Excuse me, Ino asked with a bewildered look on her face. I've already cleared it with Asuma-san. With Shikamaru-kun and Choji-kun already chunin, there isn't much point in having you on his team. He said you're too high maintenance for him anyways. So, I guess I should say something official like, ahem. Welcome to Team 7, Ino-san. Though it's only the two of us, Kakashi said with a slight eye smile. Why? The genin asked, sensing that the man wasn't telling her something. I mean, I'm grateful, but there's a big difference between looking over my training on the weekends and having me as your personal student. Why the sudden change? Kakashi's eye darkened as he said, first official lesson of Team 7, Ino-san. Read underneath the underneath. Your hint is, the council. And try not to use your bloodline. Ino broke eye contact with the man to avoid focusing her thoughts on his. The council. Why the hell would they give a shit if Kakashi trained her? Accelerated training was great and all, but she didn't want to have anything to do with people who acted so hypocritically. With the way they handled the situations with Sasuke and Naruto, there was no way she'd trust them too. Oh shit. This had to be a fucking joke. Naruto, Ino stated firmly as she looked up at the Junin. She didn't have to feel Kakashi's mind to know she was right. Let me guess. All the other members of the Rookie 9 and Guy's team are receiving heightened training as well. The copy nin nodded. They want his friends to be strong enough to kill him when he gets back. They're setting up an ambush for whenever he returns to Konoha, and they're trying to use the only people that have ever cared about him to do the dirty deed. Am I right? Ino said in a low, dangerous voice. Got it in one shot, Kakashi said, leaning back in his chair. His tone had a hard edge to it as he said, the Anbu commander and the council have forced the Hokage into a bad position. One of the things they bargained for was, like you said, accelerated training for each of you from your crowd. The idea, of course, being that if the Kyuubi has taken over Naruto or he's become too dangerous, he may let his guard down near one of you long enough to be assassinated. I find it disgusting to try to turn comrades against comrades. If they make a habit of such a practice, then we'll eventually have a repeat of the Hidden Mist massacre. I won't kill him, you know. Not because some old fool tells me to, Ino stated firmly when the Junin's dialogue dropped off. I won't murder a friend, even if I don't know him very well. I hate to say it, Ino-san, but we may not have a choice. If the Kyuubi is in control, then Naruto will have to be put down. I think the council is going overboard with trying to hunt him down and kill him without learning anything of the situation, but we still need to be prepared just in case. I might have to do the deed myself, the copy ninja stated with a tired tone to his voice. The girl's face fell as she stared down at her lap. Damn, this sucks. Hey, don't look so downtrodden, Kakashi said with a cheer that was only slightly forced. Don't think about what might happen with Naruto for now. Just take this as an opportunity to grow, just like you wanted. And cheer up a bit. You have a chance to catch up to Sakura-chan and the rest now. Ino looked up at him for a long moment, before a smile broke across her face. You're right. I'll show everyone who's the best. The genin declared with a confident half grin. Then her face turned a little sheepish as she said, we are going to work on controlling my bloodline, right? First thing I was planning on training you on, Kakashi stated with a firm nod. We still have to figure out all the things it can do. Good, Ino cheerfully said. Then her expression turned dark as she glared at the Junin. Because if I catch you thinking any kinky thoughts about me, I'll invent a castration jutsu just for you. I wouldn't dream of it, the copy ninja said with solemn voice that was only offset by the nervous sweat drop on the side of his head. Cool, where do we start? The blonde girl said with a cheerful smile. I've requested 6 months leave for a training trip. The Hokage wasn't very happy to have me gone for so long, but I've got permission as long as we do the occasional mission out there, Kakashi replied. We leave as soon as you feel well enough to go. Great, Ino exclaimed. Suddenly, an odd look crossed her face. Hitaki, did anyone think to tell Iruka-sensei the news? Kakashi stared at her with a blank look for several moments, before he managed one phrase. Oh shit. What the hell do you mean, he's gone? Iruka roared as he repeatedly slammed the ANBU's face into the wall. After 3 days of hard running from Wind Country, he was not in the mood for excuses upon finding Naruto's hospital room empty and a few Anbu milling about investigating the place. He was currently in the middle of demonstrating exactly why his students avoided his temper. With a loud crack, the ANBU's snake mask split in half and Iruka let the man slump to the ground, totally unconscious. He turned towards the other Anbu, who immediately shrank back at the killer intent he was radiating. Really, a schoolteacher had no business being so scary. Who was guarding him? Iruka hissed as an aura of malevolent shadows seemed to crawl around him. As one, all the Anbu pointed at the man in the cat mask, who was still having trouble sitting down. The elite shinobi gulped as the Chunin stalked towards him. Oh shit. Son of a bitch. I hate clones. Kakashi idly watched Ino work herself up in a rage as she fought 4 of his cage bunchins. He had to admit, it probably wasn't very fair of him, but the high levels of training were showing great improvement in his student already. He stretched a bit and relaxed a little more against the boulder he was leaning on. Maybe he should encourage her a little. It would be the right thing to do, as her teacher and all. You're doing great, Ino-chan. Pretty soon you might be able to beat one of them. Fuck off, Hitaki. The Junin chuckled at his student's foul remark. In the 4 months that they'd been a team, he'd gotten used to her violent mood swings. At least she didn't keep it all bottled inside like Sakura and Sasuke did. And she tended to think things through more than Naruto had. She made a pretty good teammate, overall. She still had a ways to go, but she was getting there. They got along pretty well, too. Kakashi quickly disguised a guffaw as a sneeze when one of his clones performed a leg sweep that sent Ino tumbling ass over ankles. I heard that, you rotten bastard. Fight me yourself, you chicken shit, instead of letting your clones do all the dirty work. We already talked about that, Ino-chan. You're doing fine, just make sure to dodge next time. Useless, piece of crap sensei. That hurts, Ino-chan. Bite me. Okay, so usually they got along. When Ino got frustrated, cranky was an understatement. It made dealing with her a bit of a trial, though she usually apologized for the bruises to his ego and scalp later. They worked too well together to seriously fight over anything. It was getting to the point where they could read each other's moves and attitude without too much difficulty. She had read his intentions about this training session easily enough, though her earlier statement was only partially true. Kakashi was reluctant to fight her personally, though it wasn't out of cowardice or as an insult to her skills. It was to improve her overall as a shinobi. Ino's bloodline limit was very powerful in combat, though not very impressive in appearance. When she concentrated on an opponent, she could read their surface thoughts and anticipate their moves. This put her on even footing with shinobi twice as strong as her. In terms of anticipating an enemy's intentions, her limit exceeded even Kakashi's Sharingan. With her skills growing rapidly, Ino was a tricky opponent for even the copy nin to beat, even if he outclassed her completely. She still hadn't beaten him even without the Sharingan, but she'd managed to land some pretty serious blows here and there. Unfortunately, she was getting way too used to his thinking patterns, so he had her duel with clones instead. Without a real brain to think with, a Cage Bunshin proved to be a much harder opponent than the real thing for Ino. It forced her to build her taijutsu and ninjutsu rapidly, which she was grateful for, even if she got her ass kicked every time. It was painfully obvious she still had much room for improvement. Which was why they were out here in the middle of Western Fire Country, a day's travel from any village. This close to Wind County, the trees were spread further apart and the area was much drier than what they were used to in Konoha. The hills gently rolled out here and there were plenty of wide open fields to practice in. Enough shade to relax in and enough room to work. Perfect for a martial artist. Kakashi's boulder was in the shade of a few small evergreen trees and he was currently enjoying the lazy summer afternoon, even if Ino wasn't. A slight shudder in the chakra within his left hand reminded the copy ninja of the odd seal he'd been wearing for several months. Thanks to Tsunade's medical expertise, his left arm had healed up to perfect fighting condition in a week. The seal remained, however. Neither the Hokage nor Jiraiya-sama could remove either spiral mark, no matter how much chakra they poured into it. Hell, Jiraiya couldn't even alter it or make a blocking seal around it. Whatever the hell it was on a whole different level than the seal used by the Akatsuki on Naruto. On the plus side, it wasn't harmful to Kakashi in any real way. Occasionally, he felt ripples in the chakra of his left hand that would make it hard to maintain a jutsu, but aside from that, neither spiral mark had done anything to him. At least it wasn't another blasted cursed seal. The only truly harmful thing that had happened was an incident when Kakashi had gone off by himself for a while to practice alone. He had powered up a Chidori in his left hand and rushed at the side of a rock outcrop. Part of the way there, a ripple passed through the seals and his Chidori had blazed out of control. The jutsu grew 3 times larger in seconds and threatened to burn his entire hand off. Kakashi had little choice but to continue his path and slam his hand into the cliff side. The hole it had made was much larger than usual, though not as deep. He had no idea why his chakra had burned out of control like that, and he wasn't exactly sure he wanted to know. From then on, 2 things changed. 1. He swore not to use his best jutsu with his left hand until he could figure out what the hell was going on. Actually, he hadn't even done a Chidori period since then. And 2. Ino never let him train alone again. The copy nin wasn't sure if that was a good or a bad thing. Ino had just grumbled something about her sensei getting himself killed before he made himself useful. Another scathing curse ripped through the air as the genin fell prey to a double team the clones had pulled on her. Kakashi sighed a bit. Really, where had that girl learned such language? She could peel steel off a frying pan with that sharp tongue of hers. The Junin immediately forced himself to avoid following that mental image into a more perverted line of thinking. Ino's threat from the hospital room was occasionally reminded with a couple of mock swipes of a kunai whenever he got lax in his alternative fantasies. Oh well, at least she hadn't tried to take Ika from him. That would have resulted in battle, no 2 ways about it. The copy nin sighed as he watched his student go flying through the air again. Despite her seemingly poor progress, Ino really was improving a great deal. She was constantly learning new tricks to her bloodline limit, her chakra reserves and control were getting higher, and her skill in ninjutsu and taijutsu were growing very well. The hard work also showed in her appearance, as she'd lost the rail-thin look she'd previously had and she'd put on a decent amount of needed weight in muscle. She was still slender, though nothing short of steroids or a kinjutsu would change that, but she'd gotten a lean, defined look that was very attractive. Kakashi had noticed the way some of the rookie 9 and other shinobi her age, and not looked at her the few times they'd been back to Konoha. She blew off any offers though, saying she had more important things to worry about. The Junin didn't pry, but he was curious about who she wanted to show off her good looks to. Ino's hair and dress were a different style now, though she still wore all those bandages. Her hair was a short, simple cut that ended at her neckline. In one of their sparring matches, Kakashi had demonstrated how long hair could be a disadvantage when he'd grabbed his student by her long, blonde ponytail and flung her 20 feet across the training grounds. The Junin had gotten kneed in the crotch for his stunt, but he'd managed to drive the point home. Unless you're really strong, don't let things hang off you that an opponent can grab onto. Ino had shown up the next day with her new hairstyle, which she claimed was a variant of the way she wore her hair in the academy, and acted like nothing was different. Her dress hadn't changed much. All she'd really done was adjusted the skirt and made sure there were no loose flaps that could be grabbed. The look was simple, yet not surprisingly, she pulled it off and made it look stunning. Combined with her new physique and a greater confidence in her abilities, it was no wonder half the genins and chunins in Konoha stared at her when she walked by. Kakashi had even noticed Sakura watching the blonde girl oddly, though he had a feeling it was due to envy at the girl's sudden growth. He lecherously grinned at the thought that it might be something else, however unlikely that may be. Bad Kakashi. No naughty thoughts for you. A voice that sounded like Rin's and Obito's combined said in his head. He couldn't restrain the grin at the thought of what his fallen teammates would do to him if they caught him being so perverted. His face fell a little when he reminded himself that he'd never hear their voices again in this lifetime. Beyond maybe, but not while he was here on this earth. A scream of fury tore through the Junin's melancholy thoughts. Glancing up, Kakashi noticed Ino try her Kaden technique to give herself some breathing room. The clones had been half expecting such a move and they all leapt over the fire plume. The genin displayed her improvement as she chalked the move briefly and swiveled her head upwards and let out an even larger burst of fire. Even caught off guard, most of the clones still had the reflexes to move out the way. One wasn't so lucky and it disappeared in a cloud of ninja smoke as the chakra-enhanced flames engulfed it. Good job, Ino-chan. Panting, Ino gave the copy nin a brief thumbs up before she rushed the clones again. Kakashi smiled proudly behind his mask. He was impressed, both with her improvement and his ability to teach. After the original Team 7 turned out to be a disaster due largely to his own actions, his confidence in his teaching prowess had been shaken badly, even if he didn't show it. Training Ino one-on-one had proven his fears wrong. He'd screwed up royal with his first students, but he was doing something right by teaching the blonde girl. Perhaps he just made a better teacher for a single student than he did for a team. Oh well, it wasn't like he could test that anytime soon. The other teams were doing their own hidden training and the only other students he was interested in anyways would be Lee or Neji. And the day Guy gave his prized students to his rival was the day the Time Master admitted that Shikamaru's attitude was a good idea. Well, for now Kakashi would just focus on turning Ino into a deadly kunoichi. The Junin winced as one his clones landed a punch to the girl's midriff that dropped the genin like a sack of potatoes. It was too bad she couldn't use her illusions on the clones like she could on the real thing. She'd be doing much better. At least she wouldn't be on the defensive as much. As far as her genjutsu, both Kakashi and Ino had been mildly disappointed to learn that she wasn't exceptionally talented in that area. That's not to say that she couldn't create powerful illusions, it's just that her talent seemed to lie in ninjutsu. It took the genin a great deal more work and effort to learn a genjutsu than it did for her to learn any other skill. The ones she did learn were impressive though. Like she'd originally suspected, when Ino combined her bloodline with a genjutsu, it was hell on earth to try to escape. The last time she and Kakashi had sparred, he'd been forced to briefly unveil the Sharingan to escape an endless maze illusion she'd trapped him in. Against a normal opponent, it was absolutely devastating. She still had to work hard to pull off the enhanced illusion though. Using her bloodline at such high levels burned through a large amount of her reserves. On top of that, Ino still hadn't fully gotten the hang of the technique yet, so using her blood limit on such an offensive scale was still beyond her in active combat. But damn, when she perfected that illusion technique, she'd be a force to be reckoned with. Kakashi sometimes wondered if even his Sharingan could break an illusion powerful enough to trap him inside his own mind. He even wondered if she would ever be able to perform illusions on the scale of Itachi's Tsukuyomi when she mastered it. He had mentioned such a thing once to the girl and allowed her to see his memories of the event, but she had to admit that the rogue Uchiha's genjutsu was leagues ahead of her. She had carefully taken note of its effects, however, and Kakashi had a feeling he'd just given her a goal to work towards. Hopefully she wouldn't want to test it on him. The copy nin thoughtfully watched as Ino rolled aside to avoid a downward axe kick from one of his clones. The girl struggled to her feet and prepared another jutsu. She was determined, he had to give her that. If she could use her limit-enhanced genjutsu on these things, she would have a great advantage in the fight. Still, an illusion was only an illusion. Ino hadn't learned any really dangerous ninjutsu techniques to supplement her ability yet. She could trap an opponent in as many mazes as she wanted, but if she couldn't finish the enemy off, then what good was it? The only genjutsu he knew of that actually harmed an opponent was that thrice-damned Tsukuyomi, which was still far beyond her. What the girl needed was a fast and powerful technique that could finish her opponent quickly before they broke free of her illusions. The Junin sat bolt upright. Could she learn? Maybe. It might be limited, but she could pull it off. She'd need a hell of lot of stamina training, but it might be a good jutsu in her hands. Ino glanced up curiously as all of the cage buncheons disappeared in a puff of chakra smoke. What's up, Hitaki? I wasn't doing that badly, was I? The genin asked as she rested her hands on her knees to catch her breath. Ino-chan, come over here. There's a jutsu I want to show you. Time moves funny, you know. Some people say it's all relative. If you went to heaven for an hour and came back, it would probably feel like you were only there for a minute. But if you put your hand on a hot frying pan for a minute, you'd swear afterwards it had been an hour. And if someone you love is in trouble and you have no idea where they are or even if they're alive, every second feels like an eternity, but you'd still be surprised at how fast time moves by overall. That was the impression Tsunade had as she sat down at her desk on the first day of May, exactly 1 year after Naruto disappeared. It wasn't late or anything, being only about 10 in the morning, but even the few hours she'd been awake had felt like years. It was like eagerly waiting for a visiting family member to show up and watching the clock crawl by. If anyone was suspicious about her odd attitude, they hid it well. The Hokage distracted herself from her worry that one of the Anbu would kill her little brother by focusing on the paperwork on her desk. Unbidden, thoughts of the previous year slowly worked her way into her thoughts now that she wasn't focusing on Naruto. After the council started up their scheme, the 4 teams of the rookie 9+ guy had started training in earnest, though the only non-Junins that knew the full truth were Ino, Shikamaru, and Neji. Tsunade had hidden the truth from Sakura, even as she redoubled the girls' training. Each team had grown tremendously. Team 8 was doing well, as Kurenai had finally gotten Hinata a little more confident and Kiba a little less. They weren't a spectacular team, but they had yet to fail a mission and were very dependable. Team 10 was doing alright. Shikamaru had taken an interest in exercising his already formidable brain and Shoji was taking his training more seriously. Unfortunately, the team felt incomplete minus a 4th member and none of the members were gung-ho about high levels of effort. Still, they were doing okay. Guy's team was the spectacular one. Lee's taijutsu was only surpassed by his mentor Guardian. Neji had tripled the intensity of his training after the failed mission to find Naruto and was now only surpassed in the Hyuga family style by Hiashi and a handful of the branch members. Tenten was nothing to sneeze at either, as she'd started learning a wider variety of skills after her failure to defeat Temari in the Chunin exams. Despite Lee still being a genin, the team refused to handle any missions lower than B rank. They had rarely failed any assignment they were handed, no matter how difficult it was. They put the fear of God into the sound whenever they went outside Fire Country. And Team 7. Team 7 was incredible. There was no other way to say it. Despite having only 2 members, the team's reputation had grown tremendous in the 6 months it had been on active duty. After taking Ino on as his official student, Kakashi had requested a solid half-year to train her and get her up to speed, since she was lagging so far behind her peers. Tsunade had reluctantly agreed, seeing the copy nin's logic, but still not wanting to lose one of her most skilled shinobi for half 6 months when they were hurting so badly for experienced leaf nins. The investment had paid off though, and when they'd returned from the long training trip, both shinobi had grown in power and skill. Kakashi had improved from having a challenging sparring partner, and Ino, well, she was just plain impressive. Her bloodline limit was a perfect complement to Kakashi's, allowing her to catch the few things that his Sharingan missed. Her ability to sense lies from even experienced Junin and Anbu-level ninja was invaluable on spying missions. Her hellishly powerful illusions made interrogation or assassinations a snap. Several other Junins had asked Kakashi to borrow her on tricky missions, though Copy Nin only agreed if he thought it would be good experience for his student. Even Ibiki occasionally asked for the Genin's assistance on particularly tricky interrogations. The girl had looked disturbingly pleased after coming back from one of those sessions. Kakashi had later confided in Tsunade that Ino was trying to develop a genjutsu that could completely incapacitate an opponent through pain or some other unpleasant experience. The Godime didn't know whether to be pleased or worried by that piece of information. Team 7 had quickly proven that D, C, and even most B-rank missions were a waste of their talent. At Kakashi's request, and Ino's pleading, they regularly took A-rank missions. Tsunade was reluctant to allow a genin to go on such dangerous missions, but they had proven themselves capable of handling it. They rarely failed a mission, and it was usually due to outside interference when they did. Hell, they rarely got injured. Their tag teaming was deadly to anyone they came across. Rumor had it that only the stupidest or most arrogant, or both, sound nins tried to face the two of them in combat. Few survived afterwards. Tsunade was quite pleased with their results and the number of enemy ninjas they took out. Team 7 was a major asset for Konoha and one they sorely needed during these turbulent times. In the months following Orochimaru's declaration, much of what Kakashi predicted to Sakura and Ino had come to pass. Sound nins attacked leaf nins everywhere outside of Fire Country. It seemed Tsunade's old teammate had an open-door policy for his nation. Missing nins from every country, including Konoha, though they were rare, were joining up under the Snake Sanin. Rumor had it he was even hiring mercenaries and bandits to use as cannon fodder against Konoha. Though most of the Sound's forces were weak in comparison to Leaf Nins, they still managed to rack up casualties through sheer numbers. Often, the actual Sound ninjas would use jutsu to turn the riffraff into berserker units to distract Leaf Shinobi while they assassinated from a distance. Konoha's active forces had been on the rise and had reached about 65% their original number of ninjas, but in 5 months Orochimaru had managed to cut that level down to almost 50%. Tsunade was half expecting an invasion any day and was making plans to have all teams recalled, including Team 7, when the casualty rate dropped. Encounters with the Sound started growing rarer, and not even Jiraiya, who was in and out of Konoha all the time these days scrounging for information, could find the cause. Within 3 months, Leaf Nins were having conflicts with Sound agents only about 1 of every 4 missions they went on. What's more, most of those encounters were against the riffraff. Fights with actual fully trained Sound nins were only about 1 in every 5 encounters with Orochimaru's forces. Tsunade had no idea what was causing the decline. Orochimaru certainly wouldn't call off such a successful campaign so early, and the Sand hadn't reported anything unusual in terms of their kills. Even Gaara, who had reappeared after a 2.5-month absence, hadn't been killing more Sound nins than usual. The few enemies they managed to capture alive thought nothing at all was wrong. Either Orochimaru was unaware of the slack or he wasn't telling his ninjas all that he knew. Knowing her teammate, Tsunade figured it was the latter. Well, she wasn't one to look a gift horse and all that. The decline in fighting had given the Leaf an amount of breathing room, for which the Fifth was thankful. Tsunade occasionally wondered, usually after half a bottle of sake, if Naruto had anything to do with this new trend. It amused her a bit and was a way of reassuring herself through fantasy that the boy was still their ally no matter what he'd done with the Kyuubi. Her analytical mind said, no, however. There had been absolutely 0 sightings of Naruto since he'd disappeared. Hell, there weren't even sightings of people who vaguely resembled him. The Akatsuki showed more blips on their radar than a 15-year-old boy did. Their only lead, Gaara, had proven a dead end. The case cage had told her that the possessed boy had only shrugged whenever he was asked about it. Understandably, there wasn't a soul in the Sand willing to press the issue with the unstable demon vessel. If Naruto was behind this Sound's recession, then he was doing a damn good job of hiding himself, which Tsunade doubted was the case. Not that she contested his ability, but Naruto was Naruto and subtle wasn't one of his fortes. And neither was the Kyuubi known for it either. Tsunade set a scroll down and leaned back in her chair. She sighed as she stared at the door. Any minute, Naruto could walk right in. She was so worried about him. This was almost as bad as Dan and Naoki all over again. Any minute he could. Ba-chan, why are you staring at the door? Of course, leave it to Naruto to come in through the window when she was expecting him to come in through the door. Tsunade tried to turn in her chair, but suddenly found she couldn't. Great, he must have used a jutsu on her. And she hadn't even sensed him approach. What a lovely day. Don't get up on my account. Here is this easier. Slowly, Naruto walked into the Hokage's line of sight. Tsunade's eyes widened as she got her first look at the boy. Naruto hadn't changed at all. His form was identical to the day he'd first left on his training trip with Jiraiya 2.5 years ago. What the hell? You look surprised. Don't worry, it's just an illusion. Kind of like you, Naruto said. He set a large, lumpy bag on the table in front of her. A feeling of dread wormed its way into Tsunade's gut. She really didn't want to know what was in that thing. And she didn't want to know what the boy really looked like. Hey, wanna see something cool? Naruto said with one hand cupped around his mouth like it was some big secret. Here, I'll show you. Tsunade would have screamed if she could have. The boy changed though he looked the same physically. Staring into his blue eyes, she had the insane feeling of something, red and black behind them. Something old and evil, something that terrified her. Is this easier? The bag opened and blood spilled out from it and across her desk, soaking all the mission reports. Naruto reached a hand into it and pulled something out. He set it on the desk in front of her. Is this easier? Orochimaru's severed head stared at her with a frozen look of horror. A white, feathery wing ripped out of Naruto's back and spread itself in the air. Or perhaps this is. Jiraiya's head was set next to the snake's and the pervert's face had a quirky grin on it. A black, leathery wing tore out of the other side of the boy's back. Is this the easiest? Uchiha Sasuke's head was set in between the first two. Naruto's hand warped into something and crushed the boy's skull into pulpy matter. A single Sharingan eyeball floated in the bloody puddle towards Tsunade. The flesh on Naruto's body ripped off, exposing a pink-red skeleton with the two mismatched wings growing out of it. The boy's face remained intact and his bright blue eyes stared at her with every emotion known to man playing through them. So tell me, Tsunade-sama, is it easy? The fifth tried to respond, tried to jerk away, tried to do anything, but she could only watch as the tower was broke up around them and swept away by a violent gale of wind. She still couldn't move as she was forced to listen while the people of Konoha screamed as they were massacred by things. Geez, Tsunade-sama, I would think you'd recognize one of your own nightmares. And they call you a Sanin. Confusion moved through her as she stared at the twisted boy's face. He grinned and said, Tsunade-sama. The fifth Hokage of the leaf jerked upright from her desk, a mission report stuck to the side of her face. She whirled on the hand touching her shoulder and almost struck the person it belonged to. Like every time this happened, she managed to stop herself just before it landed. Shizune didn't even blink at the action, far too used to it and far too trusting in her mentor to give a reaction. Hee, you have something stuck to your face, Tsunade-sama, the younger medic giggled as she reached out to peel the paper off the Hokage's cheek. Her humor fell at the horrified look in Tsunade's eyes. Bad dream. Yes, a very bad dream. Thank the kami, the fifth replied, knowing she couldn't fool her protective student. Well, that was just about the most terrifying dream she'd ever had. If Naruto had really turned out like that, then she would have died from shock alone. Cheer up a bit, okay. It was just a dream. You wouldn't want to scare Naruto-kun more than he deserves when he gets back, would you? Shizune said as she straightened out some of the scattered files on the fifth's desk. When she was done, the medic gave her mentor's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. What would you like for lunch, Tsunade-sama? You're really too good to me, you know that. Tsunade replied as she watched her apprentice. The younger medic blushed a little and shrugged it off. Your face is all sweaty. Why don't you go to the restroom and wash it off? Some cold water will help you wake up as well, Shizune said as she turned and walked to the door. She paused just before she left, seeming to mull over something to say. After a moment, she glanced back with a smile and said, You may not believe it, Tsunade-sama, but you're worth being good to. Tsunade stared at the door long after her student left, mulling over the young woman's words. She finally shook it off and got up to visit the washroom. Shizune was right. The cold water shocked all the weariness right out of her and helped break up some of the leftover images from her dream. The fifth shuddered at the memory of the vile creature from her nightmare. Kami, she'd be glad when this day was over. She pulled a mission report from her pocket which she was sure Shizune had slipped into there at some point, and mulled over it as she left the bathroom. She'd fallen asleep as she was reading her paperwork, so she was still far from caught up with it. Stepping back into her office, Tsunade didn't look up from her report as she moved towards her desk. Son of a bitch. So that's how that blasted jutsu works. The goddime dropped her paper as she jerked her head up and stared at her desk. Someone, whom she didn't recognize at all, was sitting at her desk and poring over an open scroll. Tsunade's eyes almost bugged out when she recognized which scroll the person was reading and which skill he was talking about. The scroll of forbidden seals. The Shiki Fujin technique. Holy shit. Tsunade dropped into a fighting stance, though she didn't know why she bothered. The ninja in front of her didn't even look up as he traced his finger along the kanji script of the old paper in front of him. He did, however, give her a distracted wave as he continued to read. Heya, Ba-chan.